I was so broke I didn't even have enough money for a bus ticket. But here's the strange part. The richest people in the world were lining up just to give me money. Financial tycoons and billionaires worth tens of billions of dollars were actually competing to win the favor of a completely penniless guy like me. Sounds crazy, right? That's because it is. System notification, congratulations. Host, you have activated the ultimate poverty system. For the next 3 years, you are not allowed to own any assets. However, in exchange, you gain the ability to make anyone rich at an astonishing speed. And from that day on, the people sitting at the very top of the wealth pyramid treated me like an honored guest. Not only did they roll out the red carpet for me like I was some kind of VIP, they nearly turned on each other just for the chance to buy me a single meal. Congratulations, host. You have successfully bound the broke system, and from this moment forward, you are legally prohibited from possessing even a single cent of wealth, chimed a metallic, completely unbothered voice inside my head, instantly triggering an automated property clearance mode that made my jaw drop. Before I could even process what kind of cosmic joke a broke system was, the ruthless digital Grim Reaper began tallying its kills, effortlessly wiping out my WeChat balance of 79.2, liquidating my Alipay savings of 66.83, and draining my bank card of its final 91, leaving me with a grand total of absolute zero. Watching my meager life savings vanish into the digital ether, a wave of sheer panic washed over me as I stared at my phone, my expression twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage, as I internally screamed at this absolute dog of a system to give me my money back. Please do not be sad, host, the mechanical parasite replied with staggering audacity, calmly explaining that if I could just survive the next 3 years without a single penny to my name, I would be awarded a grand prize that would make me wealthier than an entire nation. I scoffed bitterly, asking the dog system if it even heard itself, because without a single cent in modern society, I was highly likely to starve to death inside my rented room within 3 miserable days, let alone 3 years. Sensing my impending existential crisis, the system magnanimously announced it had left me a loophole, materializing 5 mystical gold coins in my inventory space, while explaining that I could freely distribute them to others, to grant them explosive, rapid wealth, with the added bonus that I could snatch the coins back at any time to plunge the recipients straight into instantaneous bankruptcy. I couldn't help but laugh at my own luck. While other protagonists in these stories awaken billionaire sign-in systems that shower them with luxury sports cars, I get saddled with a financial black hole, forcing me to grab a literal iron rice bowl, step out of my cramped apartment, and march straight toward the bustling commercial street just to figure out how to secure dinner before my stomach digested itself. Standing amid the swirling crowds of the neon-lit shopping district, I ignored the judgmental, side-eye glances of passing shoppers, took a deep breath, and dropped to my knees with a crisp, echoing thud to begin my glamorous new career. Which kind-hearted soul will take pity on me and give me a bite to eat? I wailed, instantly drawing a colorful array of spectators, including a judgmental bystander who scoffed that a healthy young man with perfectly functioning limbs should be working instead of begging, and a predatory cougar who smirked, calling me handsome and subtly hinting that she had a nice warm meat sandwich waiting for me at her place if I played my cards right, which immediately prompted the surrounding crowd to whisper warnings about obvious human trafficking scams. Just as the chaotic street theater reached its peak, an exhausted-looking man in a sharply tailored business suit cut through the crowd. Pausing to stare at my pathetic display before doing something entirely unexpected, he pulled out every single piece of paper currency he had in his pockets and threw the crumpled pile directly into my iron bowl. The businessman sighed heavily, telling me to take the cash, find a proper job, and learn to rely on myself rather than others, casually mentioning that since his own company was on the brink of total bankruptcy, and he had lost all desire to live anyway, he might as well give his final earthly possessions to a stranger. Looking at the pile of cash, I realized my system constraints meant taking it would probably cause the universe to implode, so I looked up at him and said, "Bro, I don't want money. I literally just need a bite to eat. If you give me cash, I can't accept it, so a box of instant noodles would be great, but judging by your tone, it sounds like you've hit a massive wall." Promptly returning every single bill back into his hands, I hesitated for a moment before secretly channeling the system interface, pulling out one of my 5 mysterious gold coins, and pressing it into his palm, offering him a smirk while telling him that although I didn't know what kind of corporate hell he was enduring, this token would bring him undeniable good luck. The bewildered executive stared down at the heavy gold coin in complete confusion, sinking into deep thought, and by the time the mental gears finally turned, and he snapped out of his daze to look up, I had already vanished into the crowd like a mystical, broke phantom. Not even a minute later, the man's phone erupted with a frantic ring as his secretary shouted over the receiver, "Mr. Lin, our Lin group has found a miraculous turning point. This is absolutely incredible." Staring in absolute awe at the gleaming coin in his hand as the realization hit him like a freight train, Chairman Lin wondered if his sudden stroke of fortune was truly the work of that bizarre young beggar, prompting him to instantly order Secretary Li to arrange a celebratory banquet of the absolute highest, most luxurious standard. Hanging up the phone, Mr. Lin stared at the empty space where I had just been kneeling, muttering to himself that such perfect coincidences simply do not exist in this world, concluding that his corporate salvation was entirely thanks to his young friend, vowing that once he tracked me down, he would treat me as the ultimate savior of the entire Lin group. Meanwhile, I was wandering the streets, utterly famished, bitterly cursing my dog system for not giving me a proper heads-up before wiping my digital wallets so I could at least have hoarded a few survival boxes of instant noodles. Desperate times called for desperate measures, so I approached the grand, glittering entrance of the ultra-luxurious Lin Hotel, hoping to sneak into the back to see if there were any discarded kitchen leftovers to help me survive the oppressive summer heat, only to be abruptly blocked by a stern security guard who barked at me to stop right there, since the hotel was entirely closed to the general public for the day. "Bro, please have some mercy. I haven't eaten a single thing all day. Just let me go inside and scrounge for some kitchen scraps," I pleaded, causing the guard to look me up and down, and seeing the genuine exhaustion in my eyes. His professional facade cracked with a pang of sympathy as he hesitantly explained that it wasn't that he wanted to be cruel, but their big boss was hosting an incredibly important VIP banquet later, and if I got caught wandering the dining halls, he would instantly lose his livelihood. Understanding his plight, I nodded respectfully and prepared to turn around to find another dumpster to raid, but my peaceful retreat was shattered by a sharp, dripping with arrogance voice that shrilly demanded to know where the disgusting beggar had crawled out from. "Oh wait, isn't this Beggar? You actually had the absolute audacity to reject my confession back in college, and now look at what a pathetic loser you've become. You totally deserve this misery," sneered Lu Ruyan, my old classmate who was now dripping in designer clothes, as she imperiously ordered the guard to fetch 2 plain steamed buns from the kitchen under the guise of showing charity to an old-school acquaintance. The sympathetic guard quickly returned with the food, but just as he was about to hand them over to me, Lu Ruyan snatched the buns out of his hands with a malicious grin and threw them violently onto the dirty concrete floor. "Bei Yi, weren't you so incredibly proud and untouchable back on campus? Look at me now. I'm the manager of this entire luxury establishment, so consider these dirty buns my personal charity to a peasant now. Get down on all fours and eat them off the pavement," she cackled, staring at her smug, heavily made-up face and then down at the dust-covered buns on the ground. I swallowed my pride, rationalizing that dignity was a luxury for the well-fed and that as long as I survived these brutal 3 years, I could easily buy back every single ounce of self-respect I was losing today, so I dropped down and began frantically devouring the food directly off the floor. Right at that exact peak of maximum cinematic humiliation, the sharp, deafening screech of high-end brakes echoed across the driveway as a sleek luxury sedan swerved to a halt, and out stepped Mr. Lin himself, whose eyes instantly widened in horror as he witnessed the young man who had just saved his multi-million-dollar empire groveling on the asphalt. It was a scene straight out of a melodramatic anime recap, the legendary savior of the Lin Group, reduced to eating dirt-covered bread at the hands of a power-tripping middle manager, completely unaware that the big boss who viewed him as a deity had just arrived to catch his own staff committing corporate treason. Mr. Lin's face contorted into a mask of apocalyptic fury as he rushed forward, trembling as he cried out, "Benefactor, how on earth could you be here eating something like this?" Watching her untouchable, billionaire chairman bow with deep, shaking respect toward a homeless loser, while addressing him as his supreme savior completely shattered Lu Ruyan's reality. Her arrogant smirk froze instantly into a grotesque grimace as her brain short-circuited, frantically whispering to herself how it was humanly possible for a destitute beggar to be the chairman's revered benefactor. Hey bro, it's you again. Don't worry about it. I was just a little hungry and Manager Lu here was incredibly kind enough to reward me with these 2 steamed buns," I said, intentionally dripping my voice in heavy sarcasm to pour gasoline onto the absolute fire raging in Mr. Lin's eyes. As the chairman's sharp, murderous gaze locked onto the trembling manager, I smiled innocently and decided to twist the knife further, adding that Manager Lu was actually exceptionally thoughtful because she was terrified I would get terrible indigestion, so she deliberately threw the buns onto the ground to force me to eat on my stomach, claiming it significantly promotes healthy digestion. My words pierced deeply into Mr. Lin's honor like a collection of poisoned daggers, causing Lu Ruyan's face to turn a ghostly, deathly pale as she stammered, "See Chairman, please let me explain. I swear I didn't know. I really had no idea he was your," but her desperate pleas were cut short by a deafening roar from the executive, who ordered her to shut her mouth, declaring that she was instantly fired from the Lin Group, stripped of her managerial title, and banished from the property effective immediately. It was as if a bolt of lightning had struck her on the spot. Her legs buckled beneath her as she collapsed onto the ground, utterly ruined, unable to comprehend how her petty desire to humiliate a college crush had instantly cost her the entire career she had spent her life building. Ignoring her pathetic, weeping form as she begged for mercy, Mr. Lin turned to me with profound deference, gently guiding me past the threshold of the hotel and ushering me into a lavish dining suite where he personally served me, pleading with me to eat slowly and promising that the kitchen would prepare an endless stream of gourmet dishes because if it hadn't been for our encounter earlier that afternoon, the Lin Group would have been completely destroyed. Brother Lin, seriously, stop calling me benefactor. It's honestly getting a bit embarrassing. My name is just Bei Ye, so I take it your company actually managed to see a turning point? I asked through a mouthful of expensive food, prompting the billionaire to chuckle with boundless excitement, explaining that it was infinitely more than just a turning point because the very instant I handed him that mystical gold coin, His phone rang with news that a massive, crucial bank loan that had been completely frozen for over 6 agonizing months had suddenly been approved without a single hitch. As if saving his entire business empire wasn't enough, Chairman Lin leaned across the luxurious banquet table, his eyes gleaming with frantic excitement as he revealed that an overseas consortium had practically broken down his doors to negotiate a massive partnership, already wiring a staggering sum of earnest money directly into the company accounts, prompting him to emotionally declare me as nothing less than his second parent. Listening to his breathless gratitude, I couldn't help but secretly click my tongue in absolute astonishment. The sheer, reality-bending power of that single gold coin was undeniable, proving that while this atrocious broke system was a complete scam designed to ruin my life, those 5 mystical coins in my inventory were genuinely, mind-blowingly awesome. Maintaining my best mysterious, unbothered master facade, I casually waved off his praise with a smirk, telling Brother Lin that he was grossly exaggerating my role and that it was entirely his own prosperous aura that turned the tide, though I admitted I did have one rather presumptuous, slightly awkward request to make. The billionaire practically threw himself forward, begging me to speak my mind and swearing on his corporate honor that as long as it was within human capability, he would fulfill it without a single second thought, which made it all the more hilarious when I gestured to the leftover delicacies and asked if I could just pack the remaining food to go. A brief flash of confusion crossed his face before he eagerly agreed, barking orders to his staff to immediately package the premium leftovers in the most expensive, high-grade insulated food boxes available, while simultaneously offering me an entirely vacant, ultra-luxurious Riverview villa in the heart of the city as a token of his eternal gratitude. The moment the words left his mouth, I frantically waved my hands in a panic, rejecting the villa and any prospective luxury cars with a desperate intensity, not because I secretly harbor some saintly aversion to a billionaire lifestyle, but because the metallic, joy-killing voice of my internal parasite instantly flared up with a red alert warning, declaring that I possessed a dangerous tendency to acquire massive wealth, and that accepting this real estate gift would trigger a punitive mechanism of continuous, agonizing diarrhea for 3 straight days. Swallowing my tragic reality, I put on my best philosophical expression and lied through my teeth, telling him that I didn't assist him for worldly possessions and that I merely required a simple roof to shelter me from the elements and a basic bite to eat, suggesting that if he truly wished to repay me, he could just let me have the discarded leftovers from the hotel guests every day before, quickly catching myself and rephrasing it to sound slightly more dignified by asking for a simple boxed lunch made from surplus kitchen ingredients. This absolute display of forced asceticism completely blew Chairman Lin's mind, causing him to gaze at me as if I were a living deity, internally marveling at my supposedly noble character and my divine ability to treat limitless wealth like absolute dirt. Deeply moved, he solemnly vowed that from this day forward, my 3 daily meals would be fully covered by the elite culinary staff of the Lin Hotel, proudly announcing that he would issue an absolute mandate across his entire empire, ensuring I could dine whenever I pleased, effectively making my face as powerful as his own corporate seal. Yet, while I was securing my VIP soup kitchen status, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon as my vengeful college classmate, Liu Ruyan, stood outside the hotel, clutching her newly minted termination papers, her face twisted in a mask of pure malice as she hissed my name into her phone, vowing to make me pay 100-fold for ruining her life. On the other end of the line, a sleazy, high-ranking thug named Brother Wang answered with a disgusting chuckle, asking if his little beauty was missing him again and inviting her over for a special, highly suggestive late-night drink, to which she desperately agreed, promising to play whatever depraved games he wanted as long as he deployed his criminal muscle to utterly break a certain someone. Hanging up the phone, her flattering, sycophantic smile vanished into a chilling, dead-eyed stare fixed on the path I had taken, her mind warped by the delusion that I was the sole architect of her sudden downfall, as she muttered that she would ensure I tasted a fate far worse than death itself. Oblivious to the incoming storm, I strolled back to my rundown apartment, feeling a sense of profound relief that the most fundamental hurdle of human survival had been cleared, foolishly contemplating how smoothly the next 3 years of my mandated poverty would go, only for my deep philosophical thoughts to be shattered by a violent, earth-shattering bang as my front door was aggressively kicked open. I leaped backward in sheer shock, internally screaming at the absurdity of my existence because despite being a guy who literally cannot afford basic rent, I am somehow highly valued by the chairman of a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, entitled to free VIP dining privileges, and apparently moving chess pieces that involve vengeful beauties plotting my demise, all because of a single magical coin. My grand delusions of grandeur were instantly popped like a balloon by the furious, vein-popping scream of my landlady, who stormed into the cramped room demanding her 3 months of overdue rent immediately or threatening to hurl me into the street. Staring down the barrel of her wrath, a cold sweat broke out across my forehead as I realized my pockets were currently cleaner than my freshly washed face, causing me to internally curse the dog system for stripping my bank accounts, because if I didn't formulate a miraculous excuse right now, I would be sleeping on the cold asphalt by nightfall. Desperate, I tried to telepathically summon my mechanical overlord for a quick loan, only for a smug digital chime to ring out, coldly reminding me that the system strictly forbids providing any financial assistance during the 3-year trial period and ordering me to fend for my pathetic self. swearing eternal vengeance on the artificial intelligence in my head. I turned back to the landlady with the most pitiable, puppy dog eyes I could muster, pleading for a 3-year grace period and promising to repay her 100-fold, a pitch that was immediately met with a ferocious barrage of colorful curses. She screamed that my 3-year promise was absolute garbage and ordered me to pack my trash and get out right now, revealing that her entire building had just been purchased for a premium price by the massive Lin Group, meaning she didn't even care about my missing rent anymore. She just needed me gone immediately, so the incoming corporate executives wouldn't see a filthy vagrant stinking up her freshly sold property. The moment the words Lin Group echoed through the room, my eyes instantly lit up with the brilliant fires of hope, and I proudly declared that this was a spectacular misunderstanding because I actually happened to be personal acquaintances with the legendary Mr. Lin himself. The landlady let out a mocking, breathless laugh, jeering that a broke, rent-defaulting loser like me couldn't possibly comprehend the social circles of a billionaire, mocking my claims until I confidently reached into my pocket to pull out my phone to call him, only for a wave of icy horror to wash over me as I realized I had been so utterly focused on stuffing my face with luxury leftovers that I completely forgot to save the chairman's phone number. Seeing my sudden, paralyzed silence, the landlady's smirk returned with a vengeance as she taunted my failed bluff, completely losing the last shreds of her patience as she began grabbing my meager earthly belongings and tossing them out the door like actual garbage. She ranted about how a guy who couldn't even scrounge up a few $100 for rent could never move in the same stratosphere as Chairman Lin, screeching that today both I and my pathetic pile of trash were leaving her sight permanently, while I frantically scrambled to protect my cheap, prized possessions, begging her to calm down so we could talk this out like civilized adults. Neither of us, however, noticed a tall, imposing figure in a perfectly tailored black suit who had been quietly standing in the dimly lit hallway for quite some time, absorbing every single ounce of the humiliating drama unfolding before him until he finally couldn't bear the injustice any longer. "Stop this at once." A commanding voice boomed through the corridor as Mr. Lin himself slowly stepped into the cramped apartment, his face a mixture of deep sorrow and profound guilt as he lamented that it was entirely his own thoughtless fault for forgetting to leave his personal contact information with his revered savior. I watched in stunned silence as the multi-millionaire walked past the frozen landlady, approached me with immense reverence, and bowed so deeply his torso was parallel to the floor, apologizing profusely for his lack of foresight and explaining that he had originally authorized the premium purchase of this entire residential building for the sole purpose of waiving my rent entirely, never anticipating that his corporate maneuver would subject his benefactor to such wretched humiliation. Turning his razor-sharp, freezing gaze toward the trembling woman, Mr. Lin coldly announced that the Lin Group was officially canceling the real estate acquisition effective immediately, promising to utilize every single one of his immense political and commercial connections to ensure her building became an untransferable, worthless black hole that could never be sold to another soul for the rest of her natural life. Hearing her life-changing payday vanish into thin air, the landlady's face drained of all color as panic seized her throat, causing her to stammer out desperate apologies, claiming she had absolutely no idea this poor kid was backed by the almighty Lin Group, and swearing that she wouldn't have dared to touch a single hair on my head if she had known. Ignoring her pathetic sniveling entirely, Chairman Lin turned back to me with a look of pure devotion, reaching into his breast pocket to extract a gleaming, heavy set of keys which he presented to me on both hands, respectfully offering me the deed to yet another sprawling, hyper-luxurious villa for free. Before I could even mentally celebrate my sudden housing upgrade, the demonic system interface flashed violently in my vision with a terrifying digital ding, warning me that if the host dared to accept this extravagant gift, my physical male anatomy would be permanently shortened by several agonizing centimeters. I internally wept, cursing the dog system as the ultimate, inescapable stumbling block on my glorious road to success, before forcing a peaceful, transcendental smile onto my face, gently pushing the keys away while spinning a lie about how wealth is merely a fleeting, worldly possession and that I, Bei Yi, simply desired a modest, uncomplicated place to rest my weary head. Having survived decades in the cutthroat shark tank of the business world, Mr. Lin's eyes widened in instant comprehension, misinterpreting my terror-induced refusal as the ultimate sign of a hidden, profound master who completely transcended the petty desires of the mortal world. Watching the gears turn behind Chairman Lin's eyes, I could practically see the anime-style lightbulb shatter above his head as he came to the brilliant, wildly incorrect conclusion that I was a legendary ascetic master, deliberately hiding my identity to temper my soul through a forced vow of absolute poverty. Capitalizing on his own delusions, the corporate tycoon offered a sly wink, suggesting that since his luxurious Riverview villa was merely sitting empty anyway, he could simply rent the sprawling estate to me for the heavily discounted market price of exactly 1 yuan a month, magnanimously adding that I could completely hold off on the payments until whenever it was convenient for me to settle the tab. Smirking at his sheer tactical genius, I casually shrugged and remarked that it was all the same to me wherever I chose to rest my head, pocketing the heavy silver keys and walking out the door with a beaming Chairman Lin, leaving behind a completely paralyzed landlady who was now drowning in oceans of immediate financial regret. As we pulled up to the breathtaking property, the billionaire humbly downplayed the estate as an old, worthless shack, asking with deep respect if a single yuan a month met my high standards, which caused me to internally chuckle at how brilliantly he had outmaneuvered my mechanical tormentor. I mean, renting a literal mansion for less than the price of a piece of chewing gum is a move worthy of a Nobel Prize in economics. Turning my gaze inward, I smugly taunted the silent, defeated broke system, pointing out that it had absolutely nothing to say this time around, while I openly admired the hyper-polished marble floors, which were so brilliantly shiny, I could see my own hilariously broke reflection staring back at me. Not bad at all, Brother Lin, I announced with a mystical nod. This is exactly the kind of quiet, spiritual cultivation spot I was looking for. But before I could even test out the couch, the chairman clapped his hands, prompting a small army of imposing figures clad in sharp black suits to materialize from the shadows, bowing in absolute, synchronized perfection as their booming voices echoed across the estate to greet me. Seeing my raised eyebrow, Chairman Lin proudly explained that these were the absolute elite forces of the Lin Group's private security apparatus, declaring that they would be permanently stationed around the perimeter to guarantee my absolute safety, eagerly reassuring me that the company would fully absorb their staggering salaries and accommodation costs so I wouldn't have to spend a single cent of my non-existent money. To my absolute horror, a familiar digital chime echoed in my skull as the system popped up a notification, highly approving of my massively increased environmental safety factor, forcing me to mentally scream at the useless AI that this hyper-exaggerated paramilitary lineup was completely ridiculous, because walking down to the local convenience store to buy a pack of cheap, spicy strips was now going to look like a full-blown mafia turf war. Just as I was subtly complaining to Brother Lin that deploying an elite Black Ops squad for an ordinary civilian was a bit too much, he fiercely shook his head, insisting that my precious life was worth more than the universe itself, and that if I lost even a single strand of hair under his watch, it would be a shameful, unforgivable dereliction of his corporate duty. Right on cue, the peaceful atmosphere was shattered by the obnoxious, high-pitched screech of burning tires as a trashy sedan swerved onto the property, and outstepped my favorite terminated hotel manager, Liu Ruyan, shrieking like a banshee to her muscle-bound thug boyfriend, Brother Wang, that I was the exact penniless loser responsible for destroying her career, and that he needed to brutally cripple me on the spot. Strutting forward with comical arrogance, the local gang leader cracked his knuckles, sneering at me for daring to lay a finger on his woman and demanding to know if I had ever bothered to ask around these streets about his terrifying reputation before promising to permanently end my existence right then and there. Before the thug could even finish his villainous monologue, the lead security captain stepped out from the shadows like a final boss, his imposing frame casting a massive shadow over the intruders as he coldly asked exactly who it was they planned on crippling today. I breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that if it weren't for Chairman Lin's absurdly thorough security arrangements, I might have actually ended up as a permanent stain on my own rented driveway. Instead, I got to watch the color instantly drain from Brother Wang's face as he realized he hadn't brought enough guys to fight a literal corporate army. His tough guy persona disintegrated instantly as his knees began to buckle, his forehead dripping with thick beads of cold sweat while he stammered that the whole thing was an absolute, beautiful misunderstanding, and that his gang had actually just marched onto the property to do some spontaneous community charity work and deliver winter warmth. The completely brainless Liu Ruyan, entirely incapable of reading a room, angrily yanked on his arm and demanded to know why he was acting like a coward when they still had the backing of the legendary underworld boss, Brother Long, prompting the terrified thug to violently shout at her to shut her mouth, internally cursing her lack of survival instincts since even running with the King of Heaven wouldn't save them from being outnumbered 10-1. Big bro, this foolish little brother had eyes but utterly failed to recognize Mount Tai. We will get lost right this second, Wang whimpered, turning to flee, only to find his path instantly blocked by a wall of muscle, as the lead captain growled that they couldn't just walk away after deeply disturbing the peace of Mr. Bai Yi. With a crisp, echoing thud, the terrifying gangster dropped straight to his knees, begging for his life and shamelessly throwing his crazy girlfriend under the bus by claiming the entire assault was her twisted instigation, all while desperately pleading for mercy by invoking the name of his supreme boss, Brother Long of the East City. Brother Long? Never heard of him, I muttered, casually strolling past the kneeling thugs toward Liu Ruyan, my eyes gleaming with a highly amused, playful look as I asked my former classmate why she simply refused to ever learn her lesson. Trembling like a leaf, she stared up at me in absolute horror, her voice cracking as she begged to know who and what I secretly was. But instead of breaking my mysterious aura, I maintained a dramatic, cinematic silence for a few seconds before offering a brilliant humble brag, softly confessing that I was really just a spectacularly broke guy who couldn't even afford a basic bus ride. The moment the words left my lips, the entire battalion of black-suited elites bowed in unison yet again, their booming voices wishing me a wonderful, restful evening as they dragged the intruders away. Though the drama was far from over because a few hours later, a heavily bruised and deeply humiliated Brother Wang was groveling on the floor of a smoky underground den, weeping to a terrifying, cigar-chomping crime lord. Wang spun a wildly embellished tale to Lord Long, crying that the mysterious Bai Yi hadn't just beaten his men, but had actively insulted Long's entire criminal legacy, declaring that a master must look at the owner before striking the dog, which successfully ignited the underground boss's temper as he slammed his fist on the table, vowing to hunt down this arrogant nobody who dared to cross him at such a critical juncture in his operations. Meanwhile, back in the real world, a sudden, inexplicable chill ran down my spine, giving me an ominous premonition that my roller coaster life was about to take another ridiculous turn for the worse. And honestly, my intuition was flawless. You can take the guy out of the gutter and put him in a mansion with a private army, but at heart, I was still so painfully broke that I spent my afternoon stroll actively agonizing over whether I could buy a simple 3 yuan ice cream cone from the corner store without the paranoid system flagging it as an accumulation of massive wealth. Lost in my deep financial existential dread, I never even saw the unmarked van creeping up behind me until a black cloth bag was violently jammed over my head, causing me to internally scream about the absolute lack of law and order in broad daylight while wondering where on earth my highly paid bodyguards were. As it turned out, those poor, hyper-disciplined security guards were currently back in the villa's garden, undergoing intensive, military-grade training on how to elegantly present spicy strips to me on a silver platter, completely oblivious to the fact that their elite VIP asset had just been stuffed into a trunk like a sack of potatoes. When the bag was finally ripped off my head, I found myself tied to a chair in a dark, imposing warehouse, staring directly into the cold eyes of Lord Long himself. But instead of panicking like a normal kidnap victim, my bizarre life experience allowed me to instantly see right through his tough exterior and spot the deep, agonizing stress of a man facing a massive bottleneck in his criminal career. "Are you this famous Beggar I've been hearing about?" the boss growled, to which I simply nodded with an unbothered smirk, casually asking if he was here to conduct some legitimate business with me, and if he had bothered to schedule an official appointment beforehand. A nearby henchman immediately lunged forward, barking at me for my insolent tone, while Lord Long raised a hand, warning me that a young punk shouldn't be too arrogant after crossing his syndicate, prompting me to casually scratch my head as I tried to remember who he was talking about until my eyes landed on a smugly grinning Brother Wang, standing in the corner, causing the pieces of this ridiculous puzzle to finally click together. Staring dead into the eyes of the city's most feared underground kingpin, I leaned back in my restraints with a lazily amused smirk and asked if he was referring to the loudly barking stray dog cowering in the corner, effortlessly turning the interrogation on its head by noting that while his warehouse headquarters was decorated with surprisingly elegant sophistication and the tea was undeniably premium, it was a massive pity. And then I abruptly paused mid-sentence just to enjoy the magnificent flash of utter confusion that rippled across Lord Long's hardened face. When the crime boss demandingly barked to know exactly what was a pity, I leaned forward with a look of supreme perception, casually revealing that it was a pity. His mind was entirely devoid of peace, weighed down heavily by a dark, lingering murderous intent that stemmed from his desperate, failed attempts to wash his hands of the underworld, while his feet remained hopelessly stuck in the criminal mud. As his eyes widened in sheer shock, he demanded to know if I had spent months conducting a secret investigation into his private life to uncover his desperate, blocked attempts at corporate transition, but I merely let out a soft, sarcastic chuckle, letting him know that a hopelessly broke guy like me didn't have the luxury of time for espionage and that I simply moonlights as a casual fortune teller on the side. Before his henchman could process my audacity, I dramatically rubbed my fingers together in the dim warehouse light, performing a flawless, anime-esque magic trick that caused a blindingly shiny gold coin to materialize out of thin air between my fingertips as I casually mentioned that his spiritual career line was completely blocked and in dire need of cosmic luck. The utterly brainless Brother Wang, completely blind to the reality-warping artifact right in front of him, instantly sneered with absolute disdain, loudly jeering that my brain must be completely malfunctioning if I thought a worthless piece of scrap metal could buy off or trick a billionaire crime lord, frantically urging Lord Long to let his thugs bleed me a little just to teach me some proper manners. Yet, despite the thugs' desperate shouting, Lord Long was completely paralyzed, his entire consciousness utterly captivated and drawn into the mystical glow of the coin as I casually flipped the token through the air with a crisp command to catch it, coolly telling him that because I liked his vibe, I was granting him a direct, VIP pass to go straight. The second the heavy gold coin hit his subconscious, receptive palm, a literal warm current of raw cosmic energy surged up his arm, instantly evaporating years of pent-up corporate frustration and spiritual stagnation from his chest, forcing the bewildered godfather to look down at the magical token and wonder if this incredible piece of metal was truly capable of solving his life's bottlenecks. Smirking with supreme, unshakable confidence, I confirmed his suspicions, watching his skepticism melt away into profound awe, before I casually dropped a friendly, highly calculated hint that he should probably clean his corporate house first, pointing an accusing finger directly at Brother Wang, while noting that keeping incompetent, loud-mouthed idiots around would only drag down his legitimate business transition. Wang instantly panicked, screeching that I was nothing but a deceptive trickster, playing cheap parlor games, but before his desperate rant could escalate into violence, Lord Long's personal phone erupted with a piercing ring, shattering the warehouse silence. The room grew deathly quiet as the crime boss listened to his receiver, his jaw slowly dropping to the floor as his associates frantically informed him that his hopelessly stalled government approval documents had miraculously sailed through the red tape and that his fiercest overseas corporate rivals had, suddenly, voluntarily withdrawn from the multi-million-dollar bidding war. Hanging up the phone with trembling hands, the underground emperor looked at the gleaming coin, then back at my perfectly unbothered, smiling face, and the grand realization hit him like a lightning bolt. He immediately cupped his fists, bowed so deeply his forehead nearly touched his knees, and loudly swore that from this moment onward, my business was his business, and anyone foolish enough to cross me would be crossing the entire fury of his syndicate. I internally cheered at how easily I had secured yet another incredibly powerful, long-term meal ticket, a deeply loyal and steadfast ally, while Lord Long whirled around with eyes that had turned into absolute ice, roaring at his subordinates to violently hurl Brother Wang, Lu Ruyan, and their pathetic lackeys completely out of the city limits, so they would never disrupt my peace again. The warehouse erupted into frantic screams of terror as Brother Wang dropped to his knees, weeping and begging for his life, while entirely blaming the crazy bitch next to him for bewitching his mind. But his cries were utterly ignored as Lord Long broadcasted a terrifying decree throughout the entire state that crossing the mysterious Mr. Bai Ye meant certain death. This massive declaration sent absolute shockwaves through the highest echelons of the criminal underworld, leaving every major boss frantically speculating about the true identity of this untouchable new entity, all while I was being escorted to a fleet of pristine luxury vehicles like a visiting royalty. I couldn't help but offer a dry, sarcastic quip to my new underworld brother, asking if his men were going to throw a suffocating burlap sack over my head for the return trip, prompting a horrified Lord Long to frantically wave his hands, sweating profusely as he swore it was all an unforgivable misunderstanding, and begged me not to harbor any lingering grudges. Surrounded by a high-end motorcade of elite mobsters, I was respectfully chauffeured back to my villa, but the cosmic comedy didn't stop there because the very second I departed, Lord Long's phone rang yet again, this time revealing the icy, authoritative voice of Chairman Lin himself, who demanded to know the gangster's price under the strict condition that not a single hair on my head be harmed. The Godfather quickly and frantically cleared up the misunderstanding, explaining that I was currently being treated as his supreme spiritual savior, causing the billionaire tycoon to finally exhale in profound relief, while secretly marveling at my absolute god-tier abilities to effortlessly subdue the literal emperor of the concrete jungle. Unfortunately, the universe apparently loves to strike twice, because despite now having both the legal corporate world and the illegal underworld entirely wrapped around my finger, my underlying physical reality was still a total disaster. A few days later, while out for an innocent afternoon stroll, the severe, long-term malnutrition caused by my system-mandated poverty caught up to me, causing my vision to spin violently before I fainted face-first onto the hot city asphalt. The surrounding crowd instantly erupted into a hysterical panic, with one absolute idiot screaming that a sniper was active, while a slightly more rational bystander yelled at everyone to stop, causing chaos and quickly call an ambulance for the unconscious kid. Through the haze of the panicked crowd, a vigorous, dignified, elderly gentleman dressed in a simple, traditional tang suit pushed his way forward, gently checking my pulse before muttering in deep concern about my profound deficiency of both chi and blood, openly wondering how a young man could possibly let his physical vessel become so horrifyingly depleted. When my heavy eyelids finally fluttered open, my disoriented brain genuinely wondered if I had successfully passed away and ascended to a heavenly paradise, where all-you-can-eat deluxe box lunches were completely free, only for the old man to offer a warm, comforting smile and reveal that I was actually resting safely inside his medical clinic after he personally carried me away from the street. He gently asked how many weeks it had been since I had consumed a proper, nutritious meal, prompting me to sigh heavily and confess that it was a terribly long, system-ruined story, offering my deepest thanks for his life-saving intervention while awkwardly admitting that I didn't possess a single cent to pay for the medical treatment. The saintly physician immediately brushed off my financial anxieties, stating that saving lives was merely a doctor's sacred duty, though he noted with a melancholy sigh that I seemed to be a man carrying a heavy, complicated history, before lamenting that if only his lifelong medical research could finally achieve a breakthrough, perhaps there would be far fewer innocent people in this cruel world tormented by the twin evils of terminal illness and systemic poverty. My ears instantly perked up at the mention of the word research, prompting me to curiously press him for details, which led the legendary medical authority to reveal that he had devoted his entire earthly existence to discovering a cure for a terrifying, completely incurable rare ailment known to the world as X-gene syndrome. The emotional atmosphere inside the sterile, dimly lit medical clinic grew immensely heavy as the venerable old physician stared blankly into the distance, his voice cracking with a decades-old grief as he confessed that his own beloved daughter had tragically succumbed to the exact same, incurable X-gene syndrome, leaving him to spend his twilight years desperately fighting a losing battle against time and a completely depleted research budget right at the absolute, most critical bottleneck of his final trial phase. Listening to this heartbreaking revelation, a flash of recognition washed over me as I realized that this perfect, textbook tragic backstory was practically shouting at me to act, confirming that my third mystical, reality-bending gold coin had officially selected its rightful owner. With a solemn, cinematic determination, I gripped the heavy token in my pocket and looked into the tired eyes of the medical legend, assuring Elder Chen with absolute sincerity that he was destined for an epoch-making success, a hopeful statement that the exhausted doctor merely brushed off with a bitter sigh, claiming that both precious time and dwindling resources were no longer on his side. Taking a deep breath, I confidently slipped the gleaming golden artifact directly into his weathered hand, which prompted the completely bewildered old man to gasp and ask what kind of extravagant treasure I was forcing upon him. "This isn't mere currency, Elder Chen. It is a physical manifestation of absolute belief," I declared with a cool, enigmatic smirk, telling him that this token would manifest an undeniable cosmic turning point, not just for the memory of his departed daughter, but for the thousands of helpless, suffering patients who might be saved across the globe in the future. As his fingers wrapped around the heavy, strangely warm gold piece, an inexplicable, electrifying current of raw hope surged through his veins, causing a brilliant spark that had been brutally extinguished for decades to suddenly flicker back to life within his chest, as he stared in absolute awe from the glowing coin to my fiercely confident, unbothered expression. Deeply moved, Chen Jingren choked back tears and tightly clutched the token, declaring that he would accept this grand token of faith and swearing that if my miraculous words actually held true, I would forever be revered as the supreme, eternal benefactor of his entire lineage and every future patient on Earth. Having successfully survived my sudden bout of street fainting and dispensed my third cosmic booster shot, I finally arrived back at the perimeter of my rented villa, only to be immediately ambushed by my hyper-vigilant, black-suited private security squad, who practically fell to their knees in a state of sheer, unadulterated panic. The frantic captain breathlessly pleaded with me to never sneak out into the city alone again, desperately explaining that the entire elite department had nearly suffered a collective mental breakdown trying to locate me, adding with a terrified shudder that Chairman Lin had actively threatened to deport the entire security team to a desolate coal mine in darkest Africa if so much as a single scratch was found on his revered savior. I could only offer a sheepish, highly sarcastic grin, awkwardly waving my hands while doling out the ultimate classic anime reassurance that I would definitely, totally let them tag along next time around. Right at that exact, comedic peak of our conversation, Elder Chen's personal phone inside the nearby clinic began ringing so rapidly and violently it sounded like a frantic machine gun, forcing the old doctor to answer it in utter bewilderment. His jaw slowly dropped as the breathless voices of his research assistants blasted through the receiver, frantically shouting that an overseas mega-medical foundation which had cold-heartedly rejected their funding applications for years had suddenly, aggressively contacted the lab to authorize a massive, completely interest-free multi-million-dollar grant, closely followed by the even more mind-blowing news that Dr. Li had just suffered a sudden, miraculous burst of divine inspiration and successfully cracked the hyper-complex gene target that had kept their laboratory entirely paralyzed for 3 agonizing years. God bless the ancient arts of medicine, the legendary physician roared in absolute ecstasy, immediately realizing the source of this impossible chain of events as he spun around to lock eyes with me, passionately crying out that this was the undeniable, reality-bending miracle brought forth by Benefactor Bei and his mystical token. I merely offered a relaxed, philosophical chuckle, smoothly redirecting the praise by telling Elder Chen that it was his own lifetime of relentless perseverance and academic accumulation that had finally moved the heavens, casting myself as nothing more than a humble mailman, delivering a stroke of well-deserved good luck. The weeping doctor fiercely shook his head, vowing that from this moment onward, my physical well-being was under his absolute, personal medical dictatorship, swearing on his professional life that as long as he drew breath, he would never allow my body to suffer from even a minor cold, a profound declaration that instantly triggered a triumphant digital chime inside my skull. The Broke System's mechanical interface flashed to life, happily announcing that because Elder Chen's gratitude parameter had shattered the 95% threshold, an invisible cosmic luck-binding protocol had been officially activated, creating an impenetrable, automated health security system for the host. As the digital matrix updated itself, I couldn't help but smirk at my own ridiculous luck. I had successfully secured a multi-billionaire as a permanent VIP soup kitchen, an elite paramilitary squad as my personal safety advisors, and a legendary medical authority as my immortal health consultant, making this supposedly torturous financial curse of a system look like a pretty spectacular gig after all. However, while I was basking in the glorious joy of my newly acquired immortal health insurance, the atmosphere over at the Lin Group's corporate headquarters had turned into a suffocating, apocalyptic nightmare. High up in the ultra-luxurious, top-floor executive boardroom, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife as a smug, extraordinarily punchable young billionaire named Young Master Zhao casually tossed a brutal acquisition contract onto the glass table, sneering maliciously at a visibly sweating Chairman Lin. Zhao arrogantly taunted that the Lin Group's capital chain was completely shattered and that outside of his own wealthy family cartel, absolutely no one in the modern world possessed the financial capital to save his dying empire, coldly warning the elder businessman to sign over his life's work immediately so he could scrounge together enough pity money to retire in relative obscurity before his entire stock portfolio was aggressively shorted into absolute oblivion. Refusing to be broken, Chairman Lin slammed his fists on the desk, fiercely accusing the young punk of taking a brutally predatory advantage of his temporary corporate misfortune, only for Zhao to let out a cruel, mocking laugh and begin a slow, terrifying countdown from 3 to seal his financial doom. But right as the arrogant tycoon uttered the number 2, the massive double doors of the boardroom were violently hurled open with a thunderous crash as I frantically sprinted into the high-stakes corporate battlefield, screaming at the top of my lungs that Brother Lin was facing a catastrophic, code-red emergency. Young Master Zhao leaped back in utter disgust, loudly demanding to know what kind of filthy, unwashed beggar had managed to bypass the building's defenses and shrieking for immediate security intervention. But his dramatic outburst was instantly cut short as Chairman Lin sprung from his executive leather chair, his eyes widening in profound reverence as he rushed forward to ask what supreme, earth-shattering instructions his revered benefactor had brought to the table. I paid absolutely no attention to the high-stakes financial negotiation happening around me, desperately shoving my beat-up smartphone directly into the billionaire's bewildered face, while frantically begging him to scan the digital code on my screen as quickly as humanly possible. The entire room of elite executives went deathly silent, their minds instantly racing as they frantically theorized that I was delivering a priceless, top-secret commercial document or an economy-altering digital contract capable of completely turning the global tide, prompting a sweating Chairman Lin to squint at the screen with bated breath only to find himself staring at a standard mobile application for a public shared bicycle. The digital lock on this absolute nightmare of a rental bike is completely broken, and if I don't scan this code and officially terminate the ride this exact second, the management company is going to maliciously slap me with a 3 yuan hourly out-of-bounds dispatch fee. I wailed in genuine, system-induced agony, furiously demanding that the multi-billionaire immediately assist me in paying the missing 1.5 yuan, since my own digital pockets were totally barren. The entire boardroom collectively lost its mind. The executives stared in absolute, open-mouthed paralysis, utterly incapable of comprehending how a human being could violently hijack a multi-billion-dollar corporate acquisition summit just to beg a tycoon for less than a single quarter. Yet, where normal people saw an insane hobo, Chairman Lin's hyper-imaginative, master-worshipping brain saw a display of absolute, transcendent enlightenment. His eyes flashed with profound realization as he internally deduced that his saintly savior was delivering a brilliant, metaphorical lesson, warning him to maintain an unyielding reverence for the value of every single penny and to never lose his emotional composure in the face of a temporary funding shortage. Tears of corporate enlightenment practically welled in the billionaire's eyes as he frantically nodded, shouting that he fully understood the divine lesson and eagerly promising to not only settle the 1.5 yuan fee immediately, but to purchase a lifetime premium membership for my bicycle account. The absolute second the word membership echoed through the room, the terrifying, metallic alarm of the broke system blasted inside my head, strictly warning me that accepting a long-term luxury asset like a prepaid membership would result in an immediate punitive deduction of every single hair on my scalp. No, stop, don't you dare. I screamed in a panicked frenzy, fiercely grabbing Lin's shoulders and ordering him to pay exactly 1.5 yuan and not a single microcent more, threatening to unleash an unholy rage upon him if he dared to overpay the rental company. Watching this bizarre display of forced poverty, young Master Zhao let out a booming theatrical laugh of pure derision, mocking Chairman Lin for actively relying on a stinking, pathetic street beggar who couldn't even afford a basic bicycle ride and jeering that the Lin Group truly deserved to burn if its leader preferred to grovel before literal human garbage rather than sign his salvation contract. The word trash caused a deadly, suffocating silence to instantly fall over the room as Chairman Lin's expression morphed into a mask of pure, unadulterated cold fury. He locked eyes with the arrogant air and thundered that the contract negotiations were officially dead, proudly declaring that even if his beloved Lin Group completely dissolved into absolute bankruptcy today and forced him to beg for scraps on the concrete streets, he would never, under any circumstances, allow a spoiled punk to insult his sacred benefactor. Completely stunned by this display of commercial suicide, Zhao's face twisted in rage as he bellowed that Lin had lost his goddamn mind, fiercely snapping his fingers to summon his private phalanx of heavily armed security guards while screaming that since the old man had selected a death wish, none of them would be leaving this skyscraper alive, ordering his thugs to violently shatter my legs and hurl my body out into the gutter. Looking around the boardroom with an amused, completely unbothered sigh, I casually remarked to Brother Lin that his corporate security protocols were shockingly lacking if any random, loudmouthed stray dog could just wander onto the executive floor and start making physical threats. Chairman Lin merely offered a calm, darkly confident smirk, reassuring me that he had already deployed the necessary countermeasures, and before the words could even fully exit his mouth, a thunderous, rhythmic series of synchronized footsteps began booming from the lower levels, causing the entire concrete skyscraper to vibrate like a minor earthquake. Down on the asphalt below, the entire corporate avenue had been completely locked down by a massive, endless fleet of sleek black luxury sedans, out of which poured a literal army of burly, stone-faced mobsters clad in matching black suits and menacing dark sunglasses, forming a terrifying paramilitary square formation in the center of the district. Standing at the absolute vanguard of this underworld armada was none other than the legendary crime kingpin, Lord Long, who adjusted his sunglasses and unleashed an earth-shattering roar up toward the executive floor, fiercely bellowing that if the pathetic Zhao cartel dared to touch a single strand of hair on Mr. Beye's head, he would personally spend his afternoon digging up their entire family's ancestral graves. Hearing the unmistakable, terrifying voice of the city's undisputed underworld emperor echoing through the concrete jungle, young Master Zhao's tough guy facade completely shattered into a million pieces, his knees violently knocking together as he stared at me in absolute, wide-eyed horror, frantically whispering to his trembling aides to find out what kind of terrifying god was masquerading as a penniless cyclist. Seizing the absolute peak of the dramatic tension, I slowly stepped across the boardroom toward the paralyzed heir, narrowing my eyes with a chillingly playful smirk as I casually noted that his spiritual glabella had turned completely pitch black and his eyes were entirely devoid of life, marking the classic cosmic symptom of a man destined to lose his entire earthly wealth just to narrowly avoid an impending disaster. Before the trembling billionaire could even ask what kind of dark, supernatural curse I had just placed upon his bloodline, I merely shrugged and offered a smug, highly sarcastic grin, letting him know that I hadn't actually done anything to him directly, but that I simply didn't like the look of his arrogant face. Right on cue, the heavy double doors flew open yet again as Zhao's personal chief of staff sprinted into the room in a state of absolute, crying hysterics, screaming at the top of his lungs that catastrophic news had just broken from the Federal Regulatory Bureau. The breathless assistant wailed that a sudden, massive surprise government raid had just targeted their family headquarters, uncovering a staggering $10 billion tax evasion conspiracy that resulted in his billionaire father being dragged away in handcuffs, every single corporate bank account being frozen by the state, and their entire family empire being completely annihilated in a matter of seconds. As the ruined young Master Zhao collapsed onto the floor in a comatose state of absolute financial shock, I casually turned my back on the destruction, giving a relaxed nod to a starstruck Chairman Lin and asking if he had officially processed that crucial 1.5 yuan bicycle payment, cheekily reminding him that the local supermarket chain always charges a ridiculous premium for third-party digital transactions. Staring at my retreating figure with a look of pure, religious worship, Chairman Lin internally marveled at the divine, terrifying grandeur of a true hidden master, a legendary entity capable of casually laughing while turning a multi-billion-dollar family empire into absolute ash in a single afternoon, yet whose pure, enlightened soul still genuinely only cared about the humble livelihood of a single $1.50. Walking out of the corporate ruins surrounded by bowing executives chanting their eternal farewells to the great Mr. Bai Yi, I let out a soft, amused sigh through my nose, muttering to myself about how remarkably exhausting it was to survive as a legitimately poor person in modern high society, though I smiled as I checked my pockets, happily noting that the complimentary mints I had secretly swiped from the Billionaires conference table actually tasted pretty fantastic. I really should have grabbed a whole handful of those free conference room mints when I had the chance, because as much as my jinx of a mouth had beautifully shattered the Zhao Group's entire capital chain in a single afternoon, it didn't do anything to fill my violently growling stomach. Naturally, rather than accepting defeat gracefully, the desperate Zhao cartel had immediately retaliated by hiring a massive, coordinated online army of paid internet trolls to flood the digital space with toxic rumors, trying to smear the Lin Group into oblivion. But as the literal epicenter of this brewing high-tech corporate storm, I was currently prioritizing survival by hiding out in a dimly lit, thoroughly sketchy internet cafe that charged a glorious 2.5 yuan an hour, purely to mooch off their freezing air conditioning. My internal monologue was a chaotic mess of financial paranoia, reminding me that while my rented villa had top-tier AC, the electricity bill would be catastrophic, and if my digital funds ticked up even a fraction, this demonic broke system would probably strike me down with a high-voltage penalty shock for exceeding my wealth limit. Thus, a dingy cyber cafe was the ultimate tactical haven. 2.5 yuan for an entire afternoon of freezing bliss was the absolute pinnacle of elite, cost-effective budgeting. As I was leaning back and savoring the good life, a sudden explosion of shouting erupted from the corner of the room where the cafe's irritated proprietor was aggressively grabbing a scrawny, disheveled kid by his collar, screaming that if he had zero money, he had absolutely no business occupying a computer, and ordered him to get the hell out before ruining the establishment's profits. The desperate kid was practically weeping, clawing at the desk as he begged the boss for just 10 more minutes, passionately claiming that he was currently tracking the exact digital IP address of the shadow mastermind orchestrating the malicious smear campaign against a righteous local enterprise. But the owner didn't buy the tech savviness for a second, barking back that the kid was just trying to scam a free bowl of instant noodles before violently throwing him out into the alleyway like a piece of human garbage. The poor kid rolled across the dirty floor, coming to an abrupt halt right at my feet, prompting me to look down at his pathetic state and philosophically muse that since we were both fellow miserable sufferers navigating the cruel tides of this world, there was absolutely no need for us to have known each other previously to share a moment of cosmic kinship. Stepping up to the counter with an effortless air of grandeur, I slid a couple of coins across the desk and smoothly told the owner to open a computer for the kid, adding that he should use the remaining 50 cents of my change to buy him a cheap mystery meat snack sausage since the poor guy's hands were literally vibrating from raw hunger. The owner scoffed but relented, muttering that he was only complying because I happened to be incredibly handsome, before yelling at the stinking little hacker to get back inside. Shuffling to his designated terminal, the bewildered kid turned his tear-stained face toward me, his voice trembling as he asked why a total stranger would ever help a rejected, blacklisted industry loser like him. "Stop whining, eat your sausage, and get to work," I commanded with an enigmatic smirk, casually noting that he possessed exceptionally slender fingers and an extraordinary bone structure that marked him as a natural-born king of the keyboard. Right on cue, the metallic chime of the broke system blasted inside my brain, enthusiastically announcing that it had detected a premier tech-type potential asset who perfectly met the divine criteria, asking if I wished to officially deploy my fourth mystical gold coin. I gave the mental green light, and the second my phantom gold token merged into his essence, the kid's eyes flared with a brilliant, anime-style digital fire. His hands transformed into an absolute blur of superhuman speed, executing a flawless, rhythmic symphony of keystrokes as he navigated a vast ocean of glowing code and shifting firewalls, fiercely whispering to himself that he could finally see the enemy, vowing to utterly destroy the cowards who dared to hack his Supreme Savior's corporate allies by locking onto their IP addresses, hijacking their zombie servers, and executing a catastrophic reverse hack. The sheer velocity of his typing began drawing immense power from the cyber cafe's grid, causing every single computer monitor in the entire establishment to simultaneously flash to life, overriding whatever games the patrons were playing to broadcast an unstoppable, cascading waterfall of ironclad legal evidence that exposed the Zhao Group's massive rumor-mongering campaigns, illicit tax evasion schemes, and fabricated corporate scandals falling across the web like digital snowflakes. The internet cafe erupted into a frenzy as tech enthusiasts and frantic patrons rushed toward the corner of the room, desperately shouting to find the legendary, god-tier hacker who had just breached a global defense network in under 60 seconds. But when the crowd finally swarmed the terminal, their jaws collectively dropped to the floor. There, kneeling in the dirt at my feet, was the newly awakened digital deity of the internet, AG, crying his absolute eyes out in a state of hysterical gratitude while violently trying to stuff a sleek, black bank card directly into my worn jacket pocket. "Benefactor, I just made a cool $100 million by aggressively shorting our opponent's stock into the absolute ground during the digital chaos," he wailed, begging me to accept the limitless fortune because he wouldn't even be drawing breath today if it weren't for my divine intervention. The absolute second the plastic card brushed against my clothing, a massive, crimson-red emergency warning siren began flashing violently in my vision as the system's computerized voice screamed that high-energy, lethal wealth was rapidly approaching my person, ticking down a terrifying countdown of 3 seconds before total annihilation. Sensing the ultimate danger to my life, I leapt backward with a horrified shriek, violently swatting his hands away and screaming at him to never touch me with that cursed plastic, desperately declaring that I didn't want a single penny of his blood money and that I would exclusively accept his half-eaten mystery meat sausage as payment. Just outside the glass windows of the cafe, Lord Long was quietly watching the entire spectacular display through his sunglasses, turning his head to a subordinate to ask if he had just witnessed that insanity, to which the stunned underling could only nod, marveling at how a true master would actively avoid $100 million as if it were a venomous, deadly viper, choosing instead to feast on a discarded street sausage. Lord Long sighed in deep spiritual reverence, whispering that this was the absolute highest, most transcendent realm of treating material wealth like literal dirt, while a weeping AG completely misinterpreted my terror-induced refusal as a grand, saintly gesture, assuming I was refusing the cash out of a benevolent fear that he wouldn't have enough capital to rebuild his life, causing him to fiercely swear that his entire existence now belonged to me and that I could type his programming code however I saw fit. "Type your uncle," I snapped, rubbing my throbbing temples in deep exasperation, openly wondering if every single person I encountered in this city was suffering from some collective mental illness, and desperately pleading with the universe to just let me quietly exist as a beautifully broke guy. But the cosmic comedy was just getting started because the moment I successfully defended my coveted zero-balance status and walked over to the opulent entrance of the Lynn Hotel, a massive, unimaginably arrogant fleet of pristine Rolls-Royces pulled up to the curb, ruthlessly blocking the main entrance. The door of the lead vehicle swung open to reveal Su Qingge, my incredibly wealthy and notoriously snobbish estranged fiancé, who stepped out onto the concrete with a look of supreme disgust, loudly complaining to her entourage that the very air of this pathetic city was choked with the unbearable stench of poverty before imperiously ordering her muscle-bound bodyguards to drag me out into the sunlight. Her chief aide quickly checked a high-end tracking device, reporting with a smirk that according to the satellite GPS, her loser of a fiancé was currently loitering right inside the main hotel lobby, prompting Su Qingge to let out a cruel, mocking scoff as she deduced that I must have caught wind of her arrival and hid inside the luxury establishment to desperately extort a massive, pathetic breakup fee from her family. Steel-faced and dripping with aristocratic arrogance, the heiress led her platoon of bodyguards as they aggressively marched through the revolving doors, fully prepared to trample my dignity into the dirt, only to stumble upon a cinematic, reality-shattering scene in the center of the lobby that completely broke her aristocratic worldview. There, in the middle of the glittering marble floor, sat my penniless self, casually chewing on a cheap biscuit, while the region's undisputed richest tycoon, Mr. Lin was delicately and reverently using a silk handkerchief to wipe stray cookie crumbs from the corner of my mouth. If that wasn't absurd enough, the terrifying underworld emperor of the concrete jungle, Lord Long, was literally squatting on the floor like a lowly servant, painstakingly tying my frayed shoelaces, while the nation's supreme medical authority, Elder Chen, held a specialized magnifying glass over a glass of plain water I was holding, intensely analyzing its chemical composition. Benefactor, the pH value of this particular tap water is dangerously low and entirely unsuitable for your noble, transcendent constitution. The old physician fretted, adjusting his spectacles as he seriously suggested that they immediately charter a private jet to harvest fresh morning dew, collected at precisely 6 a.m. from the highest peaks of the Swiss Alps. I let out a deeply exhausted, heavily sarcastic sigh, looking down at the legendary doctor and muttering that I literally just needed a quick, unpretentious sip of fluid to wash down the dry steam bun I had just choked on, pleading with him to stop with all this ridiculously fancy, over-the-top nonsense. Su Qing stood entirely frozen, her eyes bulging out of her head as her brain frantically tried to process the fact that the man wiping my mouth was Lin, the financial titan who single-handedly controlled the entire economic lifeline of the Jiangnan region. The man tying my shoes was Long, the mob kingpin whose very name made the political capital tremble with absolute fear, and the man analyzing my water was Divine Dr. Chen, a medical savior so exclusive that even her billionaire grandfather had to wait in line for months just to secure a 5-minute consultation. Knowing full well that her own powerful father had to bow and use his utmost politeness whenever he encountered any of these three legendary figures, she felt her entire reality collapsing, frantically wondering if she had accidentally fallen asleep and trapped herself inside a fever dream as she watched them cater to a destitute nobody. Desperate to regain her footing and mask her overwhelming panic, she fiercely marched forward, pointing an accusing finger at me and shrieking that I shouldn't think I could terrify her family just because I had somehow managed to find a few powerful old sugar daddies to back me up, loudly declaring to the entire lobby that she had officially arrived to break off our childhood engagement once and for all. I blinked, looking up from my water glass with a beautifully unbothered expression, casually repeating the words, "break off the engagement," as if she had just announced a minor change in the afternoon weather forecast. That's right, she huffed, crossing her arms with a look of supreme entitlement, haughtily exclaiming that she was a proud, blessed daughter of heaven destined for greatness, meaning she could never, under any circumstances, marry a penniless, bottom-feeding loser like myself, before violently slapping a legal document onto the table and telling me to sign it so our families could finally be completely even. I looked at the paper, a slow, highly sarcastic smirk spreading across my face, as I asked if this dramatic separation came with a standard, movie-style breakup fee, like handing me a few cool millions just to get lost and never darken her doorstep again. Su Qing let out a sharp, disgusted th, rolling her eyes as she sneered that I truly was a greedy, small-minded parasite, fiercely snapping that I wouldn't receive a single microcent from her estate because a pathetic wretch like me didn't deserve it. The moment the words "no money" left her mouth, my entire demeanor shifted into a state of joyous, hyper-efficient cooperation. I snatched the pen out of her hand before she could even finish her sentence, loudly muttering that if there wasn't any wealth involved, there was absolutely no reason for her to be wasting my precious time with a massive monologue. I violently scribbled my signature across the contract, throwing the pen away like a piece of worthless street trash, as I coolly announced that the deed was done. The signature was finalized, and that she was perfectly free to take a sharp left turn out the revolving doors, coldly adding that I wouldn't be wasting my energy escorting her to her car. Su Qing gasped, completely thrown off her script by my total lack of despair, taking a step back as she stammered in absolute disbelief, asking why on earth I wasn't weeping bitterly on the floor, or dramatically shaking my fists at the sky, while shouting the classic protagonist line about 30 years east of the river, 30 years west of the river. I merely offered her one final, hilariously dismissive glance as I stood up, dryly informing her that 30 years was far too long of a narrative wait, and that I preferred to aggressively seize the day, bluntly concluding that a legendary master like myself was exceptionally busy because I still had to spend the rest of my evening figuring out exactly which billionaire friend I was going to mooch a free dinner from. The audacity of my sheer existence was apparently too much for Su Qing's lead bodyguard to handle, as he let out a veins-popping roar about my utter disrespect toward his precious young mistress and aggressively lunged forward, fiercely declaring that I was courting an early grave while aiming a lethal, crushing strike directly at my face. However, his fist never connected, because the legendary medical authority, Elder Chen, abruptly intercepted the attack with shocking speed, his scholarly eyes narrowing into slits of pure, protective rage as he coldly announced that since this particular hand had the unmitigated gall to threaten his ultimate benefactor, it no longer deserved to function. A sickening muffled pop echoed through the luxury hotel lobby, and the tough guy bodyguard instantly collapsed into a pathetic heap on the marble floor, violently clutching his limp limb while shrieking in absolute horror that his hand had gone completely numb and that he couldn't feel a single digit. Panting in terror, the remaining security detail desperately demanded to know what kind of hidden monster they were dealing with, prompting the dignified old man to straighten his robes and majestically announce his name as Chen Jingren, fiercely delivering an absolute ultimatum to the entire room that if anyone so much as touched a single stray hair on his benefactor's head, he would personally ensure the entire global Chinese medical community permanently blacklisted the Su family cartel. If anyone in your arrogant lineage catches a basic headache or a mild fever from this day forward, Elder Chen sneered with immense theatrical venom, I highly suggest you go find yourself a certified veterinarian. The name rattled through the guards like an electric shock as they gasped in sheer awe, realizing they were standing in the presence of the nation's supreme medical saint. But before they could even formulate an apology, Chairman Lin stepped into the fray with a predatory billionaire smirk, imperiously telling Miss Su to crawl back to the capital and inform her father that every single multi-billion-dollar joint venture between the Lin Group and the Su family was officially terminated. Lin crossed his arms, coldly stating that since her family possessed the spectacular stupidity to look down on his divine benefactor, they wouldn't be permitted to earn a single copper cent from his financial empire ever again. To seal her absolute doom, the underground emperor Lord Long stepped forward, cracking his knuckles with a terrifying, low chuckle as he added that as far as the underworld logistics were concerned, if the Su family managed to smuggle so much as a single tricycle of cargo into the Jiangnan region moving forward, he would consider it his own personal failure. Su Qing stood completely paralyzed in the center of the room, her aristocratic face draining of all color as she frantically gestured between me and the three titans of industry, her voice cracking in absolute, high-pitched desperation as she squeaked out that I was supposed to be a penniless, bottom-feeding loser who couldn't even afford to ride a public bicycle. Internally, her brain was suffering a catastrophic, anime-style meltdown as she realized she had just blindly poked a hornet's nest of apocalyptic proportions. Her internal monologue screamed in utter panic that this wasn't a loser at all, but rather a literal god effortlessly standing on the shoulders of giants, causing her to instantly recalculate her life choices and realize that if she could just cling to my thigh, her family's status would instantly skyrocket into the stratosphere. Desperate to undo her monumental mistake, her arrogant expression instantly melted into a sickly sweet, incredibly fake smile as she batted her eyelashes and purred that her entire dramatic breakup routine had actually just been a clever, playful test of my character, eagerly reaching out her manicured hand to demand the annulment document back so we could proceed with our blissful marriage. I merely blinked at her in utter boredom, casually scratching the back of my neck as she looked around in confusion and asked where her precious engagement contract had gone, prompting me to nonchalantly point toward the nearby luxury mahogany lobby table. Oh, that specific piece of paper? I remarked with a dry, deeply sarcastic chuckle, casually explaining that the expensive table happened to be a tiny bit wobbly, so I had one of my burly bodyguards fold her family's sacred contract into a tight little square and shove it underneath the uneven table leg. I offered her a thumbs up, happily noting that the premium, heavy cardstock paper exported from the capital was of exceptional quality, providing the ultimate structural leveling experience for our furniture. Su Qing's jaw practically detached from her skull as she realized her sacred ticket to upper-class salvation was currently being crushed by a dusty wooden table leg, letting out a horrified whine about her life's contract being degraded into a furniture-leveling shim, which prompted me to dismissively wave my hand and tell her not to feel so bad about a meaningless piece of trash. Look, lady, if you have no further business here to delay my digestion, please kindly exit through the left doors. I sighed, gesturing to the three powerful tycoons who were eagerly crowding around me, because my team and I still need to hold a highly critical, multi-tiered corporate summit to decide whether we are ordering the premium braised pork or the crispy chicken legs for our cheap boxed lunches tonight. Chairman Lin and Lord Long instantly nodded in absolute, deadpan seriousness, aggressively backing my statement by shouting that nothing in the modern world was more globally important than ensuring their supreme benefactor's dinner logistics were flawlessly executed. Left with absolutely no choice, a thoroughly ruined Su Qing had to be physically supported by her remaining traumatized bodyguards, weeping like a delicate pear blossom bathed in a tragic summer rainstorm as she slowly shuffled out of the hotel lobby. I watched her pathetic departure and let out a heavy, deeply philosophical sigh, muttering about how the psychological endurance of these pampered, wealthy young heiresses was shockingly fragile, considering she was crying a literal river just because her family got stepped on by a smelly, unwashed foot like mine. But unlike her, I comforted myself with the fact that my own broke boy mindset was as steady and unyielding as an ancient mountain peak. Having successfully driven away my dramatic ex-fiancé and protected my glorious status of absolute poverty, I immediately returned to my true, essential daily hustle, busily wandering over to a secluded, overgrown corner of the local public park to earnestly forage for plastic garbage. I rummaged through the bushes for several minutes, entirely perplexed as to why the local recycling market had suddenly turned into an absolute desert, frowning deeply as I realized I couldn't find a single discarded mineral water bottle to cash in for pennies. My internal narrator began panicking, wondering if some highly aggressive, rival trash-picking cartel had covertly invaded my designated municipal territory. But my deep financial musings were suddenly shattered by a barrage of incredibly loud, obnoxious insults echoing from a nearby clearing. Stepping through the foliage, I witnessed a cliched gang of low-life street thugs aggressively surrounding a disheveled, middle-aged beggar who was noticeably missing his entire right arm, brutally shoving him off a rusty park bench. The lead thug spat on the ground, arrogantly barking that this specific public bench was his personal racketeering territory, threatening that if the one-armed beggar couldn't cough up his daily protection fee, he could go sleep in a ditch like a wild ghost. Despite the overwhelming numbers, the crippled man merely glared back with an unsettling, icy intensity, which only infuriated the thug further as he raised his fist and screamed that he was about to break the old man's remaining arm, just to teach him a lesson about respect. I couldn't help but sigh at the total lack of modern martial ethics, muttering to myself that stealing a bench from a disabled beggar was really pushing the boundary of villainous cliché, causing me to casually stroll into the clearing to play the classic hero. The thugs instantly spun around, sneering at my tattered clothing and mockingly asking if another pathetic garbage collector was trying to play the heroic savior, telling me to take a good look in a mirror before getting my face smashed. Ignoring the grunts, I turned to the stoic one-armed man and began reciting my usual speech about him having an extraordinary bone structure and being a hidden martial arts prodigy, before abruptly cutting myself off as I realized I was accidentally reading from the wrong script. Ah, wait, my bad, I corrected with a casual smirk, locking eyes with the scarred veteran and asking why a guy with such fiercely terrifying, killer eyes was just standing there enduring a public beating without fighting back. The mysterious beggar closed his eyes, his voice dropping into a raspy, cinematic whisper, as he solemnly stated that he had once sworn a sacred, blood-bound oath to the heavens never to take a human life again. A massive light bulb instantly went off in my brain as my internal anime recap voice screamed in pure excitement. A soft-spoken demeanor, a tragic hidden past, a severed limb, enduring extreme public humiliation, and a dramatic vow of non-violence. This was the absolute, gold standard textbook definition of a retired Special Forces God of War script. It was completely undeniable that the final destination of my fifth reality-bending gold coin had officially been settled by destiny. Well, since you've sworn off killing people, it's about time you changed your daily lifestyle anyway, I declared with a knowing grin, reaching into my pocket and pulling out the heavy, gleaming golden token, smoothly telling him that this specific metal would help him reclaim every single thing he had ever lost in his past life. The moment his lone hand made physical contact with the warm gold piece, a metaphysical shockwave tore through the clearing as the beggar slowly drew himself up to his full, towering height, his originally cloudy, bloodshot eyes instantly erupting with a localized, visible aura of pure, unadulterated murderous intent that felt like a localized mountain of corpses and a literal sea of fresh blood. The cocky street thugs immediately froze, the color draining from their faces as they began violently trembling under the sheer pressure of his gaze, taking frantic steps backward while stuttering in absolute terror for the demon not to come any closer, desperately screaming about their useless taekwondo belts before bursting into tears and shrieking for their mothers. Within 3 seconds, the entire gang of criminals completely lost their minds from pure psychological terror, screaming that they were looking at a literal ghost before sprinting out of the park in a chaotic, weeping stampede. I stood there with my jaw completely slack, staring at the empty path and wondering if I had just witnessed the legendary, mythical technique of staring someone into a sudden cardiac arrest, internally marveling at how insanely convenient that superpower would be for my daily trash-collecting routes. The terrifying warrior slowly retracted his suffocating aura, turning his massive frame back toward me before dropping onto one knee without a single shred of hesitation, lowering his scarred head in absolute, eternal submission. Chief Instructor of the Dragon Kingdom's Elite Wolf Pack Special Operations Unit, codenamed Lone Wolf, Lang Feng, humbly offers his deepest gratitude to you, sir, for granting him the absolute grace of a total rebirth. He thundered with unyielding military precision, swearing on his soul that from this moment forward, his body would serve as the sharpest, most lethal sword in my personal arsenal. I rubbed the back of my neck awkwardly, laughing sheepishly while telling him that there was absolutely no need to turn our daily routine into a high-stakes military operation, casually asking if his elite special forces training included the practical ability to unclog a standard household drain, or if he could just stand guard by my front door to ensure the local neighborhood kids didn't steal my plastic recycling bin. The legendary God of War saluted with fierce, terrifying intensity, fiercely roaring that I could rest completely assured, because not even a single microscopic fly would be capable of getting within half a step of my sacred trash can under his watch. With that final chaotic interaction, my bizarre, system-mandated recruitment mission was officially and successfully completed, and by the time the evening sun dipped below the city skyline, my humble, low-rent living room was comfortably hosting a bizarre council of 5 hyper-powerful individuals who were fully capable of making the entire modern world tremble with a single collective nod. The moment I stepped across the threshold of my newly secured living room, my 5 hyper-powerful disciples snapped to absolute military attention and delivered a thunderous, perfectly synchronized chorus of welcome that practically shook the dust off the ceiling. I froze, staring at the bizarrely formal spectacle in utter bewilderment before waving my hands frantically, demanding to know what on earth they were doing since we had explicitly agreed to a casual, low-key potluck at my place, pleading with them to drop the theatrics and just take a seat. Instead of relaxing, they all leaned forward with localized anime intensity, their eyes gleaming as the computer prodigy AG breathlessly noted that the 5 world-shaking pillars were finally assembled, desperately asking if I was about to unveil the grand, apocalyptic master plan to reshape the global order, while the rest of the crew eagerly debated whether we were going to systematically dismantle a rogue nation, unify the entire globe under my banner, or if AGE should immediately launch a catastrophic cyber attack to breach the Pentagon's main servers. Before I could even process that madness, the elite god of war Lang Feng stepped up, his voice dripping with lethal precision as he confidently declared that upon my command, he would slip into the shadows and immediately retrieve the head of whatever enemy general was causing me slight annoyance. I let out a deeply exhausted, intensely sarcastic sigh, looking at this council of terrifying legends and bluntly explaining that there was no global domination plan. I literally just wanted to know if anyone in the room possessed the culinary wisdom to cook a pack of generic dried noodles without making a mess. I casually patted my empty pockets, asking the room if anyone was willing to charitably sponsor 2 cheap packets of pickled mustard greens to flavor the broth since I didn't have a single cent to buy actual sauce. The room went deathly quiet for a single, dramatic beat before their faces collectively contorted into expressions of profound, religious enlightenment, with Chairman Lin passionately crying out that this was a masterclass in transcendent philosophy, analyzing my cheap dinner request as a divine lesson, demonstrating that the greatest sound is silence and the truest form is formless. They practically wept in awe, mutually agreeing that I was warning them to reject material luxury and return to absolute, primal simplicity, loudly declaring that we weren't merely consuming basic instant noodles, but rather digesting the literal, infinite flow of the cosmic Tao itself. Before I could even open my mouth to protest, Chairman Lin was already frantically barking into his smartphone to have a private cargo plane immediately airlift the single finest harvest of authentic fooling pickled mustard greens directly to our location, while the legendary mercenary commander Lang Feng rolled up his sleeves, fiercely vowing to utilize high-stakes, battlefield-grade heat control to boil the water to microscopic perfection. I could only stare at them in pure, unadulterated disbelief, internally screaming that I just wanted a basic, hot bowl of food and wondering why these absolute lunatics insisted on framing my forced poverty as some kind of unfathomably profound spiritual awakening, officially concluding that every single one of my new elite followers had something dangerously, fundamentally wrong with their brains. Early the next morning, hoping to escape the lingering madness of my housemates, I was peacefully sweeping up the stray autumn leaves near the front gates when a blindingly red, obnoxious Ferrari tore around the corner and parked aggressively right at the villa's main entrance. The heavy scissor doors swung open to reveal a middle-aged, extraordinarily wealthy woman dripping in an absurd amount of gaudy gold chains and flashing diamonds, accompanied by a towering, foreign muscle-bound bodyguard who was casually chewing gum with an incredibly punchable smirk. The wealthy woman strutted into the courtyard, her face instantly twisting into an expression of profound aristocratic disgust as she loudly whined to her companion about why a filthy, low-class street sweeper was loitering in her beautiful garden, loudly questioning whether that business tycoon Lin had lied when he claimed to have rented her luxury estate to an incredibly distinguished global big shot. She turned her nose up at the gorgeous architecture, scoffing to her boyfriend Jack that this supposed premier mansion looked more like a municipal garbage dump since it lacked an elite security detail and only featured a pathetic, tattered cleaner sweeping the driveway. I leaned casually on my broom, offering them a beautifully deadpan, sarcastic smile before calmly asking who exactly the two of them were looking for, making sure to helpfully clarify that we didn't collect industrial scrap metal here and that I unfortunately didn't have any extra cardboard boxes to donate to their cause. The woman's face turned an angry shade of crimson as she shrieked at me to open my useless dog eyes, fiercely proclaiming that she was the absolute legal deed holder of this entire property and demanding to know if I was just some illiterate nanny hired by the actual tenant. Without waiting for an answer, she imperiously ordered me to tell the current tenant to pack up his garbage and get the hell out immediately because she was officially revoking the lease, confidently declaring that she was transforming this luxury villa into a private marital home for her beloved Jack. My internal monologue instantly suffered a massive panic attack as I realized this lady was my literal landlady. I began desperately sweating, wondering why Chairman Lin hadn't completely finalized the property paperwork and realizing that if I got aggressively evicted from this sweet setup, I would never find another house capable of bypassing the system's strict financial parameters. The wealthy woman slammed her foot down, screeching to know if I was completely deaf before snapping her fingers and ordering her foreign muscle man to violently hurl me out into the concrete street. Jack stepped forward with a malicious grin, cracking his knuckles and grunting in thick English that in his homeland, they exclusively used their fists to do the talking. But before he could even take a single step toward me, I calmly raised my walkie-talkie and casually ordered the hidden Wolfpack unit to move in and apprehend the trespassers. Jack paused, looking around the completely empty, peaceful courtyard in utter confusion as he muttered about where these supposed defenders were hiding, only for his personal tactical earpiece to suddenly erupt with a barrage of extreme terror, heavy static, and horrified screams from his backup team outside, who frantically wailed for him to abort the mission because the entire perimeter was a lethal trap, culminating in a burly mercenary literally weeping for his mother over the radio. The foreign enforcer froze entirely, his jaw dropping as he slowly lifted his head toward the scenic flower bushes in the corner of the villa's garden. There, standing amidst the roses, was the legendary god of war Lang Feng, who offered Jack a deeply unsettling, hyper-friendly anime smile, while effortlessly using a pair of basic gardening scissors to snip cleanly through a solid wooden tree branch that was literally as thick as a human wrist. Jack slowly turned his terrified gaze toward the adjacent rooftops, only to find over a dozen elite, black-suited operatives silently crouching on the tiles, holding high-tech blow-dart rifles and staring down with icy, calculating eyes aimed directly at his exposed backside. The tough guy bodyguard completely lost control of his bladder, trembling violently as his tough guy persona disintegrated into pure panic, desperately raising his hands and weeping for them not to take his life, suddenly screaming at the top of his lungs about how much he absolutely loved the Dragon Kingdom. While the wealthy landlady stood entirely dumbfounded and paralyzed by the sudden tactical ambush, President Lin's ultra-luxurious, custom-stretched Lincoln arrived right on cue, screeching to a halt at the gates as the billionaire tycoon practically jumped out of the moving vehicle, followed closely by his hyperventilating personal secretary, who was clutching a mountain of legal folders. Lin rushed forward in a state of absolute, sweating panic, bowing deeply to me as he breathlessly apologized for allowing his supreme benefactor to be startled by trash, violently blaming himself for failing to handle the neighborhood logistics with proper efficiency. The landlady's eyes widened in recognition, as she immediately adjusted her tone, rushing over to greedily purr a greeting to the legendary President Lin, immediately pointing a manicured finger at me and lying through her teeth that this broke. Crazy street kid was stubbornly refusing to vacate the premises and had even tried to criminally extort her over a fake debt. "You have the unmitigated gall to try and evict my sacred benefactor," President Lin roared, his voice dripping with pure corporate fury, but the arrogant woman merely scoffed, defensively arguing that it was her legal right to terminate the rental agreement whenever she pleased. Right at that exact peak of dramatic tension, the landlady's high-end smartphone began ringing violently, and the moment she answered, the sweet, melodic voice of a premier banking customer service representative echoed clearly through the quiet courtyard. The agent politely informed the prestigious Miss Wang that a staggering 3 billion RMB had just been successfully deposited into her primary account, coldly clarifying that the Linshi Group had officially purchased her villa, along with all 88 adjacent luxury mansions within a 5-kilometer radius, in absolute full cash. The phone slipped from her limp fingers as she stammered in absolute horror, asking if the tycoon had literally just bought out the entire upper-class geographic neighborhood just to spite her, prompting President Lin to adjust his custom suit jacket with supreme, billionaire arrogance. Lin coldly sneered that he had quickly realized a single isolated house wouldn't provide his divine benefactor with enough peace and quiet, proudly declaring that the entire massive neighborhood was now officially reclassified as Mr. Beiy's personal private backyard, daring any mortal soul on earth to try and kick him out now. With a dismissive wave of the tycoon's hand, a squad of elite security guards swarmed the courtyard, ruthlessly dragging the weeping landlady and her paralyzed boyfriend away across the gravel like a pair of dead dogs. Once the area was cleared, President Lin turned back to me with absolute, submissive reverence, carefully presenting a heavy, solid gold master key along with a massive stack of pristine property deeds. "Benefactor, from this glorious day forward, this entire multi-billion-dollar territory is your absolute private property, meaning you can freely choose to live in whichever of the 88 villas fits your morning mood, allowing you to rotate luxury houses every single day for 3 entire months, without ever repeating a single bedroom." He beamed, completely convinced he had delivered the ultimate gift. The absolute second, my hand hovered near the keys, a massive, crimson-red emergency matrix flared to life inside my skull, as the broke-ass system unleashed a deafening blare of sirens, screaming that a real estate gift exceeding 3 billion credits constituted an apocalyptic violation of the core rules. The system's robotic voice strictly warned that if I accepted the properties, the ultimate punishment protocol would instantly and permanently activate, inflicting lifelong impotence and ensuring I lost every single financial bet for the rest of my earthly existence. "Take it away. Get this garbage out of my sight right now," I shrieked in genuine, absolute terror, violently pushing the golden keys away from my person, which caused a completely bewildered Chairman Lin to stutter in panic, desperately asking if I found the multi-billion-dollar gesture to be insultingly small. "Brother Lin, you are drastically overthinking this entire situation," I yelled, desperately wiping the cold sweat from my forehead as I frantically formulated a logical excuse, arguing with rapid-fire sarcasm that a sprawling estate of that size was nothing more than a golden cage. I gestured wildly to the surrounding neighborhood, loudly complaining that simply sweeping and dusting 88 individual mansions would keep me laboring from the crack of dawn until the dead of night, fiercely asking if his true hidden plot was to systematically work his beloved benefactor to death before pointing a firm finger toward a tiny, dark alcove underneath the main stairwell. Chairman Lin's jaw dropped as he squinted at the dusty corner, awkwardly stammering that the space I was pointing to was literally just the mansion's communal broom closet. "A humble room is made noble exclusively by my own inherent, radiant virtue," I declared with an epic, philosophical anime pose, fiercely asserting that I explicitly demanded that exact broom closet as my permanent residence, while strictly insisting that I would be paying a mandatory, legally binding rent of exactly 50 cents per month, not a single fraction of a penny less. Chairman Lin and the surrounding operatives stood frozen in absolute, tearful reverence, with Lang Feng loudly marveling at how the simplicity of the great Tao was manifesting before his very eyes, deeply moved by the fact that a man commanding billions in resources chose to occupy a tiny, dusty corner to rest his head, vowing that he had learned a profound lesson in ultimate spiritual discipline. I collapsed onto a rusty, squeaking folding bed inside the cramped, dark broom closet as the heavy wooden door clicked shut, rubbing my face in deep exhaustion while bitterly muttering to the empty walls that I wasn't tempering my goddamn willpower at all, but was simply terrified of my own biology permanently going limp. Even though I was completely cornered by a mountain of dirty mops and plastic buckets in the most glorious broom closet imaginable, a massive, triumphant smile spread across my face as I proudly whispered to myself that while the accommodations were undeniably tight, I had successfully preserved my sacred biological dignity as a man by dodging that real estate curse. Right on cue, the broke-ass system's computerized voice chimed harmoniously inside my skull, enthusiastically announcing that because the host had successfully resisted overwhelming material temptation, upheld the absolute bottom line of destitution, and rejected luxury, my performance had been officially rated as perfect, granting me a special reward item known as the Bad Luck Sticker. According to the hilarious item description, whoever this stealthy little label was attached to would suffer an absolute avalanche of agonizing misfortune for the next 24 hours, guaranteeing they would violently choke on cold water and systematically smash their own heels every single time they passed gas. Smirking at the chaotic possibilities, I couldn't help but wonder whether the deceitful executive Lu Ruyan or the vengeful Mrs. Zhao should be my first experimental guinea pig, before sliding into a nearby plastic chair at a roadside stall, and loudly telling the vendor to cook me up a 6 yuan bowl of noodles with extra chili, a massive splash of sour vinegar, and a heavily cracked, thoroughly marinated braised egg. I was just about to greedily dig into my budget masterpiece when a luxury sedan tore up to the curb, its doors flying open to reveal a heavily bandaged, wheelchair-bound Mrs. Zhao alongside a smugly smirking Lu Ruyan, both of them being escorted by an absurdly dressed, self-proclaimed spiritual master known as Grandmaster Han Tian. Pointing a manicured, trembling finger at my face, Lu Ruyan shrieked to her spiritual mentor that I was the exact little street rat who had used foul dark magic to single-handedly bankrupt the glorious Zhao syndicate and shatter her employer's leg, desperately pleading with the guru to unleash his mystical might, strip away my arrogant facade, and force me to grovel in the literal dirt. The Grandmaster stroked his fake beard, letting out a pompous, theatrical sigh as he declared the classic phrase, "Immeasurable heavenly venerate," confidently muttering that a wet-behind-the-ears brat like myself possessed absolutely zero spiritual energy fluctuations before boldly stepping within 3 meters of my noodle bowl to break my aura with a single definitive movement. Dropping into a thoroughly unstable martial arts horse stance, the old fraud began wildly flailing his arms and legs in a chaotic dance, aggressively chanting nonsense commands to the spirits of heaven and earth under the swift authority of the Supreme Lord Laozi before screaming Qigong Wave, while violently thrusting his palms through the empty air. I didn't even blink, completely ignoring the theatrical display as I slurped my lunch, casually turning my head to the bewildered noodle vendor to ask with a dry chuckle if he could pass me some free broth to wash down the absolute weirdness of the live acrobatics happening in front of his shop. Seeing me completely unbothered, a sweating Mrs. Zhao frantically hissed to her master to find out why there wasn't a single drop of internal blood spraying from my mouth, prompting the panicking fraud to growl that I was a shockingly tough nut to crack before aggressively dialing his performance up to maximum power. The Grandmaster began convulsing so violently it looked like he was actively riding an electric chair, desperately blasting imaginary shockwaves through the air at my head, but by that time, I had already thoroughly finished my cheap noodles. Letting out a massive, highly theatrical stretch, I casually strolled right past a smirking Lu Ruyan and gave her a perfectly innocent, lightning-fast pat on the shoulder, smoothly asking the manager if she had explicitly brought her bizarre new boyfriend out to the streets to perform public comedy routines, before wishing her a spectacular day of good luck. A satisfying digital ping echoed in my brain as the system confirmed the bad luck sticker had been successfully deployed, locking an S-rank, 24-hour curse onto Lu Ruyan that promised to make her choke on basic fluids and metaphorically step on emotional landmines with every single movement. The arrogant woman spat back that I needed to take my filthy, impoverished hands off her designer clothes, loudly jeering that my pathetic acting wouldn't save me from the Grandmaster's imminent, destructive curse. Yelling at the top of her lungs had naturally left her throat completely parched, so she confidently grabbed a bottle of premium mineral water, tilted her head back, and took a massive gulp, only to instantly freeze as her face violently morphed into a hideous shade of bruised pig liver. She began coughing hysterically, desperately claiming at her throat and gasping that something sharp was violently stuck in her windpipe, throwing the entire entourage into a panic as Mrs. Zhao screamed in absolute confusion about how a literal thorn could possibly materialize inside a securely sealed bottle of factory-vended mineral water. Finally managing to vomit up the fluid and catch her breath, a thoroughly enraged Lu Ruyan stomped forward to resume her verbal assault, but the absolute microsecond her foot hit the concrete, the heavy stiletto heel of her designer shoe snapped cleanly in half with a loud crack, sending her sprawling backward onto the pavement with a horrified shriek. Right as her mouth flew wide open in midair, a steaming, perfectly timed glob of stray bird poop dropped from the sky with military, pinpoint accuracy, landing directly into her gaping throat and causing her to hysterically spit and scream in pure existential agony. Staring at the absolute disaster, a horrified Mrs. Zhao began trembling in her wheelchair, stammering that this level of misfortune was mathematically impossible and frantically asking her spiritual master if his elite qigong spell had catastrophically backfired and targeted the wrong woman. Realizing he had stumbled into a genuine supernatural anomaly, the master's eyes darted around in pure panic as he internally decided to execute his ultimate survival maneuver: blatant personal injury, extortion. Letting out a theatrical roar of righteous anger, the old man suddenly charged straight at me, screaming that I had broken his sacred spell before intentionally throwing himself onto the pavement at my feet, violently rolling around while shrieking that a poor youth had just brutally assaulted an elderly citizen, claiming his ribs were entirely shattered and vowing he wouldn't stand up for less than $1,000,000 settlement fee. I simply looked up at the pole directly above our heads, offering a relaxed, deeply sarcastic smirk as I kindly reminded the old fraud that we were currently standing directly underneath a high-definition municipal security camera, making his terrible acting look hilariously obvious to the entire public square. Right on cue, a barrage of loud, echoing police sirens wailed down the avenue as a patrol vehicle aggressively pulled up to the curb, prompting a delusional Liu Ruyan to let out a triumphant laugh, screaming that I was completely finished because they were going to sue me for aggravated assault. I merely gestured toward the approaching officers as Mrs. Zhao frantically whispered for her master to stop rolling in the dirt and get up, but the lead policeman immediately bypassed me, violently tackling the scrambling grandmaster into the asphalt, while coldly announcing that the old man was under arrest for multiple counts of medical fraud and illegally impersonating a qigong specialist to sell toxic fake medicine. The weeping fake guru was thrown into the back of the squad car, screaming to the heavens that he was completely innocent and that I was the true freak of nature, leaving a horrified Liu Ruyan to clutch her broken shoe and shriek in absolute despair about the 1,000,000 yuan tuition fee she had just personally wired to a criminal. As the authorities drove away, leaving the two corporate villains violently trembling from pure psychological terror, the surrounding crowd of local onlookers completely shifted their gaze toward me, their eyes filled with an overwhelming sense of religious awe and fanaticism. The street gossips began breathlessly whispering to each other that while the legendary Qigong master had channeled his full spiritual power for ages, this mysterious young youth hadn't even flinched, with another onlooker rapidly correcting him that it wasn't just a lack of flinching, but that I had clearly executed a flawless, causality-reflecting technique that redirected the dark energy back onto the woman. Within seconds, a frantic civilian literally threw himself to his knees before my cheap sneakers, passionately crying out that I was a living, immortal deity and begging to be taken on as a disciple so he could master the divine art of making his enemies eat bird poop with a single glare. Stop messing around. I'm literally just a completely broke guy trying to eat a cheap bowl of roadside noodles, I yelled, desperately waving my chopsticks to clear a path through the fanatical crowd, while complaining that I still needed to get to my daily garbage collecting shift before my territory was compromised. I let out a heavy, deeply philosophical sigh, muttering about how incredibly difficult it was for an enlightened saint to maintain a low profile in modern society, though I had to admit that watching my toxic ex-manager eat literal street garbage made my 6 yuan budget lunch feel as satisfying as a 6,000 yuan royal banquet. I hopped onto my ancient, thoroughly rusted bicycle, a magnificent piece of machinery where absolutely every single screw and metal panel rattled violently, except for the actual warning bell, and began casually pedaling down the street, thoroughly enjoying the worship of the local citizens. But right at that exact peak of emotional bliss, the ultimate cosmic disaster struck. A tiny, shiny coin slipped out of a passing child's hand by the roadside, bounced across the asphalt with unnatural momentum, and miraculously managed to wedge itself firmly into the rubber tread of my moving front tire. Instantly, a blinding, crimson-red flashing matrix exploded across my vision as the broke-ass system unleashed a deafening, terrifying blast of sirens, violently screaming that a critical, apocalyptic bug had been detected because the host had illegally acquired massive capital assets totaling exactly 0.01 RMB. The robotic voice strictly warned that this minor fraction of a penny violated the core directives of absolute poverty, automatically triggering the emergency obliteration protocol and giving me a strict 60-minute deadline to spend the single cent through completely legal, commercial consumption, or else the internal system would violently self-destruct and take my physical body with it into eternity. What the absolute hell kind of demonic scam is this? I shrieked in absolute, terror-induced fury, violently pedaling my rattling bike while screaming at the sky about how the system was actively trying to execute me over a single cent, desperately wondering what a human being could possibly purchase in the modern economy for that price outside of literal, uncompressed atmospheric air. Panicking wildly, I skidded to a halt in front of a nearby bakery stall, slamming my hands onto the counter and breathlessly begging the vendor to quickly sell me a single steamed bun, frantically crying out that I would happily accept just a torn piece of the bun's outer skin if it meant saving my life. The local baker's eyes instantly lit up with frantic, master-worshipping reverence as he gasped, loudly proclaiming that it was his family's absolute supreme honor to have the legendary master Bai Yi grace his humble establishment. Immediately pulling out a massive box of 10 freshly steamed, premium meat buns and forcing them into my arms completely on the house. "Don't you dare give them to me for free, you absolute lunatic," I wailed in pure existential agony, desperately trying to shove the single cent into his apron while screaming that I explicitly demanded to buy them because I was a man of immense wealth, pleading with him to just take the coin. The terrified baker aggressively pushed my hand away, weeping that taking my money would be a direct slap to his own face, passionately arguing that since I had helped President Lin and the other underworld tycoons generate hundreds of billions in revenue, charging me for a street bun would ensure he could never show his face in the merchant community again. "Boss, I am literally begging you on my hands and knees to take this copper coin. This is a literal matter of life and death," I screamed, the digital countdown clock ticking down in my eyes. But the stubborn vendor firmly crossed his arms and declared that accepting my currency would be a permanent insult to my noble, saintly character. "Noble character, my ass. I am about to be blown into a million microscopic smithereens by a digital glitch," I roared, realizing with absolute horror that I only had 30 minutes left on the doomsday clock, leaving me with absolutely no choice but to frantically dial the private emergency group chat I had labeled the old, weak, sick, and disabled squad. The moment the call connected, I screamed into the receiver for Brother Lin to save my life, breathlessly explaining that I had a single cent trapped on my person that I legally could not spend, and ordering him to immediately force every single merchant in the metropolitan area to accept my financial capital. On the other end of the line, Chairman Lin's eyes widened in absolute, code-red terror as he catastrophically misinterpreted my panic, frantically concluding that his supreme benefactor had massive, complex global funds currently stranded in an economic bottleneck and urgently needed to execute an emergency liquidation. The billionaire instantly triggered a Level 1 combat readiness protocol, unleashing a cascade of frantic corporate orders to every single mega mall, retail chain, and boutique shop in the province, strictly decreeing that if they laid eyes on Mr. Bai Yi, they must accept whatever form of payment he offered, commanding that even if I handed them a piece of worthless scrap paper, they must legally value it at 100 million yuan. Lin fiercely thundered into his corporate network that anyone possessing the spectacular audacity to refuse the benefactor's currency was actively trying to halt the entire progress of human civilization, passing down an absolute decree that any street vendor refusing my cash would have their physical shop forcibly relocated to the surface of the moon by tomorrow morning. Clutching that cursed 1-cent coin like a piece of radioactive, white-hot metal, I ran through the city streets like a madman, entirely unaware that President Lin's urgent commands had been completely lost in translation by the time they reached the local street markets. The terrified vendors had received a completely distorted warning, stating that the supreme deity Mr. Bai Yi was coming for a high-stakes regulatory inspection, and that under absolutely no circumstances were they permitted to let him spend a single dime of his sacred funds. I lunged at a candy cart, frantically screaming for a basic lollipop, only for the weeping vendor to drop to his knees and wail that everything on his cart was completely free, desperately pleading with me not to pay because Lord Long had explicitly threatened to permanently relocate his family's entire lineage if he dared to touch a piece of my currency. Gasping for air as the final seconds of the system's execution clock ticked away, I spotted a public municipal restroom and charged toward the entrance, frantically thrusting the single cent at the elderly attendant while screaming that I was paying her the mandatory entrance fee to use the facilities. The sweet old auntie gently pushed my hand back with a look of profound, tearful respect, warmly smiling as she softly told me that while society had grown cruel, her generation still possessed some basic human decency, leaving me standing in the middle of the street entirely frozen, as my internal narrator bitterly wept over the fact that my own terrifyingly noble reputation was about to officially get me vaporized. "You can use this public facility absolutely as much as you want, and please, feel free to poop all you like, because forcing me to accept a single fraction of a penny means you are actively looking down on your auntie's moral decency," the public restroom attendant boomed with righteous compassion, completely blocking my desperate hand, while the digital interface of the broke-ass system flashed a blinding, crimson warning light inside my skull, coldly announcing that the doomsday countdown had reached exactly 59 seconds and that my physical body was about to be obliterated into microscopic ashes. I internally wailed to the heavens, completely overwhelmed by the utter absurdity of my existence, realizing that while it might be hard for wealthy tycoons to pretend to be poor, it was a million times harder for a genuinely destitute guy to simply execute a legal commercial transaction in a world determined to treat him like a saint. With a mere 10 seconds left on the biological execution clock, my frantic eyes swept across the crowded public square and locked onto the ornate maidens wishing well, positioned directly in the center of the concrete plaza, where a stone plaque proudly read, "Toss a coin and make a wish. Absolute sincerity brings immediate results." A brilliant flash of anime recap inspiration struck my brain as I realized that tossing a copper coin into a public fountain constituted a legally recognized form of spiritual sustenance, service consumption, giving me the ultimate loophole to shout at my crappy, glitching system to watch closely as I spent this cursed 1-cent asset on the gods themselves. Channeling the absolute maximum physical energy of my entire life, I dropped into a perfect, dramatic NBA three-pointer shooting stance, flicking my wrist with a thunderous shout of go, as that single copper cent now carrying the literal weight of my mortality traced a mathematically flawless parabola through the air, glinting with a bizarre, cinematic light under the brilliant afternoon sun as an epic orchestral background track seemed to swell in the distance, right before it perfectly sliced through the water's surface with a crisp splash. The system's mechanical interface chimed harmoniously inside my skull, happily announcing that it had detected a successful spiritual service consumption, totaling exactly 0.01 yuan, officially aborting the obliteration protocol and leaving me to collapse against my bicycle while gasping in sheer, unadulterated relief that I had actually survived. But the chaotic butterfly effect of my forced spending was just getting started, because the exact microsecond the coin hit the bottom of the fountain, a pig-slaughtering scream of pure, unadulterated ecstasy erupted from the small lottery shop directly adjacent to the wishing well. A disheveled man burst through the doors, clutching a paper ticket and hysterically screeching to the entire crowd that he had just won the staggering 50 million yuan jackpot, frantically pointing a trembling finger at me, while testifying to the gathering mob that he had watched this majestic master toss a coin into the well, and the exact moment the water splashed, his winning numbers had miraculously materialized on the screen. The entire public square instantly erupted into a religious frenzy, with citizens falling to their knees and screaming that my casual toss was a divine blessing and that the literal god of wealth had manifested in human form before their very eyes. The manic lottery winner aggressively lunged toward me, weeping that he wanted to split the 50 million yuan with me, before completely changing his mind and desperately trying to shove the entire jackpot ticket into my pocket, violently asserting that without my cosmic coin toss, he would still be a penniless loser. The surrounding crowd completely lost their minds, swarming my position like a wall of zombies as rich property owners frantically waved their physical real estate deeds in my face, screaming for me to take their fortunes and bless their lineages so they could rub off a fraction of my reality-bending wealth. The broke-ass system's alarms immediately began blaring in a state of absolute panic, flashing a red alert that a massive, life-threatening wealth assault was currently underway and strictly commanding the host to execute immediate evasive maneuvers to protect his destitution. "Stay the hell away from me," I shrieked, desperately pedaling my rattling bicycle backward to escape the stampede of billionaires. Simple freedom of possessing a single cent and demanding to know why they were all trying to maliciously shackle my soul with 50 million yuan of toxic capital. Just as I was about to be forcibly pushed onto the top tier of the Forbes rich list by the sheer velocity of the crowd's worship, a massive fleet of ultra-luxury sports cars was aggressively gathering at the grand entrance of the Imperial Capital Grand Hotel across town, creating the perfect high society distraction for my escape. Slipping away from my fanatical pursuers, I decided to quietly sneak into the elite hotel lobby, confidently telling myself that as long as I marched through the front doors with a perfectly relaxed, unbothered posture, the snobbish security team would naturally assume I was one of those eccentric, low-profile hidden billionaires who simply preferred a casual streetwear aesthetic. "Stop right there, you pathetic street rat," a burly security guard roared, stepping directly into my path with a sneer of pure classist disgust as he pointed a finger toward the loading docks, coldly barking that all low-class delivery drivers were legally required to use the back door, since this establishment was currently hosting a top-tier celebrity banquet where irrelevant personnel and stray dogs were strictly prohibited from entering. I blinked in mock surprise, offering a dry, heavily sarcastic chuckle as I smoothed down my tattered clothes, confidently lying that I wasn't a delivery driver at all but rather a premier culinary inspector sent to audit the kitchen's food quality, frantically pulling a random piece of paper from my pocket only to internally realize with a groan that I had accidentally grabbed a crumpled recycling receipt instead of a real invitation. The security guard burst into a loud, mocking laugh, telling me to stop my pathetic pretending, while noting that my entire shabby outfit didn't even add up to a net worth of $50, raising his wooden baton and threatening to get physical if I didn't get my impoverished face out of his sight immediately. "Let him inside this instant," a cold, imperious voice commanded from the top of the marble steps, causing the guard's tough guy persona to instantly evaporate as he spun around to offer a sickeningly flattering smile to Su Qing, who was gracefully striding across the lobby clad in a jaw-dropping, high-end designer evening gown. The heiress looked down at me with a mixture of pity and supreme arrogance, coldly whispering that I shouldn't let my tiny ego get inflated just because corporate bosses like Lin and Long chose to artificially protect me back in our small town, reminding me that we were currently standing in the sacred territory of the capital's absolute elite circle, which was entirely different from the crappy little provincial city I crawled out of. "I'm only granting you entry into this grand venue for the absolute sake of our past childhood engagement, purely so you can finally see how the real world operates," she sniffed, commandingly telling me that once I crossed the threshold, I was to find the absolute darkest corner of the hall, stay completely out of sight, and under no circumstances embarrass her lineage by opening my mouth to speak. Got it, loud and clear," I muttered with a compliant bow and a mischievous smirk, internally celebrating the fact that as long as my stomach was fully occupied by a free luxury buffet, I would happily play the role of a completely mute ghost. I offered a quiet prayer of gratitude to the universe, musing that while this toxic chick possessed a thoroughly venomous mouth, she made for a spectacular, premium meal ticket as I eagerly locked my sights onto the majestic seafood display, mentally chanting for the Australian lobsters to prepare for my arrival. Inside the primary grand ballroom, the atmosphere was a dizzying display of sickening wealth and opulence, with massive crystal chandeliers illuminating a stage where the aristocratic heads of the capital's four legendary families were taking turns delivering incredibly pompous, self-congratulatory speeches while aggressively flattering each other's corporate monopolies. They took turns roaring into the microphones, thanking the high society audience for gracing the venue with their majestic presence and confidently proclaiming that their collective alliance would permanently redefine the entire global business landscape. Tonight, prompting a wave of thunderous, robotic applause to erupt from the sea of elite guests. Meanwhile, tucked away in the absolute most remote, shadowy corner of the massive hall, completely isolated from the corporate propaganda, I was holding a porcelain plate that was piled literally as high as a mountain, burying my face in the luxury food and eating with a frantic, unhinged ferocity. I chewed thoughtfully on a massive cracker, letting out a critical, low-pitched mumble about how the expensive foie gras was shockingly dry and aggressively muttering that the premium caviar possessed a thoroughly fishy, low-tier texture, mentally slapping the elite kitchen with a harsh, definitive one-star review. Suddenly, the ballroom's main double doors were violently thrown open as the headmaster of ceremonies stepped onto the podium, his voice cracking with immense, starstruck panic as he bellowed a grand announcement, welcoming the undisputed business overlord of the entire Jiangnan region, President Lin, alongside the terrifying underworld Emperor Lord Long, the national medical guardian Elder Chen, the newly ascended tech tycoon AG, and the legendary god of war Lang Feng into the venue. The entire multi-billion-dollar hall instantly fell into a suffocating, deadpan silence, with the heads of the four great families immediately ceasing their arrogant stage bragging as their faces paled with shock, frantically straightening their expensive silk suits as they scurried toward the entrance like terrified servants. The lead patriarch frantically hissed to the stage crew to keep the luxury classical music playing and command the performance artists to keep dancing, entirely convinced that these five world-shaking legends had specifically graced the capital with their presence purely to honor the business alliance of their four families. However, to the absolute horror of the elite hosts, the five legendary figures completely and utterly ignored the approaching patriarchs, marching straight past their outstretched hands with stone-faced indifference as they navigated the crowded tables, walking in a flawless, synchronized formation directly toward the dark, messy corner where I was currently trying to shove a piece of meat into my mouth. The five titans of the nation came to a dead halt before my folding chair, bowing their heads in a display of absolute, terrifying submission as they chorused in perfect unison, "Sir, you have worked incredibly hard on our behalf, and we have arrived to serve you." I froze mid-chew, looking up with a deeply irritated, heavily sarcastic glare as I internally cursed their spectacular timing, muttering through a mouthful of food whether these five lunatics could just let me eat my free dinner in absolute peace, reminding them that I had zero interest in participating in their public flex routines. The entire scene was witnessed by hundreds of the capital's highest-ranking politicians and billionaires, and the psychological shock was so immense that the guests literally jumped out of their leather seats as if powerful metal springs had been violently welded to their collective butts. The entire high society crowd stood frozen in a state of sheer, unadulterated panic, knocking expensive mahogany chairs all over the marble floor in a chaotic clatter, as a trembling aristocrat breathlessly whispered to his neighbor, demanding to know who on earth that tattered young youth could possibly be if financial gods like President Lin were actively operating as his lowly lackeys. Su Qing stood entirely paralyzed in the center of the room, her designer champagne glass slipping from her fingers as her brain suffered a catastrophic meltdown, internally screaming that she had monumentally misjudged my status yet again, and realizing with pure horror that I was capable of ruling as an absolute king even in the apex circle of the imperial capital. The banquet hall remained locked in a suffocating, deadpan silence as every single billionaire maintained a rigid, trembling standing posture, not a single soul daring to breathe heavily, as every pair of eyes in the room focused entirely on my greasy face while I casually used a cheap napkin to wipe the sauce from my mouth. Sensing the heavy atmosphere, Chairman Lin stepped closer and offered a humble bow, softly suggesting that since the entire elite population of the capital was currently looking to me for salvation, perhaps I could say a few transcendent words of divine wisdom to guide these clueless business juniors toward enlightenment. The surrounding tycoons leaned forward with bated breath, their minds frantically racing as they prepared to record what they assumed would be an earth-shattering macroeconomic prophecy or a top-secret revelation concerning the absolute destiny of the nation itself. I sighed heavily, rising from my chair with an epic, philosophical anime posture as I looked at the crowd of trembling billionaires, casually clearing my throat to announce that if I truly had to deliver a definitive statement to the capital's elite, what I wanted to say was that their premium Australian lobster had undeniably been dead for over 3 hours before cooking. I fiercely pointed my fork at the main buffet line, loudly complaining that the meat was incredibly tough, the texture was thoroughly terrible, and that serving dead, low-grade shrimp at such a high-end aristocratic banquet earned the hotel a definitive, shameful one-star review. The words hit the room like a physical shockwave, and the wealthy owner of the luxury hotel turned completely translucent with absolute horror, violently clutching his chest as he wailed that this culinary oversight was entirely his personal negligence, weeping that serving a dead shrimp to a master was a literal, blasphemous crime against my transcendent taste buds. In a display of pure, unhinged desperation to redeem his corporate lineage, the multimillionaire hotel tycoon rushed straight past his guests, kicked off his leather shoes, and executed a wild, theatrical dive directly into the massive, giant decorative fish tank positioned next to the stage. Splashing violently among the exotic coral, the drowning billionaire surfaced just long enough to scream through the glass, begging me to wait a single moment while he personally caught a live specimen with his bare hands and cooked it for me from scratch to ensure I consumed exclusively the freshest seafood on earth. The surrounding heads of the great families immediately erupted into tearful applause, with one patriarch loudly marveling at the profound, terrifying realm of a true hidden master who was never tired of the finest cuisine and never tired of the most exquisite operational details. Another wealthy heir frantically ordered his servants to sprint to the family vault and retrieve their legendary, multi-million-dollar treasured 8-head abalone so the young gentleman could use its broth to properly rinse his mouth after consuming the low-grade shrimp. I could only watch the absolute circus unfold with an expression of supreme, deadpan sarcasm, turning to my disciples to openly ask if the psychological endurance of these wealthy capital folks was really this spectacularly fragile, utterly baffled as to why a basic comment about stale seafood had driven a billionaire to go swimming in a lobby fish tank. Right at that moment, the familiar mechanical chime of the system echoed in my brain as the interface flashed to life, announcing that it had detected that the host's single sentence had caused severe, chaotic fluctuations in the global premium seafood market, resulting in a massive waste of luxury corporate resources. The digital prompt began calculating a massive financial deduction, before abruptly pausing as its automated voice sighed, noting that because the host possessed a glorious, unyielding balance of zero money, the penalty could not be legally executed, choosing instead to reward me with the supernatural ability to consume this entire multi-course buffet without gaining a single ounce of physical weight. My eyes instantly lit up with pure joy as I celebrated this spectacular loophole, completely abandoning my low profile to loudly demand that the kitchen immediately bring me another 10 large, slow-cooked pork knuckles to maximize my free dinner. I began devouring the massive pork knuckles in 3 giant bites, my face completely covered in grease and sauce while the rest of the capital's elite guests maintained their rigid, terrified standing posture around the room, their faces filled with an overwhelming, silent sense of religious awe as they watched a god eat junk food. Then, completely out of nowhere, a discordant, incredibly arrogant roar tore through the luxury ballroom, violently shattering the bizarre, harmonious silence of the banquet hall. Enough of this absolute madness. I cannot tolerate another single millisecond of this logic-defying insanity, and I am genuinely beginning to wonder if every person in this ballroom has literal tap water sloshing around inside their skulls. A veins popping, explosive roar violently shattered the fragile harmony of the luxury banquet hall, as young Master Yi, the arrogant prodigy of the capital's elite circle, stepped forward with his face contorted in pure rage, gesturing wildly toward my greasy face, while fiercely demanding to know why the entire upper crust of society was currently prostrating themselves and worshipping a thoroughly destitute loser who looked exactly like a starving ghost, reincarnated from the depths of hell. The furious young billionaire turned his fiery wrath directly onto the regional titans, aggressively screaming to the heavens to ask if financial moguls like Boss Lin and underworld lords like Lord Long had been under some dark, supernatural hex to make them grovel before a nobody, prompting Lord Long to narrow his lethal eyes and coldly whisper a deadly warning, asking the kid from the Yi family if he actually possessed the terminal audacity to dictate orders to his superiors. I don't care who this street rat is, because in this elite circle, absolute strength is the only metric that speaks, and I am officially challenging this clown to a definitive, high-stakes duel. Young Master Yi sneered, slamming his fist onto a nearby table and glaring daggers right at me, as he aggressively bellowed for the kid currently stuffing his face with pork knuckles to stand up and prove whether he actually dared to compete against the pride of the capital. I paused mid-bite, blinking through a layer of grease as my internal narrator playfully scoffed at the utter absurdity of a challenge, dryly wondering what on earth we were supposed to be competing in, and sarcastically noting that if it was an eating contest, this overprivileged trust fund kid was doomed to a catastrophic defeat because the system had just blessed me with a permanent, non-weight-gaining gluttony buff. Before I could even suggest an eating competition, young Master Yi viciously clarified that we would be competing across the realms of absolute wealth and physical martial power in a brutal, best 2 out of 3 rounds showdown, declaring with a sadistic grin that the pathetic loser would be legally required to crawl out of the Grand Hotel doors on their bare knees in front of the entire paparazzi. I let out a thoroughly exhausted, unbothered sigh, holding up a half-eaten pork bone as I casually muttered that I was a completely broke citizen with a bank balance that could barely afford a stick of gum, politely asking if we could just skip the dramatic competition entirely so I could finish my free dinner. Ha ha ha. Did you all hear that? The completely broke street rat actually admitted his own pathetic reality right out of his own mouth. The wealthy heir burst into a mocking, theatrical laugh, sweeping his arrogant gaze across the room to jeer at Boss Lin, loudly ridiculating the regional tycoon for naming a penniless, tattered country bumpkin as his supreme benefactor. Young Master Yi then whipped out his customized smartphone and aggressively thrust the screen into the faces of the audience, barking at them to open their unseeing dog eyes and look closely at the real-time balance of his personal account, causing a wave of gasps to ripple through the crowd as onlookers stared at the digital display in absolute horror, whispering in awe that the Ye family was truly a terrifying financial empire for their young heir to comfortably hold 10 billion yuan in liquid, readily spendable funds. Now, you pathetic little kid, pull out your own account and let the capital see what you're working with. Because even if you possess a mere half of my personal pocket change, I will generously consider it your win. The young master jeered, practically vibrating with smug superiority while I offered a relaxed, deeply pitying smile, calmly repeating that I really didn't possess a single asset to my name, and revealing that my digital WeChat wallet balance was literally, mathematically zero. Watching this overconfident brat attempt to humiliate me was honestly getting boring, which is why Boss Lin let out a heavy, deeply disappointed sigh, quietly pulling out his own high-end mobile device and smoothly connecting it via Bluetooth to the massive, wall-sized stadium projector screen overlooking the entire banquet. The regional tycoon coldly announced that while his supreme benefactor was an incredibly low-key immortal who utterly disdained the shallow act of talking about money, he would gladly step forward to personally take this pathetic first round on the master's behalf, prompting the giant electronic display to flash to life and instantly reveal the real-time financial back-end data of the multi-billion yuan Lin corporate group. The string of numbers dominating the screen was so incomprehensibly long and packed with endless zeros that it looked like it was about to physically burst the digital monitor, causing young Master Ye's smug expression to instantly freeze into a mask of pure terror. I must apologize to the audience, as I recently spent a tiny bit of my personal pocket change to purchase 88 luxury villas for my benefactor, so the gargantuan sum you are currently looking at is merely the leftover balance on my secondary supplementary card that I normally use for basic grocery shopping, Boss Lin casually remarked, adjusting his silk tie with a razor-sharp smirk before dryly asking the trembling young Master Yi if he still possessed the stomach to continue competing in the realm of wealth. This is absolutely impossible. Are you running an illegal industrial-grade currency printing press in your basement? The young heir stammered, his 10 billion yuan ego instantly crushed into microscopic dust before he frantically tried to salvage his pride by roaring that having an infinite supply of money was completely useless if a person didn't possess the physical martial life to spend it. Black Tiger Guards, deploy immediately and let these low-class country bumpkins witness the absolute apex of the capital's military power. Yi screamed, clapping his hands as a heavily armed, terrifying death squad of overseas mercenaries violently breached the ballroom doors, their tactical gear clanking as they rapidly raised their dark assault rifle muzzles to point directly at my head and the surrounding tycoons. The young master laughed maniacally, bragging that these were the elite, highly expensive foreign executioners he had personally hired from the global black market, arrogantly sneering at Lord Long to ask if his pathetic local street thugs could even dream of breaching the perimeter to save us. Lord Long didn't even flinch, casually looking past the rifle barrels to inspect the tactical squad before letting out a deeply amused, booming laugh, calling out to the mercenary captain to ask if Little Tiger was the one responsible for training these sloppy soldiers nowadays. The originally murderous, battle-hardened mercenaries froze instantly upon hearing the highly classified, deeply embarrassing nickname, Little Tiger, their imposing bodies violently shaking with pure psychological terror, as the leading captain frantically ripped off his tactical sunglasses to get a clear view of the underworld emperor's face. The moment his eyes locked onto Lord Long's iconic visage, the hardened military veteran was so thoroughly paralyzed with fear that his premium assault rifle slipped right through his trembling fingers and crashed loudly onto the marble floor as he dropped to one knee, stammering in a cracked voice to greet his legendary, mythical grandmaster. It seems the young people of this generation truly cannot recognize real power anymore. So tell me, just how much petty currency did this foolish young Master Yi pay your squad to commit suicide here tonight? Lord Long asked with a terrifyingly calm smile, casually offering to pay them exactly 10 times that black market rate on the spot if they would do him the simple favor of throwing the young master out into the trash. The mercenary captain didn't hesitate for a single microsecond, instantly turning his weapon onto his former employer and offering a deeply apologetic sigh, coldly telling the horrified young Master Yi that because the legendary Grandmaster had officially spoken, not even the gods of heaven could save his life tonight. Are you all completely mad? Are you genuinely rebelling against my family? You people are bullying me far too much, and I absolutely refuse to accept this reality. The young heir shrieked, his entire world collapsing around him as the psychological trauma became too much to bear, causing him to violently clutch his chest, roll his eyes into the back of his head, and collapse straight backward onto the floor in a dead faint. The surrounding high society guests instantly erupted into a frantic panic, with people screaming in absolute terror that young Master Ye's chronic heart condition was acting up and that the poor kid was literally dying of pure, unadulterated anger from losing the challenge, frantically shouting for someone to call an emergency ambulance because the atmosphere in the hall had become suffocatingly tense. Staring at the convulsing body of the elite prodigy, I could only let out a heavy, deeply sarcastic shake of my head, quietly muttering about how incredibly pathetic the psychological endurance of these wealthy capital children truly was if a minor financial defeat could literally trigger a terminal cardiac arrest. Just as young Master Yi was about to draw his absolute final, tragic breath on the ballroom floor, a brilliant fluorescent light suddenly flashed through the dim air as Elder Chen, the national guardian of medicine, gracefully raised his hand with lightning speed, perfectly driving a silver acupuncture needle directly into the dying boy's philtrum acupoint with master-level precision. The young heir violently gasped for air, his eyes snapping open as he clutched his chest in complete bewilderment, stammering to himself in utter shock that he hadn't actually crossed over into the afterlife quite yet. Dying is not going to be that easy for you tonight, kid, because my supreme benefactor has not even finished enjoying his luxury pork knuckles yet. So who on earth gave you the legal permission to ruin the master's culinary appetite by turning into a corpse right next to his table? Elder Chen coldly boomed, prompting the weeping young Master Yi to look up with a mixture of profound gratitude and confusion, trembling as he asked if the legendary medical guardian had actually saved his life out of pure mercy. Make no mistake, I revived your pathetic body solely so you could remain fully conscious and clear-headed enough to watch the exact, agonizing methodology of how you are going to lose this entire challenge. The doctor snapped, aggressively gesturing for the shattered elite circle to continue the game. I couldn't help but let out a loud, highly amused chuckle at the absolute theatricality of the situation, looking down at the broken young master, and dryly reminding him that I had explicitly told him from the very beginning that I was just a completely broke, penniless loser who couldn't even afford a basic bus ticket across town, yet he stubbornly refused to believe my authentic humility and insisted on forcing a grand competition. Now just look at your pathetic situation. You completely failed to beat me in terms of sheer wealth. You were utterly outclassed in terms of military manpower, and the universe wouldn't even let you successfully escape through the sweet release of death. So tell me, what exactly were you trying to achieve with your life tonight? I asked with a smirk, my words acting like a final, devastating mental execution. A broke loser? If a reality-bending entity like you is considered a broke loser, then what the hell am I supposed to be? Am I just a piece of absolute, low-class trash? Young Master Yi hysterically shrieked, his mind completely snapping under the weight of the irony as he burst into a wild, unhinged laugh, rolling around on the floor while screaming to the entire ballroom that he was garbage. Right on cue, the familiar mechanical chime of the system echoed in my brain as the digital interface flashed a golden prompt, enthusiastically announcing that because the host had successfully obliterated the psychological defenses of a top-tier rich kid by aggressively playing the victim, I had officially unlocked the elite achievement Murdering the Heart, rewarding my inventory with a single, magnificent bottle of Lao Gan Ma chili sauce, the undisputed ultimate rice pairing artifact of the culinary world. My eyes lit up with genuine excitement as I admired the red jar, internally cheering that the system had finally granted me a reward that was actually practical for a hungry guy, immediately tossing the bottle over to Brother Lin and casually complaining that the hotel's luxury pork knuckle was tasting a bit bland, ordering him to quickly mix in the chili sauce and bring me another 10 giant plates of meat. Boss Lin's eyes practically welled with tears of religious devotion as he cradled the cheap chili jar like a sacred relic, passionately declaring to the starstruck guests that even in a moment of supreme, world-shaking victory, his benefactor only thought of the humble purity of Lao Ganma, marveling at how breathtakingly unpretentious and spiritually clean my soul was, before frantically shouting to the kitchen staff that he would personally arrange the next 10 courses immediately. But just as I was successfully establishing my legendary, low-profile legacy in the heart of the imperial capital, using nothing but a bottle of cheap grocery store chili, the shadowy leadership of the Overseas Black Gold Society was currently watching the live feed from their hidden headquarters, completely unable to sit still any longer after witnessing my reality-bending influence. Realizing that their corporate empire was in imminent danger of total collapse, the Syndicate immediately dispatched their absolute #1 ace assassin to my location, with the tactical briefing room echoing with a cold voice identifying the target as Bei Yi, codenamed Core, and noting that high-level intelligence explicitly proved I was the secret, miraculous key behind the explosive rise of the Lin Group. The black market operators cold-bloodedly concluded that as long as they executed a flawless stealth assassination to eliminate my physical body from the equation, the entire global business landscape would easily fall back under their control. The legendary elite assassin, known across the underworld as the Night Demon, safely touched down on the perimeter of my newly acquired estate under the cover of darkness, creeping through the shadows with lethal precision as he prepared to advance toward the main structure. However, the exact millisecond his tactical boot crossed the property line, a blinding, multicolored neon light show suddenly erupted from the roof of the villa, illuminating the entire estate like a futuristic disco. Infrared security alarms? How laughably low-end and predictable for a supposed hidden billionaire, the Night Demon scoffed, offering an arrogant smirk as he prepared to bypass the beams, entirely unaware that the system was operating on a completely different level of psychological warfare. Welcome, pathetic intruder. The host's absolute best tech wizard friend, AGE, is currently broadcasting live for your imminent demise. A booming, high-definition, automated voice suddenly blasted from hidden surround sound speakers across the lawn, cheerfully informing the assassin that he had officially entered the exclusive, high-security defense perimeter belonging to the absolute master of the broom closet. The digital voice politely commanded the lethal operative to cease his illegal intrusion immediately, before happily announcing that to celebrate his arrival, the security system would now play the universe's #1 divine pop anthem, Most Dazzling National Wind, at maximum operational capacity. Instantly, every single high-power stadium audio system concealed within the villa's architecture activated at absolute full blast, unleashing the deafening, bass-heavy, rhythmically chaotic track into the night air with a sound pressure level comparable to a literal heavy military subwoofer. The sonic shockwave was so immense that it directly blasted the night demon right out of his stealth stance, forcing the legendary killer to drop his weapons and roll around on the grass in pure, unadulterated agony as he clutched his bleeding ears, screaming through his tactical mask that this wasn't a security system but a horrific, highly illegal sonic weapon designed to liquefy his brain. Before I could even suggest an eating competition, young Master Yi viciously clarified that we would be competing across the realms of absolute wealth and physical martial power in a brutal, best 2 out of 3 round showdown, declaring with a sadistic grin that the pathetic loser would be legally required to crawl out of the Grand Hotel doors on their bare knees in front of the entire paparazzi. I let out a thoroughly exhausted, unbothered sigh, holding up a half-eaten pork bone as I casually muttered that I was a completely broke citizen with a bank balance that could barely afford a stick of gum, politely asking if we could just skip the dramatic competition entirely so I could finish my free dinner. Ha ha ha, did you all hear that? The completely broke street rat actually admitted his own pathetic reality right out of his own mouth. The wealthy heir burst into a mocking, theatrical laugh, sweeping his arrogant gaze across the room to jeer at Boss Lin, loudly ridiculating the regional tycoon for naming a penniless, tattered country bumpkin as his supreme benefactor. Young Master Yi then whipped out his customized smartphone and aggressively thrust the screen into the faces of the audience, barking at them to open their unseeing dog eyes and look closely at the real-time balance of his personal account, causing a wave of gasps to ripple through the crowd as onlookers stared at the digital display in absolute horror, whispering in awe that the Ye family was truly a terrifying financial empire for their young heir to comfortably hold 10 billion yuan in liquid, readily spendable funds. Now, you pathetic little kid, pull out your own account and let the capital see what you're working with, because even if you possess a mere half of my personal pocket change, I will generously consider it your win. The young master jeered, practically vibrating with smug superiority while I offered a relaxed, deeply pitying smile, calmly repeating that I really didn't possess a single asset to my name and revealing that my digital WeChat wallet balance was literally, mathematically zero. Watching this overconfident brat attempt to humiliate me was honestly getting boring, which is why Boss Lin let out a heavy, deeply disappointed sigh, quietly pulling out his own high-end mobile device and smoothly connecting it via Bluetooth to the massive, wall-sized stadium projector screen overlooking the entire banquet. The regional tycoon coldly announced that while his supreme benefactor was an incredibly low-key immortal who utterly disdained the shallow act of talking about money, he would gladly step forward to personally take this pathetic first round on the master's behalf, prompting the giant electronic display to flash to life and instantly reveal the real-time financial back-end data of the multi-billion yuan Lin corporate group. The string of numbers dominating the screen was so incomprehensibly long and packed with endless zeros that it looked like it was about to physically burst the digital monitor, causing young Master Ye's smug expression to instantly freeze into a mask of pure terror. I must apologize to the audience, as I recently spent a tiny bit of my personal pocket change to purchase 88 luxury villas for my benefactor, so the gargantuan sum you are currently looking at is merely the leftover balance on my secondary supplementary card that I normally use for basic grocery shopping, Boss Lin casually remarked, adjusting his silk tie with a razor-sharp smirk before dryly asking the trembling young Master Ye if he still possessed the stomach to continue competing in the realm of wealth. This is absolutely impossible. Are you running an illegal, industrial-grade currency printing press in your basement? The young heir stammered, his 10 billion yuan ego instantly crushed into microscopic dust before he frantically tried to salvage his pride by roaring that having an infinite supply of money was completely useless if a person didn't possess the physical martial life to spend it. Black Tiger Guards, deploy immediately and let these low-class country bumpkins witness the absolute apex of the capital's military power. Yi screamed, clapping his hands as a heavily armed, terrifying death squad of overseas mercenaries violently breached the ballroom doors, their tactical gear clanking as they rapidly raised their dark assault rifle muzzles to point directly at my head and the surrounding tycoons. The young master laughed maniacally, bragging that these were the elite, highly expensive foreign executioners he had personally hired from the global black market, arrogantly sneering at Lord Long to ask if his pathetic local street thugs could even dream of breaching the perimeter to save us. Lord Long didn't even flinch, casually looking past the rifle barrels to inspect the tactical squad before letting out a deeply amused, booming laugh, calling out to the mercenary captain to ask if Little Tiger was the one responsible for training these sloppy soldiers nowadays. The originally murderous, battle-hardened mercenaries froze instantly upon hearing the highly classified, deeply embarrassing nickname Little Tiger, their imposing bodies violently shaking with pure psychological terror as the leading captain frantically ripped off his tactical sunglasses to get a clear view of the underworld emperor's face. The moment his eyes locked onto Lord Long's iconic visage, the hardened military veteran was so thoroughly paralyzed with fear that his premium assault rifle slipped right through his trembling fingers and crashed loudly onto the marble floor as he dropped to one knee, stammering in a cracked voice to greet his legendary, mythical grandmaster. It seems the young people of this generation truly cannot recognize real power anymore. So tell me, just how much petty currency did this foolish young Master Yi pay your squad to commit suicide here tonight? Lord Long asked with a terrifyingly calm smile, casually offering to pay them exactly 10 times that black market rate on the spot if they would do him the simple favor of throwing the young master out into the trash. The mercenary captain didn't hesitate for a single microsecond, instantly turning his weapon onto his former employer and offering a deeply apologetic sigh, coldly telling the horrified young Master Yi that because the legendary Grandmaster had officially spoken, not even the gods of heaven could save his life tonight. Are you all completely mad? Are you genuinely rebelling against my family? You people are bullying me far too much, and I absolutely refuse to accept this reality. The young heir shrieked, his entire world collapsing around him as the psychological trauma became too much to bear, causing him to violently clutch his chest, roll his eyes into the back of his head, and collapse straight backward onto the floor in a dead faint. The surrounding high society guests instantly erupted into a frantic panic, with people screaming in absolute terror that young Master Yi's chronic heart condition was acting up and that the poor kid was literally dying of pure, unadulterated anger from losing the challenge, frantically shouting for someone to call an emergency ambulance because the atmosphere in the hall had become suffocatingly tense. Staring at the convulsing body of the elite prodigy, I could only let out a heavy, deeply sarcastic shake of my head, quietly muttering about how incredibly pathetic the psychological endurance of these wealthy capital children truly was, if a minor financial defeat could literally trigger a terminal cardiac arrest. Just as young Master Yi was about to draw his absolute final, tragic breath on the ballroom floor, a brilliant fluorescent light suddenly flashed through the dim air as Elder Chen, the national guardian of medicine, gracefully raised his hand with lightning speed, perfectly driving a silver acupuncture needle directly into the dying boy's philtrum acupoint with master-level precision. The young heir violently gasped for air, his eyes snapping open as he clutched his chest in complete bewilderment, stammering to himself in utter shock that he hadn't actually crossed over into the afterlife quite yet. Dying is not going to be that easy for you tonight, kid, because my supreme benefactor has not even finished enjoying his luxury pork knuckles yet. So who on earth gave you the legal permission to ruin the master's culinary appetite by turning into a corpse right next to his table? Elder Chen coldly boomed, prompting the weeping young Master Yi to look up with a mixture of profound gratitude and confusion, trembling as he asked if the legendary medical guardian had actually saved his life out of pure mercy. Make no mistake, I revived your pathetic body solely so you could remain fully conscious and clear-headed enough to watch the exact, agonizing methodology of how you are going to lose this entire challenge. The doctor snapped, aggressively gesturing for the shattered elite circle to continue the game. I couldn't help but let out a loud, highly amused chuckle at the absolute theatricality of the situation, looking down at the broken young master, and dryly reminding him that I had explicitly told him from the very beginning that I was just a completely broke, penniless loser who couldn't even afford a basic bus ticket across town, yet he stubbornly refused to believe my authentic humility and insisted on forcing a grand competition. Now just look at your pathetic situation. You completely failed to beat me in terms of sheer wealth. You were utterly outclassed in terms of military manpower, and the universe wouldn't even let you successfully escape through the sweet release of death. So tell me, what exactly were you trying to achieve with your life tonight? I asked with a smirk, my words acting like a final, devastating mental execution. A broke loser? If a reality-bending entity like you is considered a broke loser, then what the hell am I supposed to be? Am I just a piece of absolute low-class trash? Young Master Yi hysterically shrieked, his mind completely snapping under the weight of the irony as he burst into a wild, unhinged laugh, rolling around on the floor while screaming to the entire ballroom that he was garbage. Right on cue, the familiar mechanical chime of the system echoed in my brain as the digital interface flashed a golden prompt, enthusiastically announcing that because the host had successfully obliterated the psychological defenses of a top-tier rich kid by aggressively playing the victim, I had officially unlocked the elite achievement, Murdering the Heart, rewarding my inventory with a single, magnificent bottle of Laogan Ma chili sauce, the undisputed ultimate rice pairing artifact of the culinary world. My eyes lit up with genuine excitement as I admired the red jar, internally cheering that the system had finally granted me a reward that was actually practical for a hungry guy. Immediately tossing the bottle over to Brother Lin and casually complaining that the hotel's luxury pork knuckle was tasting a bit bland, ordering him to quickly mix in the chili sauce and bring me another 10 giant plates of meat. Boss Lin's eyes practically welled with tears of religious devotion as he cradled the cheap chili jar like a sacred relic, passionately declaring to the starstruck guests that even in a moment of supreme, world-shaking victory, his benefactor only thought of the humble purity of Laogan Ma, marveling at how breathtakingly unpretentious and spiritually clean my soul was, before frantically shouting to the kitchen staff that he would personally arrange the next 10 courses immediately. But just as I was successfully establishing my legendary, low-profile legacy in the heart of the imperial capital, using nothing but a bottle of cheap grocery store chili, the shadowy leadership of the Overseas Black Gold Society was currently watching the live feed from their hidden headquarters, completely unable to sit still any longer after witnessing my reality-bending influence. Realizing that their corporate empire was in imminent danger of total collapse, the syndicate immediately dispatched their absolute #1 ace assassin to my location, with the tactical briefing room echoing with a cold voice identifying the target as Bei Yi, codename Core, and noting that high-level intelligence explicitly proved I was the secret, miraculous key behind the explosive rise of the Lin Group. The black market operators cold-bloodedly concluded that as long as they executed a flawless stealth assassination to eliminate my physical body from the equation, the entire global business landscape would easily fall back under their control. The legendary elite assassin, known across the underworld as the Night Demon, safely touched down on the perimeter of my newly acquired estate under the cover of darkness, creeping through the shadows with lethal precision as he prepared to advance toward the main structure. However, the exact millisecond his tactical boot crossed the property line, a blinding, multicolored neon light show suddenly erupted from the roof of the villa, illuminating the entire estate like a futuristic disco. Infrared security alarms, how laughably low-end and predictable for a supposed hidden billionaire, the Night Demon scoffed, offering an arrogant smirk as he prepared to bypass the beams, entirely unaware that the system was operating on a completely different level of psychological warfare. Welcome, pathetic intruder. The host's absolute best tech wizard friend, AG, is currently broadcasting live for your imminent demise. A booming, high-definition automated voice suddenly blasted from hidden surround sound speakers across the lawn, cheerfully informing the assassin that he had officially entered the exclusive, high-security defense perimeter belonging to the absolute master of the broom closet. The digital voice politely commanded the lethal operative to cease his illegal intrusion immediately, before happily announcing that, to celebrate his arrival, the security system would now play the universe's #1 divine pop anthem, Most Dazzling National Wind, at maximum operational capacity. Instantly, every single high-power stadium audio system concealed within the villa's architecture activated at absolute full blast, unleashing the deafening, bass-heavy, rhythmically chaotic track into the night air with a sound pressure level comparable to a literal heavy military subwoofer. The sonic shockwave was so immense that it directly blasted the Night Demon right out of his stealth stance, forcing the legendary killer to drop his weapons and roll around on the grass in pure, unadulterated agony as he clutched his bleeding ears, screaming through his tactical mask that this wasn't a security system but a horrific, highly illegal sonic weapon designed to liquefy his brain. Screenshot #1 violently flashed onto the display, exposing a digitized document from exactly 10 years ago, where Teacher Wang had literally crossed out my name from the official financial aid list for profoundly impoverished students and maliciously replaced it with the name of his own, wealthy biological relative. Before the room could breathe, screenshot #2 manifested, detailing extensive chat logs from the private parents group where the corrupt educator had systematically extorted expensive gifts, coldly arranging for the children of non-compliant parents to be seated directly next to the classroom trash can, a psychological torture zone where I had spent years of my youth. The final nail in the coffin arrived via screenshot #3, which revealed Teacher Wang's live municipal bank records from last night, explicitly proving that he had just taken the class's collective alumni donations and used them to top up a private, 50,000 yuan VIP membership at a luxury adult foot massage parlor. The entire banquet hall instantly descended into a state of absolute chaos as shocked classmates jumped from their seats, with one horrified youth screaming that his family's hard-earned tuition aid had been stolen by a thief, while another roared that his father had been forced to bribe the man with premium Mao Tai liquor just to let him be the class rep, all of them fiercely cursing the role model for spending their charitable donations on elite foot massages. Turn that screen off immediately. This is a completely fabricated rumor generated by deepfake artificial intelligence. Teacher Wang hysterically screamed, his entire body trembling with pure psychological terror as he desperately threatened to sue me for high-level defamation, wildly claiming that as a senior, decorated academic, no one in this city possessed the legal authority to touch his status. He fiercely glared at me, roaring that I had forged the evidence and asking if I genuinely thought I could survive in this territory after insulting him, to which I simply offered a relaxed smirk, calmly telling the old man that he knew perfectly well whether the data was authentic before reiterating to the room that as a broke guy, I genuinely couldn't donate a single cent. Haha, you finally admitted it, you pathetic, impoverished loser. Teacher Wang cackled in a desperate bid to save face, but before his laughter could even finish echoing, a booming voice from the entrance coldly announced that his supreme benefactor indeed lacked petty cash because the master felt that throwing paper currency directly at a corrupt institution was incredibly tacky and easily embezzled by local human parasite. President Lin proudly strode into the ballroom, announcing to the stunned audience that under Mr. Beiye's direct spiritual guidance, the Lin corporate group had already finalized the acquisition of 10 impoverished mountainous sites across the district to fully fund the construction of 10 high-standard Beiyi Hope elementary schools for a total investment of 500 million yuan. The staggering figure of $500 million hit the room like a physical bomb, causing the entire class to gasp in absolute shock while I let out a heavy, deeply sarcastic sigh, casually muttering that I had originally intended to keep a thoroughly low profile by constructing 100 schools, but because I was profoundly terrified of scaring their fragile minds, I decided to just build 10 of them for basic fun, proving the classic idiom that no matter how poor a society is, it can never afford to skimp on youth education. Teacher Wang completely collapsed into his leather chair like a deflated balloon, the sheer, crushing weight of a 500 million yuan philanthropic flex pressing down on his chest until he could barely draw breath, though he still managed to weakly sputter that financial capital meant nothing because he possessed massive, unyielding personal connections within the local educational board. Suddenly, the reinforced double doors of the banquet hall were violently blown open with a loud bang as the god of war Lang Feng marched into the room, clad in full tactical camouflage and radiating the sharp, terrifying scent of live gunpowder. Stepping aside to reveal a stern, high-ranking official in a tailored suit, Lang Feng coldly pointed his combat boot at the trembling teacher, asking the old fraud with a razor-sharp smirk if this was the exact municipal connection he was currently relying on to protect his crimes. Director Zhang, the absolute head executive of the entire education bureau. Teacher Wang stammered, his eyes rolling back in pure horror as Director Zhang ignored his whimpering, warmly turning to face Lang Feng to greet his old military squad leader before the god of war, coldly identified the criminal as the exact monster who had insulted Mr. Bai Yi, embezzled aid from impoverished children, and permanently corrupted the sacred morals of the teaching profession. The director of education stepped forward, his voice booming like thunder as he officially announced that having personally reviewed the real-time evidence broadcasted on the big screen, Wang Def's teaching credentials were immediately and permanently revoked, declaring that a massive criminal investigation into all his historical funds would begin before ordering him to prepare to spend the absolute remainder of his natural life behind bars. Right on cue, two burly police officers strode into the luxury banquet hall and slapped a pair of heavy, freezing silver handcuffs onto the weeping teacher's wrists, prompting the ruined man to desperately drag his boots against the floor while shrieking for me to remember his esteemed mentorship and save him from the law. I merely tilted my head with an expression of supreme, deadpan face blindness, offering a deeply sarcastic wave, as I loudly told the officers that I unfortunately suffered from a profound medical inability to recognize faces and had absolutely no memory of who this strange criminal was. The moment the police dragged the old fraud away, the remaining classmates instantly swarmed my table like a pack of rabid wolves, with one wealthy student frantically begging to become my personal fashion accessory if it meant basking in my divine light, while another desperately asked if my newly announced Hope Elementary schools required a high-salary janitor so he could join my inner circle. AG enthusiastically pulled out his tablet, proudly announcing to the room that the official names for the 10 academic institutions had been successfully decided, suggesting they should be legally registered as Broke Loser, 1st Elementary all the way through Broke Loser, 10th Elementary, to honor my legacy. Change those ridiculous names immediately, you absolute lunatic, unless your core goal is to maliciously brainwash the youth of this nation into aspiring to be completely penniless street rats from a young age. I shrieked, rubbing my temples in pure exhaustion while internally musing that spending 500 million yuan of a billionaire's money was indeed the ultimate broke loser behavior, hoping with all my heart that my glitching system would finally quiet down and let me sleep. Naturally, the universe completely despised my peace, because a blinding golden prompt suddenly exploded across my vision as the system announced an epic core mode upgrade, enthusiastically congratulating the host for unlocking the apocalyptic debt mode. I froze in absolute, terror-induced confusion as the digital interface explained that under this new inverse setting, the more massive, crushing negative liabilities my personal account possessed, the more stable the system would become, instantly flashing a countdown task that required me to intentionally owe President Lin, Master Long, Elder Chen, AG, and Lang Feng a personal debt of gratitude or physical currency worth exactly 100 million yuan each. The robotic voice strictly warned that my total negative liability must not be a single cent less than 500 million yuan within the next 3 days, stating that if the task failed, the system would officially determine that the host was far too wealthy and immediately trigger the ultimate obliteration protocol to turn me into cosmic dust. Oh, 500 million yuan to the exact 5 titans who literally treat me like a supreme, unyielding deity. I internally screamed in pure existential panic, realizing that asking for a loan from people who wanted to give me their entire life savings was going to be an absolute administrative nightmare. Gathering my courage, I dialed President Lin and awkwardly cleared my throat, stammering that I was experiencing a bit of a tight financial crunch lately and wondering if he could possibly lend me a cool 100 million yuan to get by. My supreme benefactor, you are finally, truly willing to grant me the ultimate honor of asking for my humble assistance. President Lin passionately wept into the receiver, screaming that a mere 100 million was an insult to my status before instantly ordering his accounting department to wire a staggering 1 billion yuan to my account so I could use it as pocket change to purchase a basic pack of cigarette. No, absolutely do not send me 1 billion. I explicitly demand exactly 100 million yuan and not a single copper coin more. I shrieked into the phone, frantically explaining that this transaction must legally be structured as a high-interest loan, aggressively ordering him to prepare a physical IOU contract that I was absolutely required to pay back to his estate. The billionaire corporate lord gasped in complete, heart-shattered confusion, pleading with me to explain why I was torturing his soul with an IOU when the money was meant as a sacred tribute, tearfully arguing that forcing him to hold a debt contract over his own master would actively shorten his biological lifespan. I command you to take this official IOU this instant, because if you refuse to hold my legal debt, it explicitly means you are looking down on my personal integrity, and I vow to pay you back with triple the interest. I roared, forcing the contract into his hands until a sudden flash of fanatical enlightenment illuminated President Lin's face. The tycoon burst into a wild, joyous laugh, loudly proclaiming to his secretary that he finally understood the benefactor's divine wisdom, realizing that the master was testing his absolute loyalty and tempering his spiritual state by willingly bearing the heavy karma of human debt, proudly promising that he would absolutely ensure I was legally prevented from paying the money back early. Letting out a massive gasp of relief as the system logged 100 million UN debt to Lin, I wiped the cold sweat from my forehead, internally groaning about how earning money in this life was a million times easier than trying to successfully owe it to people. Recognizing that simply borrowing cash from the remaining 4 titans would likely cause them to have simultaneous heart attacks, I realized I would have to rapidly pivot my strategy toward owing them massive debts of physical destruction, deciding that deliberately smashing their priceless personal property was the fastest way to rack up a massive financial liability. Offering a thoroughly theatrical, completely fake stumble right in front of the hotel's main exhibition cabinet, I loudly shouted, "Oops!" My hand completely slipped as I deliberately swiped my arm across the display shelf, sending a priceless, multi-million-dollar ancient jade heirloom crashing violently onto the marble floor where it shattered into a million irreversible pieces. Broken. Good that it's broken, for you are teaching me the profound, unyielding art of letting go of material desires. Master Long boomed without even lifting his head from the floor, his face illuminated by a flash of absolute fanatical enlightenment as he stared at the shattered remnants of his ancient family heirloom. He wildly declared that although the artifact was technically his family's most sacred treasure, it had been tragically tainted by generations of worldly greed, fiercely proclaiming that by smashing it to pieces with my own divine hands, I had selflessly helped his lineage sever its mortal karma. Sir, this heirloom was legally appraised at 300 million yuan, and by destroying it, you have bestowed a staggering, life-changing favor upon my entire household. The old man wept in pure joy, frantically pulling a golden scroll from his robes and begging me to sign a gratitude IOU to formalize the spiritual debt. I aggressively batted the contract away, sweating profusely as I yelled that I only wanted to owe him a clean 100 million yuan to satisfy my system requirements, but Master Long let out a horrified gasp, fiercely arguing that anything less than 300 million would be a direct, insulting spit in the face of the Long family's honor, ultimately forcing me to sign for the full amount. Holy crap! I internally screamed as the system interface flashed, realizing I had aggressively overcompleted the objective and was now a staggering 400 million yuan in debt from just 2 people. Desperate to lock down the remaining liabilities before my time ran out, I rushed over to find Elder Chen at his traditional medical compound, casually asking if he could supply me with 100 million yuan worth of rare medicinal herbs on a strictly binding payment tab. My supreme benefactor, you have finally, truly arrived to undergo the legendary, soul-shattering ritual of debt therapy. Elder Chen breathlessly shrieked, his ancient eyes widening with fanatical reverence as I blinked in complete confusion, repeating the words, debt therapy, like a total idiot. Yes, my brilliant medical mind comprehends your cosmic strategy, the old doctor proclaimed, pacing frantically around his laboratory while explaining that I was intentionally bearing the crushing psychological pressure of massive, unyielding debt to violently stimulate my body's hidden physical potential, because only by carrying a deep sense of existential guilt could a true master reach the supreme, untamed realm of ultimate martial arts. Before I could even open my mouth to correct his psychotic medical theory, Elder Chen aggressively unveiled a massive, glowing vault of the rarest botanical specimens on Earth, loudly announcing that he had prepared a collection worth a staggering 1 billion yuan and practically begged me to owe him this catastrophic financial favor. Damn it all, I internally roared, staring at the mountains of glowing ginseng while realizing that I had explicitly asked for a simple 100 million and this old lunatic had forcefully multiplied it tenfold, leaving me to terrifiedly wonder if the system would look at my broken bank account, decide I was too pathetically poor to exist, and trigger the ultimate obliteration protocol to blow me up anyway. Yet against all logical odds, under my forceful demands to keep the paperwork strictly structured as legal liabilities and the 5 big shots wildly overactive, fanatical imaginations, I successfully managed to accumulate a grand total debt of exactly 2 billion yuan across the board. I finally finished this absolute nightmare of a task. I triumphantly shouted to the empty room, wiping the exhaustion from my face while internally, noting that since I officially owed a staggering 2 billion, the glitching system should finally be completely satisfied. Right on cue, a glorious digital fanfare echoed inside my mind as the system enthusiastically congratulated the host for perfectly completing the core task, bearing karma, proudly announcing that my debt quota had exceeded the original, requirement by a mind-blowing 1500%, and pushed my overall system stability into the coveted S rank. As a grand prize, the interface granted me a passive ability known as the Debt is a Blessing Halo, a bizarre cosmic status effect that legally prevented any of my current or future creditors from ever refusing a single reasonable loan request I threw their way. Debt is a blessing? What kind of utterly idiotic, counterintuitive halo is this supposed to be? I muttered in complete speechlessness, entirely unaware that at that exact microsecond, the 5 corporate and martial titans were carefully framing the IOUs I had signed in pure gold leaf, reverently hanging the debt contracts in the most prominent, heavily guarded locations of their respective luxury living rooms. This document is the benefactor's sacred token, a heavy, cosmic mission bestowed directly upon my bloodline. Master Long wept to his guards, fiercely swearing that my tattered IOU was infinitely more precious than any ancient family heirloom, and vowing to protect this financial karma with his literal life. I could only massage my temples in absolute exasperation, dryly narrating to myself that while normal human beings get cripplingly stressed when they owe money, I was apparently forced to accumulate multi-billion yuan liabilities just to extend my biological lifespan, proving that this absurd world was spinning further away from sanity by the hour. Still, I comforted myself with the thought that having a massive 2 billion yuan debt buffer would finally allow my days as a broke loser to remain peaceful and unbothered, but my optimism was instantly shattered when the massive liability failed to bring tranquility, and instead attracted an entirely new pack of uninvited, mystical martial artists to my yard. I was casually walking through the upscale villa district, happily collecting discarded plastic bottles, while internally celebrating how remarkably high quality the neighborhood's recycling waste was, when a sudden, unnatural gale carrying the sharp, bitter scent of ancient herbs ripped through the trees, culminating in a flamboyant young man clad in flowing historical robes, executing a high-level jump to land perfectly atop the estate's reinforced main gate. Haha! What a thoroughly magnificent, treasured land of supreme feng shui. The robed youth boastfully laughed, staring down at my lawn while loudly proclaiming that the cosmic fortune converging on this specific coordinate was so immense that a literal spirit vein must be hidden beneath the dirt. Hey, you ridiculous cosplayer up there, you're actively blocking the sunlight and preventing me from properly digging through this public trash bin. I yelled up at him, waving a plastic bag while dryly informing him that the high-value recycling bottles were strictly organized inside the bin while the non-recyclable garbage was kept outside. Insolent peasant. I am the supreme young master of the legendary Ouyang clan, the boy furiously barked, his face twisting in aristocratic anger as he announced that my entire residential estate had already been officially designated as the private property of the Ouyang family, commanding me to get the hell out of his sight if I knew what was good for my health. Suddenly, the mechanical ping of the system flashed across my eyes, calmly identifying that an elite target was currently attempting to illegalize and seize the host's primary residence, calculating the threat level as completely general, because the localized moron had simply mistaken the Wujiang Villa area's massive wealth-fortune convergence point for a mystical feng shui spirit vein. Just as young Master Ouyang took a deep breath to continue showing off his theatrical Qinggong light footwork, a heavy, devastating fist, accompanied by a howling, supersonic wind, violently tore through the air from the side, causing the young master's arrogant smirk to instantly vanish, as he plummeted straight out of the sky like a broken cannonball, slamming face first into the concrete pavement below. There is an absolute no-flying restriction enforced inside this residential villa area, and you should definitely refrain from executing advanced martial arts directly where I am standing, because you will easily get brutally beaten up by the staff, Lang Feng coldly stated, stepping out from the shadows while adjusting his tactical gloves. You absolute barbarian, you dare to execute a cowardly sneak attack against a noble heir? The young master wheezed from the dirt, clutching his bruised ribs while screaming that we had committed a catastrophic taboo in the sacred martial world. Cut the absolute crap, I dryly interrupted, looking down at his crumpled form with supreme indifference, before calmly noting that if his dramatic fall had damaged a single inch of the villa's expensive public landscaping, I would ensure he was billed for the property destruction at full market price. Before the argument could escalate, an ancient elder of the Ouyang clan, sporting a long, wispy goatee, stepped out from the foliage with a sinister glare, furiously roaring that we were arrogant lunatics for daring to physically harm his young master, and vowing that he would force us to taste the agonizing power of his family's legendary 7-day heartbreak powder. The elder executed a rapid, long-range palm strike, unleashing a massive cloud of completely colorless, odorless toxic powder directly toward Ling Feng's exposed face with a sinister cackle. With a brilliant flash of fluorescent spiritual light, Elder Chen materialized out of thin air directly in front of Lang Feng's position, his hand moving like a lightning bolt as he deployed 2 gleaming silver needles that precisely clamped onto the swirling cloud of toxic dust, freezing the chemical reaction instantly. The 7-day heartbreak powder? I literally discarded this exact, pathetic chemical formula from my laboratory over 30 years ago. Elder Chen contemptuously scoffed, holding the captured powder up to the sunlight while pointing out that the ingredient ratio was laughably crude, simple, and possessed a highly obvious, fatal cinnabar backlash effect. You, how on earth do you possess the secret oral prescription to our family's most guarded chemical weapon? the goateed elder stammered, his face turning an ash-gray color as Elder Chen aggressively stepped into his personal space, coldly adding that not only was his poison work fundamentally garbage, but his internal energy cultivation was even worse. The master physician pointed a needle directly at the man's chest, demandingly asking if he felt a massive, painful blockage of internal energy exactly 3 inches below his right ribs the moment he attempted to strike, brutally warning the old man that if he dared to practice that flawed style for another 10 years, his blood and chi would violently flow backward and cause his entire physical body to explode on the spot. Elder Chen swiftly tapped a hidden pressure point on the old man's torso, causing a loud popping sound to echo through the yard before the elder gasped, blinking in absolute bewilderment as he clutched his side and wildly shouted that the lifelong internal injury that had plagued his cultivation was suddenly, completely healed. Woo, what kind of godlike miraculous medical skill is this? The Ouyang family members gasped, but before they could process the miracle, the towering figure of the Ouyang family head himself strode forward with an expression of intense, unyielding authority, fiercely declaring that our junior faction was far too arrogant. Today, I shall personally test the structural depth of your skills, the patriarch roared, executing a terrifying, full-power palm strike that unleashed a literal hurricane of destructive energy aimed directly at my chest, internally reasoning that he simply needed to violently take down the core figure of our bizarre group to break our morale. However, the exact millisecond the Ouyang family head's destructive palm came within 3 meters of my peaceful, unbothered form, his entire body froze completely solid in midair, the roaring hurricane of energy vanishing into a dead, absolute silence. The patriarch's eyes widened to the size of flying saucers as a cold sweat drenched his robes, his internal instincts screaming in pure, existential terror as he gazed upon my complete nonchalance, wildly wondering how on earth this entity could possibly be a mere human being. To his highly trained spiritual vision, my casual stance made me look like an ancient, earthly immortal, a true, cosmic dragon that seamlessly controlled the entire fortune of heaven and earth with a single breath, filling his mind with a horrifying realization that he had just attempted to launch a physical assault against a literal household god. Immortal, please, I beg you to forgive this incredibly ignorant junior's absolute stupidity. The terrifying patriarch instantly shrieked, dropping out of the sky to violently slam his forehead against the concrete pavement, weeping hysterically that he had eyes but completely failed to recognize the towering grandeur of Mount Tai. The broken family leader wailed to his trembling clan that they had foolishly mistaken this sacred ground for a basic spirit vein, entirely failing to realize that this estate was actually the supreme convergence point of the immortal's boundless wealth and cosmic fortune. What boundless wealth and cosmic fortune are you people even talking about? I asked, holding up a handful of metal coins with an expression of supreme, deadpan-faced blindness, dryly wondering if they were losing their minds over the grand total of 5 cents I had just successfully scavenged from a discarded soda can. The Ouyang family head let out a loud, reverent gasp at my words, frantically whispering to his elders that the immortal was so profoundly humble that he actively valued the spiritual weight of 5 simple coins, loudly declaring that this was the absolute proof that the great Tao is fundamentally simple. Everyone in the Ouyang clan, drop to your knees and prostrate yourselves before the immortal this instant. The patriarch fiercely commanded his people, wildly shouting that they were absolutely not here to steal residential territory today, but had traveled across provinces for the sole purpose of becoming my absolute, unyielding disciples. Within a single heartbeat, every single member of the legendary Ouyang family, including the arrogant young master, the goateed elder, and the elite guard detail instantly dropped to their knees in a flawless, synchronized line, burying their faces in the dirt before my recycling bag. Immortal, I beg of you, please graciously accept the total and absolute submission of my entire Ouyang lineage, as we are completely willing to humble ourselves and guard your majestic gates, since even acting as your lowest errand boys would allow our unworthy souls to bask in your divine, immortal aura. The Ouyang family head frantically wept, his voice echoing across the courtyard as I looked down at his prostrate clan with an expression of supreme, deadpan-faced blindness, letting out a heavy, deeply sarcastic sigh before calmly informing the fanatical patriarch that their martial arts prowess was simply way too advanced and dangerous for my liking, meaning I was deeply terrified they would accidentally smash my cheap porcelain bowls if allowed inside the house. I casually massaged my temples and adjusted my recycling bag, dryly suggesting that since this massive residential villa area was so obscuringly large that cleaning the grounds every single day had become a thoroughly exhausting chore, the Ouyang family could instead fully contract the intense manual housekeeping labor for all 88 luxury properties across the estate. Understood. Your word is our absolute command. For this is precisely a grand, heaven-sent opportunity for our Ouyang family to properly cultivate our undisciplined minds and bodies through physical labor, and to be granted the ultimate privilege of serving the immortal is our highest family honor. The patriarch ecstatically shouted, prompting me to celebrate internally, because securing top-tier, expert martial arts, housekeeping services, absolutely free of charge, meant I had officially hit the ultimate jackpot of a lifetime. Standing nearby, Lord Long could only stare in sheer, jaw-dropping awe, breathlessly whispering to the wind that my effortless ability to psychologically subdue a legendary, Hostile martial arts clan was an existential feat, far more terrifying than the deployment of a literal nuclear weapon. With the ancient warriors enthusiastically scrubbing the sidewalks, I was finally able to sit down and quietly enjoy a peaceful meal in complete, unbothered tranquility. Internally, noting with a smug smirk that these dangerous zealots actually cleaned the property remarkably well, though my peace was instantly shattered the following morning when the glitching system interface flashed a notice that my daily task was to do one good deed a day, causing me to groan aloud that this arbitrary moral requirement was way too difficult. I stepped onto the bustling city streets under the blazing sun, internally debating how on earth I was supposed to locate a meaningful good deed that would cost me absolutely zero financial capital, avoid incurring complex social favors from strangers, and remain purely focused on helping others for the raw, uninterrupted joy of it. Right on cue, the mechanical tone of the broke-ass system pinged inside my brain to officially issue the daily mission, explicitly instructing me to assist a fellow citizen in recovering a lost personal item in exchange for a magnificent reward of one completely free cup of chilled plum juice. A free cup of premium plum juice in this blistering summer heat, I mentally shouted, my eyes instantly lighting up with unyielding determination as I resolved to throw my entire soul into this quest. Noticing a moment later, a young woman radiating an immensely noble, upper-class temperament frantically scanning the crowded plaza in a state of sheer, anxious desperation. Suddenly, a sketchy thief wearing a low-slung baseball cap aggressively brushed past her shoulder, violently sketching her designer handbag before sprinting away into the crowded market as the horrified woman shrieked for someone to catch the robber, because she was being violently mugged. The frantic criminal came barreling down the exact sidewalk where I was standing, fiercely screaming for me to get the hell out of the way and not block his escape route, but the exact millisecond he drew within arm's reach of my position, he suddenly froze as the imposing figure of Lang Feng slowly and silently stepped out from behind my shoulder like a spectral manifestation of death. The moment the thief locked eyes with the terrifying, unyielding gaze of the legendary god of war, the hairs on his arms instantly stood on end with pure, primal survival instinct, causing the panic-stricken criminal to decisively slam the stolen handbag onto the pavement directly in front of my tattered sneakers, pull a sharp 90-degree turn, and desperately sprint down a completely different alleyway. Holy crap, that absolute monster of a bodyguard has the eyes of the king of special forces, and there is no way in hell I am going to die in a dirty alleyway today. The fleeing thief internally panicked as his footsteps faded into the distance. I stared at the designer purse at my feet, dryly wondering if having your terrifying subordinate scare a criminal to the point of psychological collapse legally counted as helping others for pure joy. Right as the system chimed to confirm that the host had successfully assisted someone in recovering a lost item, announcing that the daily task was officially completed and the delicious reward had been directly deposited into Lang Feng's insulated thermos. I believe this expensive bag belongs to you, I calmly said, picking up the purse and handing it back to the breathless noblewoman, who instantly gasped in absolute, starstruck awe, wildly proclaiming that I was a true, selfless, cinematic hero of the modern age. She lunged forward to prevent me from walking away, desperately begging me to accept a token of her eternal gratitude, as she aggressively thrust a premium black credit card into my face, frantically announcing that it contained 50 million yuan of unblocked capital and imploring me to take it. No, absolutely not. I merely intervened in passing, and I am physically unable to accept your massive hoard of cash, because I am a pure, dedicated poor person who completely despises the corrupting nature of money, I fiercely argued, pushing her hand away while she stared at me with a look of fanatical worship, internally whispering that rejecting 50 million yuan proved my soul existed on a completely celestial level, comparing my aloof, unbothered temperament to the sacred snow lotus plant treasured by her royal family. It turned out, the noblewoman was a literal foreign princess, and my aggressive rejection of her wealth instantly launched her into a state of crazy, unhinged romantic pursuit, resulting in her buying out the massive mansion directly next door to my estate and showing up at my front gate every single day carrying gourmet, multi-course feasts meticulously prepared by her private royal chefs. Your Highness, I genuinely do not possess the free time to indulge in your royal banquets today, because I have to manually wash a giant pile of dirty laundry, I thoroughly complained, holding up a bucket of tattered clothes only for her eyes to flash with fanatical excitement as she shrieked that being allowed to wash my garments was her supreme historical honor, desperately trying to grab the bucket while boastfully shouting that her royal laundry detergent was exclusively formulated using pristine alpine spring water. Before she could touch the fabrics, the gates violently rattled as the dignified, high-powered female CEO of the Qing Group stormed onto the driveway, her face contorting with pure, unbridled jealousy as she furiously screamed that it was an absolute tragedy that a billionaire executive like herself had to physically fight a foreign monarch just to wash clothes for a broke loser. He is officially my legally bound fiancé, and I am the only woman on this earth who possesses the right to wash his laundry using my remarkably simple, domestically produced washing powder that perfectly matches his humble, down-to-earth temperament. The corporate tycoon fiercely roared, prompting the princess to let out a loud, contemptuous huff, mockingly reminding her rival that her country's ancient laws legally permitted polygamy, arrogantly declaring that a common businesswoman could never grant me supreme royal status, a sovereign throne, or an entire sovereign nation to rule. I give him something infinitely more valuable than a cold throne, because I give him the absolute, unyielding freedom to eat cheap street food at dirty stalls whenever his heart desires. The CEO passionately countered, and within seconds, the two stunning, world-class beauties actually escalated into a chaotic, screaming physical catfight right on my front doorstep, wildly tearing at each other's hair while violently wrestling over my torn t-shirt and smelly socks. The surrounding atmosphere descended into absolute, unhinged madness as the rich scents of expensive French perfume, industrial laundry detergent, and aggressive physical sweat all tightly intertwined in the summer air, forcing me to clutch my head in sheer, existential terror as I internally wept to my mother that I just wanted to quietly be a broke loser. The terrifying saga reached a global climax when the king of the princess's sovereign nation caught wind of his daughter's chaotic romantic situation, and to personally extend his profound gratitude to me for saving her life and demonstrating such noble, incorruptible character. The reigning monarch personally flew his private luxury jet directly into the capital's international airport. Respected and honorable Mr. Bai, to properly thank you for your celestial deeds, I am fully prepared to officially deed you ownership of a massive gold mine located within our borders, which boasts a guaranteed annual output exceeding 10 billion yuan. The king passionately announced as he arrived at my gate, falling to his knees alongside his ministers and begging me to accept the fortune. Lord Long and Elder Chen instantly erupted into joyous cheers, loudly congratulating their master for achieving such immense global wealth, right as the system's emergency sirens began violently blaring inside my skull, frantically warning that the host's account was about to be forcibly deposited with a multi-billion yuan gold mine, a catastrophic event that severely violated the core broke loser principle and would trigger the ultimate obliteration protocol in exactly 3 seconds. A gold mine worth 10 billion yuan. I am literally going to be blasted out of existence by this glitching AI. I internally shrieked in pure, unadulterated terror, instantly executing a flawless tactical maneuver by sprinting across the grass, climbing directly over the high backyard brick wall of the villa, and running away into the wilderness at maximum velocity. Staring at the empty space where I had just been standing, the foreign king was instantly moved to tears of profound spiritual reverence, weeping to his staff that a man who would literally flee from a multi-billion-dollar gold mine just to escape the shallow hustle and bustle of the secular world was a true, modern-day living saint. Even his frantic, wall-climbing, running posture is so uniquely elegant and full of hidden martial arts wisdom. Could it be that the Grand Master is currently fleeing to the mountains to officially become a holy monk? The emotional monarch gasped, entirely unaware that I was actually hiding inside a structurally compromised, ruined ancient temple in the far outskirts of the suburbs for 3 agonizing days, desperately shivering in the dark until the terrifying system warning was finally lifted. The digital interface chimed with a smug tone, congratulating the host for successfully escaping the gold mine annihilation crisis, but coldly added that given the undeniable historical fact that the host had been aggressively fought over by 2 stunning beauties within the past 24 hours, I was legally suspected of engaging in excessive hedonistic enjoyment, meaning the system would immediately initiate a strict punishment protocol. The automated voice strictly declared that for the next 3 days, my staple food intake would be exclusively limited to plain steamed buns and bitter pickles, prompting me to sigh in relief that at least the buns were completely free of charge, before suddenly remembering my reward and frantically asking where on earth my chilled plum juice was. We are deeply sorry, but the free cup of plum juice was already entirely consumed by your bodyguard Lang Feng during your frantic escape, the system dryly responded, leaving me to aggressively chew on a dry bun while glaring at my subordinate. After enduring the excruciating 3-day punishment period inside the dusty, spiderweb-ridden temple ruins, I finally managed to survive the system's dietary restrictions and happily stepped out of the rotten wooden doors to embrace the fresh air, only to be instantaneously surrounded by a massive, raging mob of furious citizens who pointed their fingers at my face and fiercely screamed for the crowd to catch the legendary scammer. "Give me my hard-earned money back this instant, you monster. Give me back my entire life's retirement pension," an elderly man hysterically wailed, while a middle-aged woman aggressively shook her fists, fiercely demanding to know why I had blocked her social media profile after explicitly promising that she would become fabulously wealthy if she just paid my exclusive online membership fee. Everyone, I swear to you on my life that you have completely and utterly mistaken me for someone else, because I am so profoundly impoverished that I can't even afford to top up my own basic cell phone bill, so how on earth could I possibly make any of you rich? I frantically yelled back, throwing my hands in the air while desperately trying to explain that I had never scammed a single copper coin from a human being in my entire life. Right as the screaming crowd suddenly fell, dead silent, and parted down the middle to form a wide path for a massive, heavily overweight man who came waddling forward while surrounded by a menacing squad of burly, black-suited bodyguards. Who on earth dares to illegally impersonate my hard-earned title and maliciously swindle innocent citizens out of their life savings in this neighborhood? The towering, heavily guarded fat man bellowed as he tore through the crowd, causing the starstruck victims to instantly gasp in relief and shout that their beloved master Bai Yi had finally arrived to save the day. The raging mob aggressively pointed their fingers at my face, jeering that the ragged beggar squatting in the dirt was clearly a low-level fraud, prompting the incredibly arrogant imposter to look down his nose at me while loudly mocking where a pathetic street rat like myself had crawled out from, sneering that I should take a long look at my own reflection before trying to copy his elite status. I exclusively travel across the country in a custom-built Rolls-Royce and reside inside a sprawling luxury palace, but just look at you, you filthy vagrant. Is your entire tattered outfit even worth a single $5 bill? The fat man cackled, causing me to blink in complete, unbothered nonchalance as I casually inspected my scuffed footwear and dryly replied that if one didn't meticulously calculate the heavy structural depreciation of these ancient rubber flip-flops, the total market value of my clothing was probably sitting at a clean $3.50. Do you hear that, everyone? The absolute peasant just admitted he's nothing but a broke loser, so how on earth could the real world-famous Master Bai Yi possibly be this pathetically poor? The imposter triumphantly roared to the sky, instantly inciting the furious victims to wave their fists and chant for the crowd to violently beat me into a pulp. Just as the angry mob was about to launch a physical assault against my position, the synchronized, deafening screech of high-performance ceramic brakes violently echoed across the pavement as a fleet of luxury armor-plated vehicles skidded to a halt, and President Lin, Master Long, and the God of War, Lang Fang stepped onto the asphalt with completely dark, murderous expressions radiating from their faces. The fat fraud, entirely oblivious to the imminent danger, offered a casual wave and sleazily shouted, "Yo, if it isn't Little Lin from the corporate district, hurry up and bring your associates over to pay your proper respects to the true master." President Lin's veins violently throbbed against his temples as he realized someone possessed the ultimate terminal stupidity to explicitly impersonate his supreme benefactor, coldly whispering that since two identical identities had manifested on the same street, it would be remarkably easy to settle the ground truth. "Secretary Lee, bring out the corporate capital immediately," the tycoon commanded, and three massive, reinforced silver security briefcases were slammed heavily onto the ground and popped open to reveal a staggering mountain of bright red, brand-new, uncirculated 100 yuan bills, totaling a cool 100 million yuan in raw cash, the massive pile emitting the intensely alluring scent of fresh mint and premium currency ink under the blazing afternoon sunlight. President Lin turned to the crowd, proudly announcing that the authentic Mr. Bai Yi naturally treats massive wealth like worthless dirt, declaring that whichever of the two candidates could face this intoxicating mountain of cash without showing a single shred of human emotion or greed would be legally recognized as the true master. 100 million yuan in raw cash. The fat imposter hysterically screamed, his eyes instantly turning bloodshot as his professional facade completely shattered into pure, unadulterated greed, causing him to violently fling his body onto the briefcases while wildly laughing that he was rich and shouting that his overwhelming lust for the money proved he was the real entity. On the completely opposite side of the plaza, the exact millisecond the fresh currency was unveiled, my face instantly turned a ghostly, deathly shade of pale as a wave of absolute physiological nausea washed over my body, my brain processing the sight of the money as if I were staring directly into a glowing pile of highly radioactive, life-threatening nuclear waste. Right on cue, the mechanical alarms of the broke-ass system violently blared inside my skull, frantically warning that it had detected an extremely high-concentration wealth radiation zone and strictly ordering the host to stay away immediately. Otherwise, a forced projectile vomiting protocol would be automatically initiated to protect my destitution. Ah, get that disgusting garbage away from my face this instant. Quick, close the cases and haul it away because the suffocating smell of corporate copper is literally going to choke me to death. I hysterically shrieked, clutching my stomach while furiously yelling that Brother Lin was actively trying to commit first-degree murder against my soul and begging him to burn those dirty paper things to ashes. The surrounding crowd fell into a state of absolute, jaw-dropping silence as they witnessed my genuine existential terror, with President Lin pointing a triumphant finger at my shivering form and proudly declaring that even when presented with 100 million yuan, the master still experiences profound physical illness and avoids it like a literal plague, proving to the world that only a true, celestial saint could possess a profound physiological aversion to wealth. Holy crap, our small minds completely failed to understand what a true, legendary master looks like, especially since the ugly way that greedy fat guy pounced on the briefcases just now was absolutely hideous. A weeping victim shouted, causing the entire mob to violently bow their heads toward me in deep shame as they realized they had horribly blamed a saintly master. Meanwhile, the oblivious imposter was still clutching the stacks of currency and laughing like a complete fool when he suddenly felt the fabric around his neck violently tighten as Master Long effortlessly hoisted him into the air with a single hand like a pathetic, squawking little chicken. "Let me go. I have millions of dollars now and I will happily give you half the cut," the scammer wheezed, but the martial arts titan merely offered a cold, ruthless glare, demandingly asking how many literal lives the criminal possessed if he thought he could safely ruin the supreme reputation of the master. Lang Feng stepped forward, tapping his tactical tablet to announce that he had successfully uncovered the fraud's true identity as Wang Ergu, a notorious, repeat international con artist, prompting President Lin to coldly declare that since this parasite possessed such a profound passion for playing with dirty money, they would immediately deport him to the deepest regions of Africa to spend the rest of his natural life working inside the dangerous, illegal underground coal mines so he could experience what true darkness actually felt like. No, I absolutely do not want to go to the coal mines. I want to go back to my house. I swear I am the real master. Wang Ergu hysterically wailed as the black-suited security detail ruthlessly dragged his weeping body toward an unmarked van. Now that the massive misunderstanding was completely cleared up and the criminal was appropriately dealt with, the guilt-ridden victims turned their eyes toward the corner where I was still squatting and violently shivering from the wealth radiation, their hearts overflowing with immense respect and deep remorse. Master, we were completely wrong. Our worldly eyes were totally blind to your divinity. An elderly auntie sobbed, frantically pulling out a handful of crinkled paper bills and begging me to accept a small financial compensation they had scraped together, causing me to recoil in pure terror, as I fiercely screamed that if anyone dared to hand me a single piece of money, I would literally die right in front of their faces. Stop, stop. Handing paper currency to the master is the ultimate, insulting spit in the face of his spiritual integrity, for Sir only accepts pure, unadulterated sincerity. A fanatical classmate loudly warned the crowd, causing the old auntie's eyes to flash with instant comprehension as she began nodding her head like a maniac. Like a street magician performing a high-level illusion, she reached behind her back and dramatically pulled out a massive, heavy silk banner, unfurling it to reveal 4 crooked, violently embroidered large characters that loudly read, "Peerless God of Poverty," followed by a line of smaller text proudly declaring that I treat money like dirt, take supreme pride in my destitution, and shall be immortalized forever. Ha ha ha! Let us all chant our eternal gratitude to the peerless God of Poverty. The crowd joyously cheered, leaving me to stare at the ridiculous fabric in absolute, eye-twitching speechlessness, internally screaming about whether this was supposed to be a compliment or a malicious curse designed to ensure I never financially turn my life around for the rest of eternity. Naturally, the glitching automated interface inside my mind chimed with immense pride, enthusiastically announcing that the host had successfully obtained the highest honorary title within the global broke loser domain, and because the system was deeply gratified by this cultural achievement, it was immediately rewarding me with a permanent digital patch that could be sewn onto any physical part of my body to permanently increase my shabby, destitute temperament by a full 100%, causing me to look up at the heavens and groan about what an absolute sin my existence had become. Things escalated further into the realm of the absurd, because after I received that embarrassing title, President Lin became completely convinced that my natural aura of treating money like absolute dirt was the literal, stabilizing spiritual anchor required to maintain the global economy's morale, resulting in his security guards physically dragging my protesting body directly into the grand auditorium of the Global Financial Summit. I sat at a luxury banquet table surrounded by international tycoons, aggressively stuffing free appetizers into my face while internally noting with a grimace that these rich people desserts were way too sweet and tasted vastly inferior to the half-eaten, stale-baked flatbread I had happily scavenged from a dumpster yesterday, though I continuously reminded myself that since the food was technically free, I should eat as much as humanly possible to save on tomorrow's grocery budget. Oh, tell me, President Lin, is this pathetic, drooling street rat genuinely your country's secret economic weapon, or is he just a random beggar who only knows how to sneakily steal desserts from the buffet? A smug billionaire named Smith mockingly laughed from across the aisle, arrogantly sneering that the Lin Group must be completely bankrupt if they relied on a vagabond. Smith, you better watch your absolute mouth when speaking of divinity. President Lin fiercely snapped back, before offering a brilliant, knowing smile to the assembly, and loudly explaining that Mr. Bai was actually analyzing the complex real-time trends of global grain futures through the spiritual act of eating. I nearly choked on my cake, internally groaning that I was just a starving ghost trying to get a free meal, while Smith let out a loud snort of disbelief, pointing his expensive gold pen toward the giant LED screen scrolling real-time K-line stock charts in the center of the venue. The tech mogul boastfully highlighted a prominent red curve that was slowly climbing across the digital display, proudly announcing to the international investors that this was Elephant Tech, the multi-billion-dollar enterprise his conglomerate was about to officially acquire, bragging that its market momentum was entirely unstoppable. I looked up from my plate, letting out a long, deeply exhausted sigh as I stared at the bright red line, casually muttering to myself that the color of that corporate curve looked exactly like the sickly, rotten cabbage leaves I had been forced to eat during my temple punishment, noting with a grimace that just staring at that unlucky shade made me feel incredibly nauseous. The exact millisecond the final word left my lips, the massive electronic chart acted as if it perfectly understood human speech. The soaring, multi-billion-dollar curve instantly locked up and took a horrifying, 90-degree vertical dive straight off a financial cliff, the digital line instantly shifting into a sickly, miserable shade of rotting green. Within seconds, emergency sirens blared across the venue's speakers as global financial news anchors broke into the feed, frantically reporting breaking news that the chairman of Elephant Tech had just been arrested by federal authorities for suspected high-level fraud, causing the company's stock price to flash crash by a mind-blowing 99% before being permanently delisted from the global market. My $50 billion. My entire corporate acquisition is completely gone. I am totally bankrupt. Smith hysterically screamed, collapsing onto the carpet while President Lin erupted into a fanatical laugh, loudly proclaiming that the benefactor's words were absolute gold, fiercely declaring that if Master Beggar decrees a stock is green, then even the King of Heaven himself couldn't stop it from plunging into the abyss. At that moment, a massive foreign oil tycoon who completely despised the supernatural strode over with a look of intense skepticism, loudly barking that the tech crash was an absolute, mathematical coincidence and demandingly asking me what my divine vision predicted for his beloved black gold oil stock, proudly boasting that the enterprise was his personal lifeblood. I casually glanced up at his corporate ticker, offering a relaxed nod while noting that this particular line looked incredibly red and fiery, dryly commentating that the festive color made me feel like the stock was about to completely explode and make a massive fortune for his family. The giant venue screen violently shook once more as if struck by a localized earthquake. The moment the words "make a fortune" echoed from my mouth, the oil company's promising stock line acted as if it had suffered a massive stroke, twitching erratically across the grid before executing a catastrophic, vertical dive into absolute zero. A breathless reporter screamed through the live broadcast that a rogue meteorite had just literally struck the company's largest oil field in real time, completely erasing their global reserves in a flash of fire and forcing the board to declare immediate, unbacked bankruptcy. "Oh, you absolute devil. You maliciously stated that my enterprise would make a fortune." The ruined oil tycoon shrieked, tearing at his hair in pure psychological agony, while I held up my hands in confusion, sheepishly explaining that I had genuinely just wanted to bless his finances and internally wondering if my mouth had been struck by an ancient tribal hex. After witnessing 2 consecutive, instantaneous, multi-billion-dollar market failures, the collective expressions of every single Wall Street tycoon and banking magnate in the venue instantly transformed from condescending disdain into a state of extreme, fanatical madness. Within a single heartbeat, a raging mob of the world's wealthiest billionaires violently surrounded my banquet table, desperately clawing at my tattered clothing and wildly screaming for me to grant them the honor of a curse. "Master, I beg of you, please curse my entire portfolio as complete garbage. Say my tech stock is entirely worthless." One banking CEO hysterically wept, while another violently shoved him aside, screaming for the master to spit directly on his face and call his corporate ticker unlucky. A desperate real estate mogul fell to his knees, loudly proclaiming that if Daddy Bai would just look at his company and decree it would go bankrupt by tomorrow morning, he would happily marry his eldest daughter to me on the spot, forcing me to stare at them in absolute horror while internally asking if these elite capitalists possessed a deep, hidden masochistic tendency. "Line up in an orderly fashion. Everyone line up immediately." President Lin loudly managed the chaos like a concert promoter, fiercely announcing to the billionaires that a single master-level curse would cost them exactly 10 million yuan, before rapidly correcting himself to shout that it would actually cost half a steamed bun, proudly reminding the tycoons that the benefactor treats paper currency like worthless dirt and strictly accepts food as legal tribute. I was completely and utterly forced into doing business for the global financial elite, frantically flailing my arms in front of the flashing electronic stock screen while pointing at random tickers and shouting that this company was absolute garbage, that even a stray dog wouldn't buy their assets, and that this particular curve looked like a giant piece of shit, finally bringing the chaotic global financial summit to an end as the market trembled beneath my feet. The entire global economic landscape had been violently reshuffled and torn to pieces, all because of the terrifying, market-annihilating words that had tumbled out of my mouth, leaving me completely drained as I slumped tiredly into the plush leather seats of President Lin's stretched luxury limousine, rasping out in a thoroughly hoarse, dry voice to ask if Brother Lin could please just buy me a simple $1 bottle of mineral water since my throat was literally smoking from cursing corporate stock tickers all day. My grand benefactor, a deity of your current astronomical net worth, can literally alter a sovereign nation's entire GDP just by opening his mouth, so buying a cheap bottle of water is simply too tacky for your status. President Lin enthusiastically beamed, waving his hands dramatically as he casually informed me that the Wall Street tycoons, to deeply thank me for the divine grace of my financial insults, had just jointly gifted me a massive, completely uninhabited private island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Before I could even process this nightmare, a flashing crimson digital interface erupted inside my vision as the broke-ass system screamed a red alert warning, frantically announcing that it had detected a catastrophic, national-level asset gift and ordering the host to refuse the deed immediately. Otherwise, a forced space exile protocol would be instantaneously initiated to blast my physical body out of Earth's orbit. Damn it all, I absolutely do not want a stupid tropical island. I literally just want a single, $1 bottle of generic mineral water, and I will even legally borrow that $1 from you just to stay poor. I hysterically shrieked, and in a desperate bid to escape the terrifying generosity of these evil capitalists, I didn't hesitate to use a sudden pit stop for a bathroom break to stealthily slip out of a cracked back window, completely unaware that I was jumping directly out of the tiger's den and straight into a ruthless wolf's lair. Hey, look what we have here. The legendary living god of wealth of Hua Xia. A cold, menacing voice chuckled from the shadows of a derelict warehouse as a squad of heavily armed bandits stepped out, their leader sneering that rumor claimed I was wealthier than an entire sovereign nation, while boastfully declaring to his men that even if the wealthy Lin family refused to pay a hefty ransom, the legendary black credit cards hidden on my person would be more than enough to feed their criminal syndicate for a lifetime. Search every single inch of this pathetic loser, and dig out all his elite black cards, Swiss bank drafts, and hidden luxury assets. The boss barked, prompting two burly lackeys to instantly rush forward and aggressively pat me down from head to toe, only for their thuggish expressions to slowly contort into a state of sheer, bewildered confusion, as they frantically looked back at their employer and stuttered that they had found absolutely nothing. What do you mean there are no cards, you idiots? And what about piles of cash, signed checks, or multi-million-dollar luxury watches? The boss furiously roared, his face turning bright red, but the trembling lackey desperately explained that there wasn't a single item of value on my entire body, stammering that besides a sweaty, threadbare tank top held together by a cheap anti-theft patch, the only piece of technology I possessed was the incredibly ancient, severely chipped Nokia 1100 brick phone he was currently holding up, complete with a violently cracked glass screen. Turn the ancient relic on right now and check his digital banking accounts, the boss commanded with an eye twitch, and after a few moments of furious button mashing, the henchman excitedly shouted that he had successfully cracked the device, only for his voice to instantly drop as he read the screen, awkwardly announcing that the Alipay balance was exactly zero, the WeChat balance was exactly zero, and the only notable text message was an automated overdue warning from China Mobile, stating that I currently owed them a whopping $1.20. Wait, boss, I found one specific number on this device that is astronomically high. It's absolutely massive, the lackey suddenly yelled, causing the gang leader's eyes to flash with intense greed as he demandingly gasped if it was a secret offshore bank deposit, only for the henchman to sheepishly murmur that it was actually just my high score on the classic mobile snake game, which apparently broke the standing world record. Are you absolutely kidding me right now? Especially since a legendary financial tycoon who just single-handedly controlled the global financial summit is sitting around playing Snake on a broken Nokia brick phone from the early 2000s. So are you fucking messing with my sanity? The gang leader hysterically screamed, pulling at his hair in absolute psychological collapse. I merely let out a casual sigh, dryly muttering that I had explicitly told them from the very beginning that I was nothing but a broke loser, before politely asking if they could kindly hand the phone back to me because I hadn't actually saved my legendary Snake progress before they grabbed it. If this fraud has absolutely no money, then I am just going to brutally kill the hostage right now, lure those rich idiots from the Lin group over here, and slaughter them all. The boss violently panicked, pointing his weapon at my head while weeping to the ceiling and desperately screaming that nobody should blame his actions because he was only committing these heinous crimes to survive in a cruel, unfeeling world. I stared blankly at the weapon inches from my face, casually commenting that everyone on this earth was just trying to survive, before dryly asking the crying criminal if his organization's funding was truly that tight. Considering the barrel of his firearm was so severely worn out, it looked like scrap metal, and the safety catch was entirely rusted shut. Yee, you can actually tell just by looking, the boss gasped, his jaw dropping in shock as I casually rolled my eyes and continued to break down his life, pointing out that his ragged eye patch clearly cost exactly $9.90 with free shipping from Pinduoduo, because the cheap fabric was completely pilling. You guys really have it incredibly rough, especially since you had to travel all this way just to kidnap a broke guy. Did your upper management even reimburse your basic travel expenses? And are your wife and kids at home actually eating well while you risked your literal life for a few lousy bucks? I softly asked, my words carrying a strange, almost mystical psychological weight that struck directly at the softest, most vulnerable parts of these ruthless bandits' hearts. I can't do this anymore, boss. The hostage is completely right. One of the hardened criminals suddenly wailed, bursting into absolute tears as he sobbed that he hadn't been home to see his mother in 3 long years, while passionately crying that the risk of international kidnapping was simply too high, especially since their illegal syndicate didn't even provide basic social security benefits or a corporate housing fund. No, the truth is, I don't have a choice in this life either, the one-eyed leader wept, and within 10 short minutes, the entire squad of terrifying kidnappers was sitting in a tight circle around my chair, crying bitterly like broken children, until the emotional boss reached into his socks to pull out his crumpled, secret stash of personal survival money. Brother, I had absolutely no idea that a global financial icon could be even more profoundly miserable and destitute than a gang of underground criminals, so please take this 500 yuan and use it to go buy yourself a proper smartphone, the boss sobbed, frantically trying to force the bills into my hands, causing me to violently recoil in pure existential horror as I fiercely screamed for him to take the dirty currency away before he accidentally triggered my system's instant annihilation protocol. Just as the emotional leader insisted on stuffing the paper money into my pockets, a deafening, earth-shattering roar suddenly erupted from outside the warehouse walls as a loudspeaker boomed, warning everyone inside to listen up because they were completely surrounded by the elite security forces of the Lin Group. The heavy warehouse doors were suddenly kicked flying into the air by a furious Lang Feng carrying a military-grade rocket launcher, flanked by Master Long wielding a massive Gatling gun, President Lin shouting through a megaphone, and Elder Chen frantically holding a medical defibrillator, all of them charging into the room with pure, murderous intent. Outside the building, the open concrete space was tightly packed with dense, terrifying rows of main battle tanks and armored combat vehicles. Dozens of heavily armed attack helicopters circled the cloudy sky, and out in the distant international waters, a literal naval aircraft carrier could faintly be seen adjusting its massive cannons directly toward our coordinate. Ha ha ha. A literal aircraft carrier, especially since I just kidnapped a completely penniless, starving broke loser. So, is there genuinely a strategic need to deploy a naval fleet, or are we actively trying to initiate World War III? The gang leader hysterically laughed in sheer, unhinged disbelief, before immediately flinging his weapons onto the floor and screaming that they surrendered because they just wanted to go home and safely farm their village lands. The 5 corporate big shots rushed into the center of the room, expecting a bloody hostage situation, only to find me sitting completely safely on a wooden chair while the terrifying kidnappers were literally kneeling in a row in front of me, weeping and repenting for their sins. My grand benefactor, so, are you completely alright? Are you physically injured? And were you deeply traumatized by these monsters? President Lin frantically gasped, while Master Long roared in a fury that he was going to chop the criminals into tiny pieces and feed them to the ocean fish for daring to touch my person. I am completely fine physically, but I would like to officially file a severe consumer complaint against this kidnapping establishment right now, I calmly stated with a serious expression, causing the panicked rescue team to gasp and ask if I had been brutally tortured or abused behind closed doors. The boxed lunch they provided for me during my captivity was absolutely terrible, featuring only 2 pathetic pieces of old pickled vegetables without even a single braised egg, and the rice was so horribly undercooked that it's a miracle my robust stomach survived. Because anyone else would have starved to death on the spot, I thoroughly complained, fiercely declaring that with this kind of abysmal service attitude, they had absolutely no right to be professional kidnappers, and giving them a solid 1-star review. We are deeply, deeply sorry, sir, for it is entirely our fault for providing such poor hospitality, mainly because we have been continuously on the run from the law, and our operational funds are severely limited. But next time we kidnap you, we promise we will definitely add a juicy chicken leg to your meal. The one-eyed boss desperately apologized from the floor, causing me to violently shake my head and shout that there would absolutely be no next time as he frantically turned himself over to the police. Escorted by a massive, heavily armed detail of Special Forces operators, I finally climbed into the back of an armored personnel carrier to head back to my peaceful villa, internally sighing about the immense trouble of having way too many high-powered connections if even a simple kidnapping experience turned out this incredibly poor. Suddenly, a loud digital siren echoed inside my brain as the system interface flashed a violent purple error, warning that it was being aggressively attacked by an unknown space-time virus, causing its security firewalls to be entirely breached and its core logic database to descend into complete chaos, before an automated voice enthusiastically congratulated the host for unlocking the forbidden infinite gold coin god mode. Before I could even blink, a massive, glittering rain of gold coins began materializing out of thin air right before my eyes, the endless cascade of shimmering metallic currency instantly filling the narrow interior of the armored vehicle's storage room and almost completely burying my physical body beneath a mountain of treasure. Holy crap, system, have you completely lost your mechanical mind? What on earth happened to your strict rule about me having absolutely no money for 3 years? And is this whole thing just a massive entrapment scheme to get me annihilated? I mentally shrieked in absolute terror, before suddenly pausing as I noticed that something felt deeply wrong with the physical coins touching my skin. The massive pile of treasure felt impossibly light, and upon closer inspection, the sharp metallic edges of the gold coins were actively dropping digital pixels into the air, possessing absolutely no scent and feeling as if they were constructed entirely out of hollow air. These are fucking counterfeit digital coins, I angrily realized, my eyes widening in pure horror as I deduced that if the glitching system was spawning fake currency that could actively destabilize the physical world, allowing these items to get out into the public would instantly transform me into the notorious ringleader of a massive global counterfeiting operation, meaning I desperately needed to find a clueless guinea pig to immediately test the bizarre, unknown effects of this glitchy treasure. Speak of the literal devil, and he shall mischievously manifest right before your eyes. A reality I learned the hard way when I glanced toward my villa gate and spotted a thoroughly sneaky, suspicious figure aggressively peeking into my courtyard through a pair of high-powered military binoculars. It was none other than our relentless old friend, Lu Ruyan, who remained pathologically convinced that my entire destitute lifestyle was an elaborate, high-level act, and she had clearly staked out my property to capture concrete visual evidence of my secret luxury lifestyle. Bei Yi, I absolutely refuse to believe that a man of your status genuinely eats cheap pickles and dry steamed buns every single day, and the very second I catch you secretly dining on premium abalone, I am going to ruthlessly expose your fraud to the entire internet, she muttered fanatically, entirely unaware that a glittering, glitched-out gold coin from my system's chaotic overflow had just rolled across the pavement, coming to a dead stop right at her high-heeled feet. I sauntered over with an amused grin, dryly asking if Manager Lu was here to inspect my manual labor once again, while casually telling her that since she worked so tirelessly to spy on me, I would graciously reward her efforts with a shiny gold piece. I knew it. I knew you were secretly hiding an absolute mountain of generational wealth. And look at this breathtaking luster, it's pure gold, meaning I am finally going to be filthy rich and expose this broke loser's hidden stash. She squealed with pure, unadulterated greed, aggressively snatching the artifact. The exact millisecond Lu Ruyan stuffed that fake gold coin into her pocket, the shiny illusion violently dissolved into a dense, swirling cloud of pitch-black bad luck gas that instantaneously enveloped her entire physical body. Just as she managed to open her mouth to hurl a few more arrogant insults at my character, a wild goose flying high overhead happened to precisely drop a massive load of avian excrement, landing with perfect, cinematic accuracy directly onto the bridge of Lu Ruan's nose. Ah, my nose, for it is so unbelievably stinky that I'm suffocating. She shrieked in a total state of blind panic, frantically trying to step backward to wipe her face, only to trip and fall straight down an open, pitch-black sewer shaft. 2 seconds later, a muffled, echoing scream followed by a loud, disgusting splash reverberated from the underground depths, with her distant voice echoing. Help me, it is completely full of giant rats down here. So, who on earth stole the manhole cover? And Bei Yi, you absolute bastard, your money is literally poisonous. I stared at the open hole in utter disbelief, internally sweating that this was absolutely not a gold coin, but rather a literal summons from the Grim Reaper himself, while silently marveling that my system's programming bugs were becoming aggressively hardcore. Before I could even fully process the absurdity of her departure, the system's back-end stability deteriorated even further, causing countless digital fake gold coins to begin multiplying and spreading outside the villa gates like an uncontrollable cybernetic virus. The absolute moment innocent passersby picked up the glittering illusions, the bad luck virus struck instantly, causing ordinary citizens to violently trip over completely flat ground while their smartphones spontaneously exploded into balls of fire. Oh no, this is an absolute disaster, because if this localized glitch spreads any further, the entire municipal population is going to suffer unhinged, life-threatening bad luck. I panicked, immediately initiating an emergency assembly protocol through my communication network, while fiercely ordering my elite contacts that whether they were currently in a high-stakes corporate meeting or actively fighting a war, they needed to get their asses over to my courtyard this very second. Exactly 5 minutes later, President Lin, Master Long, Elder Chen, AG, and the God of War, Lang Feng, appeared in my villa's courtyard simultaneously, looking as though they had literally teleported through space-time to form a protective wall around me. Sir, these are volatile bad luck viruses multiplying across the grid, so we must quickly deploy the authentic gold coin fortune needles embedded on our bodies to forcefully suppress the systemic corruption. President Lin barked with intense determination, prompting the 5 titans to instantly unleash their hidden techniques, violently chanting Xuanji Fortune Needle, Quanji Fortune Suppression, Yiji Fortune Neck, Jiji Fortune Shrink, and my contract. In perfect, deafening unison, 5 blinding beams of celestial light simultaneously erupted from their physical bodies, weaving together in the sky to form a massive, shimmering energy shield that directly vaporized the viral fake gold coins into harmless wisps of black smoke that quickly dissipated into the atmosphere. We are actively tracking the precise source of the malicious virus, and it has been identified as an anomalous IP address originating from the deep future. But our firewalls have successfully intercepted the transmission, even though the host system is currently undergoing a total core crash, Aji frantically reported as he hammered away on a holographic keyboard. As the very last wisp of corruption faded away, the mechanical system panel floating in front of my face finally stabilized, shifting back to its comforting, default shade of neon blue as a digital chime echoed inside my brain. The system interface officially announced that the reboot was successful and the virus had been entirely eliminated, extending its deepest automated apologies to the host and his loyal gold coin envoys for the terrifying scare caused by the programming bug. If a generic, automated apology actually worked in the real world, what on earth would we need the literal police department for, especially since you almost caused multiple civilian fatalities just now? Meaning you absolutely owe me a massive compensation reward, I furiously countered inside my mind. The system chimed instantly in compliance, announcing that an elite compensation reward had been permanently issued to my profile, granting the host a permanent, passive buff known as the Hairline Defender. The official description proudly detailed that no matter how intensely poor, anxious, or sleep-deprived the host became in his daily life, his hair would never fall out or recede a single millimeter, guaranteed to remain permanently thick, luscious, and pitch black for eternity. Holy crap, this is actually the greatest reward in human history, because in this modern era, being profoundly poor isn't scary at all, but going completely bald is an absolute nightmare. I joyously shouted, realizing that with this divine cosmetic buff, I would permanently remain the most stunningly handsome broke bastard in the entire neighborhood. Peace was officially restored to the residential estate, and the 5 high-powered big shots successfully retreated into the shadows, completely hiding their immense merits and global fame as they slipped away. I stood ecstatically in front of my bathroom mirror, happily combing my thick, flawless locks while feeling like I had genuinely hit the ultimate jackpot of a lifetime, completely oblivious to the fact that outside my villa gates, a thoroughly drenched, thoroughly traumatized Lu Ruyan was currently struggling to drag her shivering body out of the sewer pipe, weeping to the wind that my gold coins were all just a fraudulent, poisonous bubble. Just as I was holding on to the system's magnificent never-go-bald reward, fully convinced that I had officially returned to the absolute peak of my physical life, a mysterious, aristocratic old man, surrounded by dozens of burly bodyguards dressed in matching black suits, suddenly materialized in my driveway. Young master, my long-lost young master, for after decades of searching across the globe, I have finally located your presence. The old man hysterically wept, flinging his arms to the sky as he loudly proclaimed that I was the rightful, long-lost genetic heir to the multi-billion-dollar Yi family empire in the imperial capital. Stop right there, old man. Did you accidentally walk onto the wrong cinematic movie set or something? I dryly interrupted, staring at him with a look of supreme sarcasm as I pointed to my ragged clothes and demandingly asked if he had ever seen a wealthy, elite heir casually sunbathing on a dirty porch while picking up plastic recycling bottles for a living. Young master, you must be suffering from severe, trauma-induced amnesia, for you were brutally taken away from the clan back then and have suffered such immense poverty, while the old master's heart has been literally bleeding with guilt. The butler passionately argued, wiping a tear as he announced that they had prepared everything for my return and begged me to come back to the capital to inherit the family's titanic business empire and immediately marry the beautiful daughter of a top overseas financial conglomerate. Glancing past his shoulder, I saw that the capital's Ye family had deployed an incredibly extravagant, mind-bogglingly ostentatious formation just to welcome me back, featuring a literal mile-long line of extended Rolls-Royce Phantoms stretching from my villa gate all the way to 3 intersections away, with rows of professional etiquette ladies dressed in elegant silk kapows standing beside the luxury vehicles while clutching massive bouquets of flowers. Young master, feast your eyes upon this majestic sight, for this is the grand, multi-million-dollar reception the elite Yi family has meticulously prepared to honor your return, the butler proudly announced, but I merely let out an annoyed groan, waving my hands aggressively as I told them to stop blocking the neighborhood road because their fleet of broken luxury cars was completely obstructing my daily bottle-picking route. Hurry up and move these expensive obstacles out of my sight this instant, because I have to cross over to the next neighborhood to collect aluminum scrap before the morning rush, and you parasites are actively delaying me from making my hard-earned pocket money. I fiercely complained, making pocket money through manual labor, when you are actually the supreme heir to the greatest empire in the capital. The butler gasped in absolute horror, and right on cue, the official head of the clan, Yi Tianlong, stepped out of a vehicle, determined to resolve my stubbornness by launching a massive, unyielding money offensive. My dear child, my soul knows you have suffered unimaginable horrors out here in the dirt, so please accept this incredibly small amount of pocket money the Yi family has prepared for your immediate amusement, the patriarch said with a patronizing smile, aggressively thrusting a premium black card containing a staggering 500 million yuan into my face while claiming it was just enough for me to play around with for a lifetime. Before I could even drop my recycling bag to scream about the impending system obliteration countdown, President Lin violently stormed into the courtyard, pointing a furious finger at the billionaire and roaring, "Patriarch Yi, you better cease insulting my supreme benefactor with this pathetic, microscopic pocket change this very second." The tycoon spun around, furiously commanding Secretary Li to immediately mobilize the entire Lin Group's liquid asset reserves to buy out half of the Yi family's corporate subsidiaries across the capital and overseas markets within the next 60 seconds. You, Lin Yaozu, so how dare you actively launch a hostile takeover against my ancient clan? Yi Tianlong furiously stammered, his face turning an angry purple. But President Lin merely offered a cold, mocking laugh, fiercely declaring that half of the Yi family's entire global net worth was nothing but pocket change for his benefactor to casually play with in his spare time. Listen to me very carefully, Yi Tianlong. If you ever dare to insult my master's saintly character with your filthy paper currency again, I will directly deploy my corporate capital to permanently wipe your entire lineage out of the imperial capital's history books. Lin Yaozu thunderously threatened, leaving me to clutch my head in pure psychological agony as I internally screamed that Brother Lin was wasting his massive fortune again. I was completely panicking because all those forced corporate acquisitions would inevitably be calculated as my personal debts by the system, leaving me to wonder how on earth I was supposed to pay off billions of dollars while collecting scrap metal. The entire elite Yi family was completely intimidated into absolute silence by Boss Lin's terrifying superpower of unlimited corporate wealth, but in a final, desperate bid to claim their lost lineage, they strictly insisted on conducting an immediate, authoritative DNA test. Inside the state-of-the-art medical laboratory, the family brought in the country's most respected, highly decorated genetics expert, and I was forcibly subjected to having a large tube of blood drawn from my arm, while the entire Yi clan gathered anxiously around a massive computer monitor, waiting for the digital results to process. This is scientifically impossible, for it completely defies the entire foundation of modern biology. The genetics expert suddenly shrieked, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated terror, as the patriarch grabbed his shoulders and frantically demanded to know if the results proved I was his biological son. The genetic match rate between you two is exactly 0%, but that is completely beside the point, because his cellular DNA structure has entirely surpassed our currently known human dimensions, and his genes are entirely filled with floating gold coin symbols and absolute universal rule codes. The doctor breathlessly screamed, pointing to the screen as he wildly announced that I was absolutely not a biological creature of planet Earth, but rather a supreme, higher-dimensional entity walking among mortals. Right at that moment, the familiar digital chime of my system rang out inside my head, enthusiastically confirming that the host's genes were far too powerful to be measured by humans and had automatically shielded all mortal sequences, resulting in the display of my true identity as a higher-dimensional gold coin being. You guys are being way too noisy, and I explicitly told your entire family from the very beginning that my surname isn't Ye, because my true surname is Keong, as in being completely and utterly poor. I loudly snapped at the stunned billionaires, fiercely declaring that from this day forward, I possessed absolutely zero connection to their elite clan, that I was no corporate heir, and that I was just a simple, broke bastard who quietly wanted to have enough food to eat without being harassed by wealthy parasites. Understood. We completely and utterly understand your divine will, so please calm your immense celestial wrath, great immortal, for we shall never dare to offend your presence again, the terrified patriarch stammered, bowing repeatedly as I stormed out of the laboratory. The moment I left the facility, Yi Tianlong frantically pulled out his phone to manage the corporate fallout, only for his device to instantly vibrate crazily as a barrage of emergency alerts flooded his screen, causing him to collapse onto his knees, as he wailed that the media had already leaked the breaking news of my complete severance from the Yi family. Our entire conglomerate's stock price has instantaneously hit the limit down. The half of our global assets acquired by the Lin Group has been completely sold off at a massive loss, and I just realized I missed out on the ultimate privilege of having a literal immortal deity as my rightful heir. The ruined patriarch wept bitterly to the ceiling. Standing nearby, Lord Long could only sigh in deep, fanatical reverence, whispering that his benefactor was truly far too low-key for this world, considering I didn't even bother to publicize my true identity as a higher-dimensional master. Stop talking your absolute nonsense, because I genuinely just want to quietly be a poor bastard. I thoroughly complained, entirely unaware that at this exact moment, while the scientific community was defining me as a celestial being, and I was celebrating scaring off my cheap billionaire dad, deep within a pitch-black, hidden underground chamber, a mysterious man entirely shrouded in a dark, ominous silken robe was staring intently at a floating virtual screen that displayed my exact real-time coordinates. Just when I thought my peaceful life of destitute tranquility was secured, a sinister, shadowy figure known as Mo Sha was lurking in a dark underground lair, cackling like a stereotypical anime villain as he stared at a floating virtual screen mapping out my location. Finally found them, especially since to think that 5 streams of such majestic, top-tier cosmic luck are gathered in this one small city. So as long as I devour these 5 targets, my devour system will evolve into its ultimate, godlike form, and I will rule this mortal realm. He gloated, his digital interface locking onto Lin Yaozu, Long Xiaotian, Chen Jingren, Ah Jie, and Leng Feng, with a cold, mechanical ping, suggesting a tactical plan to defeat them one by one, before consuming the core source, which, unluckily for him, was me. Disguising himself as a slick, high-rolling investment tycoon, Mo Sha confidently sauntered into the towering Lin Group headquarters, tracking down Boss Lin and internally screaming, "Old thing, your legendary wealth, luck, belongs to me now." So devour and suck his financial destiny completely dry, as he greedily initiated physical contact. The absolute millisecond his hand brushed against Boss Lin, a terrifying, hyperdimensional suction force erupted. But to Mo Sha's absolute horror, he wasn't the one doing the vacuuming. Instead, it felt as if Boss Lin's body was a direct conduit to a bottomless cosmic black hole of pure, unadulterated poverty that instantly began reverse extracting Mo Sha's own luck. Blaring red system warnings flooded his vision, screaming that the target was connected to a universal-level poverty void, causing a catastrophic backflow phenomenon that forcibly deducted Mo Sha's actual real-world net worth to fill the endless abyss, violently draining 10 million yuan from his Alipay, clearing out 500 million from his Swiss bank account, and brutally wiping his entire stock portfolio down to zero. No, stop, for that's my retirement fund and my secret rainy day stash, so let go of me. Mo Sha shrieked in absolute agony, violently tearing his hand away just as his smartphone chimed with a devastating text message notifying him that his current bank balance was negative 250 yuan. His luxury mansions had already been forcefully auctioned off, and his literal underwear had been taken as collateral. Staring at his pale, trembling form, Boss Lin casually tilted his head, offering a beautifully sarcastic smile as he asked, "Mr. Mo, why has your face suddenly turned a lovely shade of green? And do you perhaps lack the financial means to buy a decent meal? So how about I graciously lend you $2 so you can catch the municipal bus?" Which caused the surrounding staff to burst into a chorus of ha 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 ha, while a broke Mo Sha fled the building, weeping that this man was the literal reincarnation of a goddamn poverty demon who could bankrupt a billionaire with a single touch. Refusing to admit defeat, the desperate villain decided to pivot to our resident tech prodigy, Ajay, transforming his physical form into a digital data stream to launch a high-speed mental invasion directly into Ajay's brain through the fiber optic network. If physical absorption fails, I will simply conquer your mind, devour your vast wisdom, and force you to hand over your cosmic luck while you tremble before me. Pathetic mortal. Mo Sha roared digitally, but Ajay, who was casually slurping instant noodles at his desk, merely blinked at the aggressive red skull sprite that suddenly popped up on his monitor, letting out a highly amused chuckle. Oh, a random zombie computer actively delivering itself straight to my firewall. So do you actually dare to act wild on my digital turf? Ajay muttered, his fingers flying across the keyboard in a blinding blur as he executed a lightning-fast reverse tracking sequence, instantly implanting a counter-virus and locking down Mo Sha's incoming data ports. Within seconds, Mo Sha's digital consciousness was utterly paralyzed, leaving him to scream in absolute agony. Why on earth is my brain suddenly full of blasting, unresolvable elderly square dancing music? So turn it off and please stop it. To which Ajay cheerfully replied that since he was already in the system, he had generously pre-installed a permanent, non-skippable positive energy loop player for his uninvited guest. Bleeding luck, and thoroughly humiliated by these continuous defeats, Mo Sha flew into a complete, unhinged rage, charging straight toward my villa complex where he summoned over a dozen horrifying black luck puppets, radiating pure, unadulterated murderous intent. Since covert operations are off the table, we are going to settle this in the broad daylight, so puppets, tear him to shreds, he ordered frantically. But before the shadow creatures could even cross the lawn, a cold, cinematic flash of silver light violently swept across the courtyard. Lang Feng, who had been sitting calmly on a stool meticulously trimming my fingernails a second ago, was suddenly standing directly in front of a stunned Mo Sha, casually waving his ordinary metal nail clippers as he dryly remarked, "These loud toys of yours are actively blocking the sir's morning sunlight." The dozen terrifying, high-tier puppets were instantly sliced into perfect, microscopic cubes, like soft tofu, dissolving into harmless black mist with a single strike, leaving Mo Sha to completely break down mentally, sobbing to the heavens. Is this even a goddamn human being's combat power? Realizing his time was running out, the broken villain decided to put all of his remaining eggs into one final, suicidal basket, rushing straight into my dusty storage room to ambush me while I was taking a peaceful afternoon nap. It is all because of you. So as long as I devour your core system, I can reverse all of this bad luck and turn the tables, he yelled, unleashing his devour system at absolute maximum output to consume my soul, which only caused me to groggily roll over and mumble, "Who is it, and who is stealing my favorite blanket in the middle of the day?" Suddenly, the legendary poor bastard system nestled inside my brain sensed the arrogant aura of a lesser digital parasite, instantly glowing with a dazzling, blinding, crimson gold aura of supreme higher dimensional authority. The system's majestic voice echoed like thunder inside the room, booming, bold. And what kind of wild, low-tier trash system dares to lay its filthy digital hands upon my chosen host? For although this system purposefully keeps the host destitute, it is strictly to temper his divine character. So how dare a worthless bug like you think you are allowed to bully him, meaning get the hell out of our sight, causing Mo Sha's system to wail in terror that it was facing a higher-tier law and a literal rule monster before it was ruthlessly swallowed whole. My system casually digested the data stream, dryly noting that the villain system's taste was thoroughly average and a bit tough to chew, before converting the code into raw energy and granting me a measly +1 to all of my physical stats, a reward it openly admitted was pretty much useless. Having lost his supernatural system, Mo Sha instantly withered into a completely sluggish, painfully ordinary, balding middle-aged man who collapsed onto his knees, weeping hysterically. My system, my generational wealth, and my literal underwear are all completely gone, to which I merely yawned, telling Lang Feng that he was being far too noisy and to throw him out of the estate, making sure he thoroughly mopped the floor clean before he left. Little did I know, right after experiencing that bizarre villain invasion, our hyper-protective tech geek Aji had gone ahead and installed a massive, zero-blind spot, 24/7 global live broadcast network across the entire villa to ensure my safety. Completely oblivious to the fact that a miniature camera in the corner of my storage room was actively blinking with a bright red recording light, I sat cross-legged on my old cot, painstakingly sewing up a massive tear in my favorite pair of trousers. Sigh. New for 3 years, old for 3 years. Patch it up and wear it for another 3 years, I sighed to myself, entirely unaware that my inner monologue was being broadcast to the world, casually noting that the crotch area was a bit drafty, but thank goodness my permanent never-go-bald hair was thick enough to cover the breeze, otherwise things would be deeply awkward. At that exact moment, in Ajay's newly launched global livestream room titled Beggar's Daily Cultivation, the active concurrent viewer count had just shattered all human records by skyrocketing past 1 billion stunned viewers. The live chat went absolutely berserk with fans screaming, "Oh my god, is this genuinely the daily life of the great master Bai Yi? For he is so incredibly down to earth, it's beautiful. And look at the profound structural integrity of that patch. especially since that irregular geometric beauty is a silent, revolutionary mockery of modern consumerism. So are those ordinary pants? Absolutely not. That is a living work of contemporary art representing the ultimate embodiment of a fragmented aesthetic, meaning this is the legendary Beiyi style, and I need to buy it immediately. Just as I neatly tied off the thread, Boss Lin came bursting through the storage room door, his eyes wide with absolute shock as he held up a smartphone that was vibrating continuously with international notifications. Benefactor, a literal financial miracle has just occurred, because the secret video of you hand-sewing your trousers was just leaked online, and the global high-fashion circle has officially exploded into total anarchy. He yelled breathlessly, explaining that the Paris and Milan fashion weeks had urgently canceled their existing lineups to revamp their entire shows around my aesthetic, with every major luxury brand switching completely to the torn-hole, burlap sack style. He added that the exact same 9.9 yuan, free shipping boxer shorts I currently had on had sold out in less than 1 single second across every major global e-commerce platform, officially crowning me as the undisputed supreme king of global influencers. I stared at him in absolute bewilderment, blurting out, "Ha ha ha, I literally just sewed up my raggedy pants. So, do these wealthy people honestly not have proper clothing to wear? And why on earth do they insist on wearing torn rags, just because I do?" But despite my confusion, my massive global fanbase was collectively heartbroken to see their higher-dimensional idol living in a dusty tool shed and eating cheap pickled vegetables. Suddenly, Ajia rushed in as well, his face pale as he shouted, "Sir, this is terrible, because the global fanbase saw how much physical suffering you are enduring, and they have spontaneously initiated a massive, decentralized crowdfunding campaign that is currently skyrocketing at an exponential rate." Explaining that the fans desperately wanted to buy the entire chain of Hawaiian islands to gift to me as a vacation home, and the accumulated capital was already sufficient to purchase half of the Pacific Ocean. Right then, a massive flashing red warning message exploded inside my brain as the system shrieked, "Lethal strike warning, for we have detected tens of billions of dollars in liquid funds rapidly surging directly toward the host's financial name. So host, you must halt this incoming capital immediately. Otherwise, the system will officially judge you as a filthy rich individual and instantly detonate your physical body, sending you straight to heaven." I was instantly scared completely out of my wits, violently snatching Aji's broadcasting equipment and screaming directly into the high-definition lens with actual tears streaming down my face, "Family, my beloved internet family, please stop sending money, for I beg of you to absolutely stop transferring funds to my name, especially since I am not suffering at all. I swear I am really not suffering. I genuinely love eating pickled vegetables every single day, and living in this cramped storage room is my absolute favorite hobby. So this is just my personal lifestyle choice, woo-woo." The massive global audience watching the stream immediately melted into a puddle of emotional empathy, with millions of comments weeping. "Look at him, he is literally crying. So to stop us from overspending our own money, our beloved master is actually threatening his own life with these beautiful lies, and since he is so incredibly considerate of the working class, it breaks my absolute heart. Meaning, since his saintly soul refuses to accept direct financial aid, let us immediately redirect all of these billions into the official Beiyi Charity Foundation to perform global humanitarian work in his holy name." The system chimed in relief, noting that because the tidal wave of wealth had been successfully shifted to a charitable entity, the host's explosive crisis was officially resolved. And given my extremely firm, unyielding attitude in rejecting filthy material riches, it was graciously rewarding me with the legendary Golden Bell shield and iron cloth shirt, granting me a permanent physical defense stat of plus 999. I collapsed backward onto my cot, completely exhausted as I muttered to myself, "I am so utterly spent. So how on earth is being a certified poor man significantly more exhausting than being a literal emperor?" Meanwhile, hiding out in a dingy, roach-infested rented room while eating cheap instant noodles, a thoroughly disgraced Lu Ruin stared at the trending global topics on her phone, her eyes practically popping out of her skull in pure envious rage. Why, and how is this happening? Especially since he is nothing but a poor, pathetic bastard and a total structural fraud. So I am going to single-handedly expose his lies to the public and post his absolute darkest secrets for the world to see. She snarled maniacally, frantically scrolling through her digital photo album until she located an old, secretly taken paparazzi photograph of me from years ago, depicting my disheveled self squatting humbly by a dusty roadside to pick up a dropped steamed bun to eat, which she immediately uploaded directly to the internet with a triumphant click. Look at your pathetic male god, maliciously exposing his utterly filthy habits by eagerly scooping up and eating food that literally fell right onto the dirty ground. Lu Ruin's toxic post screamed across the web, instantly prompting a wave of initial disgust from keyboard warriors who commented, "So incredibly dirty. He possesses absolutely zero basic hygiene. So how does this kind of unwashed person even deserve to be a mainstream idol?" Yet a mere 5 minutes later, the fickle tone of the comment section completely flipped in a staggering cinematic plot twist as fans began weeping. "Oh my god, who knows that every single grain on the plate comes from pure, backbreaking hard work, Mr. Bai Yi is literally leading the nation by example, beautifully teaching us the sacred value of saving food. I'm actually crying right now because he could clearly own the entire material world with his connections, yet he humbly cherishes every individual grain of rice. So Lu Ruyan, you absolute brainless hater, get the hell out of here. Because what could a materialistic worm like you possibly comprehend about the profound philosophy of nothingness? The fans fiercely declared across the internet, leaving my internet stalker to slam her desk in an envious rage, screaming, "Why on earth does this broke loser get insanely popular no matter what kind of dark secrets I post? And is there absolutely any justice left in this cruel world?" The entire digital space continued to buzz ferociously until the clock struck 7 p.m., at which point a high-profile national news brief suddenly broadcasted across every television station in the country. The anchor solemnly announced that a remarkable young man named Bai Ye had gone completely viral for stubbornly insisting on a strict, minimalist lifestyle that rejected all forms of modern extravagance and waste, praising me as an official role model for contemporary youth and a pristine paragon of diligence and thrift that the entire populace should actively emulate. Upon witnessing this unprecedented level of official state validation, Boss Lin, Lord Long, and Elder Chen leaped out of their seats in pure ecstasy, crisp shivering as they saluted the television screen and roared, "Official state certification achieved. The benefactor's celestial social status is permanently secured," meaning from this very day forward, anyone who dares to smear our master's name is actively declaring war against the highest authorities. While I could only bury my face in my hands, groaning internally that my dreams of maintaining a quiet, low-profile existence were now officially and systematically dead. Right on cue, my internal system let out a highly sarcastic digital ding, mocking me with, "This is precisely what the ancient texts call planting a willow tree by complete accident only for it to grow into a massive canopy of shade. You tried so unbelievably hard to act like a broke nobody, and instead you accidentally transformed into a literal, globally revered poverty god. So host, just accept your ridiculous fate." Time flew like a bullet train straight to the very last month, before my grueling 3-year cultivation deadline, a period where my status had officially peaked from a generic broke bastard into the ultimate tier of cosmic destitution, triggering the system to drop a catastrophic red alert boundary. Host, the final, absolute test of your earthly journey has arrived, and to ensure the flawless perfection of your 3-year training arc, the system hereby issues the ultimate, localized mission, stark naked, coming and going, without a single material attachment. Stark naked, especially since you are seriously demanding that I go full-on streaking through the metropolitan district. I screamed back in absolute psychological horror, pointing out that I now had an official, state-sanctioned idol image to maintain for the youth, but the system coldly overrode my complaints with a terrifyingly rigid mission description. It explicitly dictated that from this exact millisecond onward, my financial existence had to undergo an absolute zeroing process wherein, excluding the single set of ragged clothes currently hanging on my physical body, I was strictly forbidden from owning, renting, or even borrowing a single asset on the planet, warned that if I possessed so much as one extra penny when the 3-year timer expired, my physical soul would be instantly and permanently obliterated from the space-time continuum. You won't even let me sleep on a normal mattress for the next 30 days, so you are actively trying to commit premeditated murder against your own host. I yelled to the empty room, but a few hours later, I found myself standing reluctantly at the villa gates, casting a profoundly sorrowful glance back at the dusty little tool shed I had happily called home for months. Beside me, Boss Lin, Lord Long, and the rest of my wealthy disciples were weeping their absolute eyes out like dramatic anime characters, begging me, "Benefactor, are you truly abandoning us to wander the earth, refusing to live in any of these 88 luxury villas we bought for you? So at the very least, please keep this one plastic lawn chair so you have a place to sit your holy self down." To which I gently slapped Boss Lin's clinging hands away, sighing that these were all just empty, worldly possessions, dryly adding that the cheap chair was literally my only piece of furniture anyway. "I will have our finest artisans frame this sacred plastic artifact right away, for it shall forever remain a legendary seat of honor in our corporate headquarters." Boss Lin vowed through his tears, forcing me to snap that they should just donate it to a local scrapyard where it might fetch 50 cents, though I quickly corrected myself in absolute panic, realizing I couldn't even touch those 50 cents without detonating, so they should just give it away to some poor soul who desperately needed raw plastic. Under the intensely worshipful and profoundly heartbroken gazes of my multi-millionaire entourage, I took a dramatic step out of the Paradise Estate and into the cold, unpredictable night, eventually tracking down the city's most bustling, exhaust fume-choked concrete overpass where I casually laid down a few discarded sheets of local newspaper and collapsed onto the hard ground. Achoo. For so this is the literal, unfiltered taste of absolute freedom, and it is also freezing cold out here. I shivered, only to look up and spot Boss Lin and the others aggressively rolling out premium sleeping bags right next to my newspapers, causing me to blink in absolute disbelief and ask what on earth they thought they were doing. "We are sleeping under the concrete bridge with you, of course, because how could we possibly dare to slumber in comfortable mansions while our master suffers in the elements? Meaning tonight, we shall humbly accompany your soul to spiritually comprehend the vast heavens and the deep earth," they declared with unshakable loyalty, with Master Long nodding sagely as he remarked that the feng shui under this particular overpass was actually magnificent due to being exceptionally well ventilated, noting that sleeping on raw, unyielding concrete was highly beneficial for the human spine. Just as AG's technical division barked into a walkie-talkie, report, for all stray rats within a 500-meter radius have been successfully captured and expelled from the Master's perimeter. The tech prodigy initiated a massive global live stream with the sensationalized title, Undercover Billionaire Group accompanies the supreme poverty god sleeping under an urban bridge. So, is it a total distortion of human nature, or a complete loss of high society morality? By the early hours of the next morning, the once barren concrete overpass had miraculously transformed into a certified 5A-level internet-famous tourist checkpoint, with thousands of passing citizens lining up in massive queues just to take photos of our bizarre encampment, prompting the system to start acting up with unhinged, malicious coding bugs. Suddenly, my daily life transformed into a literal psychological minefield as I attempted to cross an ordinary street, watching in horror as the pavement became densely carpeted with bright, crisp red 100 yuan bills that left absolutely no space for a human foot to tread. My system let out a cackling, demonic giggle inside my skull, taunting, "Hee hee, so go ahead and take a step, host, because the rules dictate that stepping directly onto currency counts as legally owning it, so the exact moment your shoe touches that paper, you will be instantly obliterated into stardust. You absolute dog of a system, you honestly think a cheap trap like this is enough to defeat my survival instincts, so there is not a chance." I roared internally, taking a massive, theatrical breath before executing a flawless, gravity-defying Thomas full air 720-degree spin. Moving like a top-tier, world champion parkour master, I frantically twisted, leaped, and pirouetted through the ocean of cash without a single square inch of my clothing brushing the money, causing the crowd of onlookers to erupt into thunderous applause, screaming, "Incredible, world-class footwork," for this is the legendary technique of passing through a vast field of flowers without a single stray petal touching your body, meaning we have officially witnessed the mythical poverty evasion technique. With only a few agonizing hours remaining until my 3-year deadline finally hit zero, a massive armored cash transport truck unexpectedly blew a giant tire right in front of my face, violently crashing into a concrete barrier as its secure rear doors burst wide open, unleashing an actual tidal wave of loose banknotes that poured out like a localized flash flood about to drown me alive. My system screamed in a final, tempting frenzy, "Host, just give up and accept your rich destiny. Because with this astronomical mountain of liquid capital, you couldn't possibly spend it all in several lifetimes, so just nod your head and let the money claim you." Pushed flat against a brick wall by the literal wall of incoming currency, I stared directly into the crashing wave of wealth with eyes completely devoid of greed, radiating nothing but the fierce, unyielding determination of a man ready to embrace death before failure, trying to aggressively shove unearned wealth down my throat, when there is absolutely not a single chance in hell I will let you win, because I have successfully survived 3 years of absolute hell. And I am absolutely not going to fail at the 1-yard line, meaning I am going to be a poor bastard for the rest of my days, and no one in this universe can make me rich, not even Jesus himself. I said what I said. I thunderously bellowed to the heavens, as if physically shocked and utterly intimidated by my overwhelming, reality-warping aura of absolute poverty. The surging mountain of banknotes miraculously split down the middle and automatically bypassed my body, pooling harmlessly against the bricks as if deflected by an invisible, inviolable biological barrier. Did you hear that deafening declaration? For that is our benefactor's sacred, eternal vow, that he is going to be a poor bastard. So how absolutely heroic, and how utterly earth-shattering. Boss Lin wept, while I merely leaned against the wall, panting heavily with my pockets completely sewn shut like an iron bucket to prevent any stray bills from slipping inside. The 5 titans immediately surrounded me like a royal Secret Service detail, glaring at the surrounding cityscape as if facing a formidable alien threat. When suddenly, the clouds parted to reveal a sleek, pitch-black private military jet slowly descending directly into the middle of the urban intersection. A stunning, blonde, blue-eyed foreign woman holding a glowing, hyper-advanced golden system panel stepped out of the aircraft, her heels clicking on the asphalt as she looked down her nose at me and smirked. Fascinating. To think that a mere mortal could actually resist the psychological temptation fields emitted by my god-tier wealth system, and pretending to be a destitute beggar consistently for 3 long years is a truly wonderful, pathetic farce. Pretending to be poor, when I am literally, factually poor, you absolute psycho. And who even are you to show up out of nowhere and block my morning sunlight? I snapped back with heavy sarcasm, prompting her to draw herself up and proudly announce that her name was Royce, the supreme overseer of the world's dominant god-tier wealth system, declaring that her sole cosmic mission was to prove the absolute truth that money is omnipotent. Your low-tier poor bastard system is mathematically bound to fail, and I am going to ruthlessly devour your system code and your luck. But since you insist on surviving, let us solve your immediate biological survival problem first, meaning the wealth system will immediately purchase every single restaurant, supermarket, convenience store, and even the individual pieces of toilet paper sold in public restrooms within a 500-meter radius of Beiyi, strictly forbidding anyone from providing services or goods to him on pain of instant financial ruin. She commanded, plunging the immediate municipal district into a dystopian economic dictatorship. I tentatively walked over to the nearest corner convenience store to test the waters, only for the shopkeeper to frantically lock the glass doors and yell through the cracks, "Mr. Bai, it is absolutely not that I refuse to sell to you. But that crazy billionaire woman literally bought out my entire corporate franchise and swore that whoever feeds you will go completely bankrupt, so I don't even dare to hand you an overnight steamed bun right now." Leaving Royce to cackle victoriously, taunting that I couldn't even buy a single drop of water to stay alive without her personal written permission, I furiously shouted that she was playing dirty, which instantly caused my billionaire disciples to explode into a protective rage. "You think you can just starve our beloved benefactor to death in our own city, so go ahead and ask the infinite financial power in my hands if our corporate empire agrees to your terms." Boss Lin bellowed, immediately pulling out his secure satellite phone and screaming to his operatives. "Global Temporary Supply Dispatch Center. Here, my absolute command. Immediately. Airdrop, maximum security survival supplies exactly 3 meters above Mr. Baiyi's head, and ensure it consists of the absolute highest grade luxury goods completely unsuited for a poor bastard's humble temperament." Within seconds, the deafening roar of 5 heavy military transport helicopters filled the sky as they hovered directly over the street, dropping a massive, reinforced supply crate that smashed into the asphalt with a bone-rattling thud. "Royce, you might have bought up all the ground assets with your petty funds, but you can't buy the sovereign sky routes of this nation because this is called absolute airdrop freedom, and our naval support forces are already in position at the docks, fully prepared to launch a tactical caviar saturation attack on this position at any time." Master Long roared triumphantly, leaving me to frantically kick at the giant wooden crate, screaming at my own men to get these expensive assets away from me because I couldn't touch them without exploding. "Sir, please be reasonable, because these are critical survival supplies to keep you breathing," Lang Feng argued, but I wildly pushed him back, yelling that this wasn't survival, since this was literal attempted murder via economic technicality. Seeing that her indirect material blockade was being aggressively dismantled by my loyal followers, Royce's face contorted into an ugly snarl as she decided to clash head-on, ordering her system to instantly burn tens of billions of dollars in liquid reserves to crush this pathetic poor ghost into oblivion. "Ah, for today, I am going to personally teach your arrogant high society soul that absolute poverty is also a terrifying kind of power," I shouted back, and the exact moment Royce initiated the massive monetary burn, my poor bastard system seemed to discover its ultimate form of cosmic nourishment, flashing a series of triumphant notifications across my eyes. The system loudly announced that it had detected high-purity money energy and was beginning an immediate reverse extraction process, dynamically doubling my internal capacity and converting her spent funds directly into raw physical power, meaning that for every single dollar she burned trying to crush me, my defensive aura would double in absolute magnitude. My internal energy is rapidly weakening, and the more money I spend against him, the physically weaker I become. Royce gasped, her golden panel flickering wildly as she stumbled backward in absolute terror, realizing to her horror that my pure aura of possessing absolutely nothing on my person was actively absorbing and dismantling her wealth laws. Money is ultimately nothing but heavy, earthly dirt, meaning the wealthier you are, the more burdened and heavy your soul becomes. But I am as light as a floating feather with absolutely no attachments to this mortal plane, so this is my true, unshakable Tao of the poor bastard, I proclaimed, sending a shockwave of spiritual pressure across the asphalt that forced Royce to frantically turn her attention to my companions, screaming, "Fine, I cannot directly suppress your system for now, but I will easily make everyone you love betray your pathetic cause. Lin, Yaozu, I will wire $10 billion to your account this very second if you take your men and abandon this poor ghost immediately." Boss Lin merely burst into a loud, mocking laugh that echoed under the overpass. Pointing a scornful finger at the foreign billionaires, he shouted, "Royce, you are far too naive for your own good, because what is $10 billion compared to the profound, life-altering kindness Mr. Baiyi has shown our families? What we owe our master is an infinite debt of cosmic gratitude, and you can never buy our absolute loyalty with your filthy paper currency, for we have voluntarily chosen to follow him to the ends of the earth to comprehend the great Tao of the poor bastard," the billionaire fiercely declared. "No, for this is impossible, and how can there possibly be things in this world that money cannot instantly buy, especially since money is supposed to be omnipotent, so how can it fail to purchase human hearts?" Royce shrieked as her psychological reality completely shattered, right as my internal clock hit the absolute zero mark and the system let out a deafening victorious roar. Ding. 3-year cultivation mission countdown complete. 3, 2, 1. Mission successfully cleared, leaving a broken, bankrupt Royce to collapse onto the pavement, in total mental ruin as she watched the ultimate triumph of the universe's greatest poor bastard. I was completely wrong from the very beginning. Because money is absolutely not omnipotent in this world, Royce whimpered as her haughty expression shattered into a mask of pure despair, her absolute psychological surrender triggering a deafening, apocalyptic alarm from her own system that boomed throughout the area, announcing that because the host's willpower had entirely collapsed, the ultimate punitive measure of forced conversion into poor bastard mode was being immediately executed. In a dazzling, reality-warping spectacle, her ultra-expensive, custom-tailored designer suit instantly frayed and tore apart into pathetic, threadbare rags right before our eyes, while the multi-million-dollar luxury diamond watch glittering on her trembling wrist spontaneously dematerialized, replaced by a scratched, plastic, $3 digital watch from a cheap street stall. Every single ounce of her vast ancestral wealth and cosmic financial luck was ruthlessly vacuumed into the void, draining her completely dry until she collapsed hopelessly onto the hard asphalt like a discarded ragdoll. Right as my own internal interface flashed a magnificent, blinding neon screen of victory accompanied by a joyous digital chime echoing inside my skull. Ding. Congratulations to the host for perfectly completing the legendary 3-year cultivation arc, especially since the strict training period has officially arrived at its end, and as your ultimate reward, the host is hereby permitted to return to a completely normal human life as the poor bastard system successfully begins its permanent unbinding process, the automated voice proudly declared, causing me to fall to my knees and yell to the heavens in absolute, unadulterated ecstasy that I was finally free from the threat of sudden detonation and could at long last go out into the corporate world to make money openly, like a civilized human being. Eyeing the discarded remnants of the battlefield, my gaze locked onto a stunning, authentic gold luxury watch lying on the ground, prompting me to gasp in pure awe and reach out to grab the priceless treasure while eagerly whispering to myself if this was what true, unrestricted generational wealth felt like, only for a panicked President Lin to instantly lunge forward and scream at the top of his lungs, "Sir, please step away from that object and do not touch it under any circumstances." Staring at my billionaire disciple with an intensely bewildered and highly sarcastic squint, I demandingly asked why on earth he was panicking since the suffocating financial system had already completely unbound itself from my biological soul, but a sweating boss Lin merely shook his head in deep solemnity, nervously explaining that over the course of 3 brutal years, my physical body had already completely adapted to the instinctual muscle memory of a hardcore, destitute, poor bastard, warning me that my physiological resistance to extreme material wealth was now permanently etched into the deepest, subatomic layers of my very soul. Huh, for you've got to be kidding me, and that's literally psychologically impossible, I grumbled dismissively. But the exact millisecond my fingertips brushed against the polished surface of the priceless luxury timepiece, a violent, overwhelming wave of profound physical nausea suddenly erupted from the pit of my stomach, causing my face to turn a bright shade of green as I dryly heaved. Bleg, how disgusting. So forget it. Because this thing is far too aggressively expensive for my digestive tract, and it absolutely does not suit my aesthetic anyway. I wiped my mouth and turned around with a bright, entirely unbothered grin to look at the sobbing, ragged foreign woman shivering on the pavement, giving her a cheerful, friendly slap on the shoulder as I jokingly shouted, "Hey there, girl, welcome to the neighborhood and congratulations, for you have officially become a completely penniless, starving broke bastard just like me. Come on, stand up, because I am going to graciously take you out on your very first professional shift to pick up discarded plastic bottles. So let us start our glorious financial empire completely from scratch together. Ha ha ha." I enthusiastically bellowed as we faced our new beginning.